Chapter 1051. 1051 Different Styles of Different Pathways. 1051 Different Styles of Different Pathways. Upon seeing this scene, Vin Rambus immediately extricated himself from that state of calm, clearly aware that he had fallen into a trap. He also further realized that he was already under some sort of influence. Without any hesitation, he arched his back and his body swelled. His pupils turned vertical, turning from pale blue to golden. His face, the back of his hand, and every inch of his exposed skin grew grayish-white scales. Amidst the screeching sound, the white shirt, black vest, formal coat, and straight trousers that he wore tore apart, revealing the dragon scales beneath. In the blink of an eye, Vin Rambus had transformed into an abnormally massive monster. Aside from his head that remained in the form of a human, the rest of his body had changed completely. It was like a dragon that had yet to fully evolve. The dragon's back was covered in gray-skinned wings, and its limbs were thick. The grayish-white scales were engraved with complicated, three-dimensional mysterious symbols. They extended into the flesh, extending into the surrounding void. It seemed to be a mesh of objects that didn't belong to the real world. It threw anyone who laid their eyes upon it into suffering a form of mental confusion as their thoughts warped. Even one's spirit body would be tainted with all kinds of thoughts that came from deep within one's heart, eager to rip apart and mutilate themselves. This was the spectator pathway's incomplete mythical creature form. For demigods of other pathways, those who weren't at the angel level, they required immense willpower and firm beliefs to fight in their mythical creature forms. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to control the madness and the inclination of losing control. There was a high chance of them immediately losing all rationality and transforming into a monster. However, the spectator pathway was different. They had placate which could treat their minds and souls, so they weren't helpless towards the madness and inclination of losing control. Therefore, as long as the fight wasn't prolonged, they could use their mythical creature form and return to normal at will. Whoosh! All the thoughts in Vin Rambus's subconscious domain boiled over as they churned, identifying the parts of his consciousness that had been altered, purging them out and melting them down into nothingness. Whoosh! The violent winds surged around Vin Rambus's grayish-white dragon avatar. It seemed to come from reality, but also seemed to come from an illusory world. They carried a certain will as they whirled in every direction. Any creature that was embroiled would inevitably be placed into various abnormal states, stand rooted to the ground in a daze, or blindly escape towards the corners of the garden. There would be varying degrees of losing of control as their knees would buckle before they slumped to the ground. Some would even faint immediately and fall into a coma. Others would reveal their most fervent expressions, crowding around the dragon-like attendants. This was a qualitative change in dragon might, which stemmed from a mythical creature form. It went from its original state of placing others in a state of awe to mind deprivation, with even more effects. Seizing the moment when dragon might swept the surroundings, Vin Rambus focused and transformed into illusory, sinister versions of himself. Through the sea of collective subconscious which eluded most beyonders, he approached Gehrman Sparrow on the rooftop and Audrey Hall by the garden's periphery at high speeds. As a spectator, he could tell that the attacker was Gehrman Sparrow just by seeing his face and temperament. At this moment, Audrey was mumbling to herself and compelling herself based on the discussions and warnings from the two demigods, the world and the hermit, above the gray fog. I can't see anything. I can't hear anything. I can't see anything. I can't hear anything. She was trying to avoid losing control from looking directly at Vin Rambus's mythical creature form. However, this also made her unable to see or sense that a particular illusory, sinister version of Vin Rambus was approaching her body of heart and mind from the sea of collective subconscious. But suddenly, before Vin Rambus's eyes, the blonde, green-eyed girl's island of consciousness disappeared. Audrey felt a warmth from her body, as if she had returned from a cold, dark cave to the surface where the sun shined. She hurriedly dispelled the hypnosis and opened her eyes. The sun in the sky pierced through the clouds that couldn't be considered thin, scattering its resplendence. Bathed in the bright golden glow, autumn flowers bloomed in silence. Everything was beautiful and peaceful. Audrey looked around blankly, but she didn't see Vin Rambus, Gehrman Sparrow, or the huge crimson moon. This made her feel like everything that she had just experienced was just a dream. What mighty powers! A battle between the two demigods might not even harm a single flower. Audrey silently muttered to herself before calmly leaving the garden, retreating to the corridor that connected the garden to the house. She was afraid that her presence would affect Gehrman Sparrow's fight. In the concealed world, one of Vin Rambus's manifestations had also landed on Gehrman Sparrow's island of consciousness under the crimson moon. Just as he was about to set foot on it and open the door to the body of heart and mind and control Gehrman Sparrow's subconscious to make him do things against his own will, he realized that the illusory island that stood in the sea of collective subconscious was filled with a deathly silence. There were no stirring thoughts or the appearance of new thoughts. There was no way of influencing it. Puppet, marionette. Vin Rambus instantly made a judgment. Combined with the information he had obtained in the past, he had a better grasp of Gehrman Sparrow's abilities. He wasn't shocked or depressed. Instead, he felt a sense of glee and confidence. This was because, for a demigod of the spectator pathway, he could easily tell the difference between a marionette and the true body, greatly mitigating Gehrman Sparrow's strongest ability. Besides, do you think a marionette can foil my mind invasion and control of one's consciousness? That sinister and illusory Vin Rambus swept his golden vertical eyes and found a transparent passage on the marionette's island of consciousness. On the island of consciousness, it was the symbolic form of spirit-body threads in the mind world. Right on the heels of that, Vin Rambus's figure flashed, and he traced the transparent passageway and found another island of consciousness hidden in the distance. This was where the source of where the marionettes were controlled, which meant that it belonged to the actual body. Found you. Vin Rambus snorted coldly as he conjured a terrifying mind storm in the sea of collective subconscious, allowing them to thrash about in Gehrman Sparrow's island of consciousness over and over again. This caused the nearby weather to rapidly change, and the ability to percept the surroundings via spirituality suffered intense interference. Vin Rambus took the opportunity to get close to Gehrman Sparrow's island of consciousness, and he conjured a grayish-white staircase in an attempt to furtively invade his opponent's subconscious. This was his usual style of fighting. One stayed in the light, while the other stayed in the dark. While one attacked head-on, the other sneaked in. With these two angles of attack, it easily broke the target's mental walls and allowed him to control his opponent's body of heart and mind. At the same time, as a dragon avatar, he flew up and spiraled in midair. It affected Gehrman Sparrow with its dragon might and breath, complementing the battle at the consciousness level. At this moment, from deep within the sea of collective subconscious, Vin Rambus had silently invaded the Gehrman Sparrow's body of heart and mind when all of a sudden, he saw a boundless grayish-white fog. All the sea of collective subconscious around, and the islands had vanished. Vin Rambus's heart tightened as he hurriedly analyzed his psyche, suspecting that he was under an illusion. However, no matter how he handled it, the grayish-white fog didn't change. Of course, there were no accidents or danger. It was as if it was just a simple background. That was pretty suspicious. Just as Vin Rambus was preparing to stir a mind storm here, the grayish-white fog finally dissipated, revealing the island of consciousness from before that belonged to Gehrman Sparrow. Vin Rambus didn't have time to hesitate. He quickly entered the corresponding subconscious and attempted to change his target's thoughts. However, those thoughts were dyed with a bright light, a holy and majestic aura. It was unshakable and uninfluenced. Vin Rambus instinctively looked up and looked towards the sea of consciousness from the stone stairs that he conjured. Other than the island itself, there was also a figure with 12 pairs of fiery wings, emitting golden light. It looked like the projection of an angel's powers. Since he was planning on dealing with a demigod from the spectator pathway today, Klein had no doubt used Angel's Embrace on himself. With the Red Priest's level of importance, he directed the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog, allowing him to temporarily be unaffected when facing an incomplete mythical creature form. And the reason why he didn't show it directly was that he was experimenting with Vin Rambus. As Vin Rambus attempted to invade his island of consciousness, his marionette, Kona's Kilgore, distorted the target his enemy locked onto, changing it from Klein's body of heart and mind to Klein's projection of the gray fog. As a result, if Vin Rambus found the island of consciousness in the grayish-white fog, it meant that there was a being of unknown origins sleeping in the mysterious space. This meant that Klein had to be wary ahead of time. On the contrary, he could feel a little relaxed. This was something he had long wanted to test, but didn't dare attempt because it might be dangerous. Today, he finally had a chance to do so. After all, even if there were any consequences, Vin Rambus would be the one dying and not him. It might even allow him to easily finish off a demigod. Seeing that he was blessed by an angel and wasn't capable of breaking or infiltrating his opponent's body of heart and mind in a short period of time and exerting his consciousness on him, Vin Rambus retreated without any hesitation. He left the area and returned to his mind world through the sea of collective subconscious. Then, the massive dragon disappeared, disappearing into thin air, preventing Klein from even finding it via spirit-body threads. Psychological invisibility. Vin Rambus planned on using a psychological blind spot to hide in the dark. Then, using area of effect beyond her powers like mind deprivation and mind storm to slowly weaken Gehrman Sparrow's angel-enhanced mental walls, he would attempt using his own sealed artifact to attack. As a demigod of the spectator pathway, although his dragon form was powerful at melee combat, it still lacked the necessary, powerful offensive beyonder powers. It had to be made up for through certain sealed artifacts. At this moment, an illusory book appeared in front of the Gehrman Sparrow who could be either the marionette or his actual self. Following that, there was an ethereal voice. I came, I saw, I record. Klein was using Lightning Storm, which had been recorded by the creeping hunger. For something like psychological invisibility, it could be easily resolved with a full area of effect bombardment. It has to be said that, when dealing with a beyonder with such a fighting style, the storm pathway was a pretty good choice. Chapter 1052, 1052 3VL. 1052 3VL boom. Lightning bolts descended from the sky, covering the entire area illuminated by the huge crimson moon with a silver forest. Lightning flashed and destructive auras swept over, not leaving any spot unscathed. The giant grayish-white dragon, which still had a human head, appeared again. There were tiny bolts of electric bolts scurrying over its scaled body. There were also some obvious cracks. Vin Rambise's psychological invisibility couldn't be maintained under such a wide area of effect bombardment. After all, his interactions with his surroundings couldn't be avoided. All he could do was eliminate his sense of presence and stay in the blind spot of one's attention. Once the level of interaction grew excessive, he didn't have the means to avoid exposure. As soon as he appeared, the lightning storm calmed down quite significantly. The Gehrman Sparrow's body on the roof instantly blurred and phased into existence diagonally below the incomplete dragon. Right on the heels of that, the glove on the crazy adventurer's left hand protruded with fine black particles that were deep and dark. Then, he opened his mouth and said his word filled with foulness and corruption from the devil language. Slow. Vin Rambis knew that his opponent was using creeping hunger and knew the true level of the item. He found Gehrman Sparrow amusing and was about to raise his left claw that grabbed onto an ice-blue metal cylinder, slamming it down at his enemy beneath him. This was a sealed artifact with unknown origins called Rotting Meteor. Vin Rambis had obtained it from a particular existence, and he was only aware that part of it came from the cosmos. This ice-blue metal cylinder could fire special dark green bullets that would instantly poison anyone who was hit with it. They would begin rotting in a way that even their spirit bodies wouldn't be spared. This was also effective against demigods. Its negative effect was that the wielder had a probability of gaining the attention of the cosmos and suffering corruption without realizing it. If not for having the item sealed thanks to a particular existence, Vin Rambis definitely wouldn't have dared to carry it around. But even so, he tried to limit his usage of it, lest he suffered a strange death or anomaly. That was a common ending for many of the previous owners of Rotting Meteor. Currently, Vin Rambis didn't believe that the language of foulness, which was at most at sequence 5, could affect him in his incomplete mythical creature form. He planned on using Rotting Meteor to finish off the sealed artifact, equipped enemy that posed a threat. However, at this moment, his actions had really slowed down, and his entire body felt stiff. On the pitch-black roof under the gigantic crimson moon, another Gehrman Sparrow in a black trench coat and silk hat had appeared at some point in time. He held a 6-barreled revolver in his right hand and aimed his left hand at the Gehrman Sparrow beneath him before balling his fist and turning his wrist. Earl of the Fallen, Magnify. This was Klein's other marionette, a demigod from the lawyer pathway, Kona's Kilgore. With the help of his Magnify, creeping hunger could amplify the beyonder powers it obtained from grazing souls, almost raising it to the level of sequence 4, or in other words, at the level of a demigod. Of course, Magnify couldn't be used consecutively in quick succession. It was limited to a one-time use each time. Due to Vin Rambise's current mythical creature form, no matter how magnified, slow M was, it couldn't affect him for long. Therefore, it was the Gehrman Sparrow, who was actually Inuni, who had to seize this short opportunity and control Vin Rambise's spirit body threads. Normally, he would take 3 seconds to attain initial control. However, his opponent had already revealed a powerful mythical creature form, and time would definitely extend the time required. It would take perhaps about 7 seconds, or even more than 10 seconds to succeed. And by then, Vin Rambis would have long extricated himself from the influence of slow, restoring himself to normal and carrying out the corresponding countermeasures. At this critical moment, Kona's Kilgore aimed his left hand at winner Inuni once again and clenched his fingers. Another Magnify. The control of the spirit body threads was magnified. Suddenly, Inuni's control of Vin Rambise's spirit body threads became easier, as if the mythical creature form hadn't been revealed. In other words, he could obtain initial control in 3 seconds. This was already rather formidable, but the problem was that the dragonified Vin Rambis wouldn't take more than a second to extricate himself from the influence of slow. No, he had already escaped. At that moment, there was a gunshot. A bullet that looked lusterless, deep and profound but not dark, swiftly shot out with its many strange patterns and struck Vin Rambus, who had just escaped from his slow state. In another corner of the garden, another Gairman sparrow in a black trench coat and a silk top had appeared. Vin Rambus's dragon body stiffened once again. Not only did his thoughts come to a halt, even the wings on his back froze, and he had lost all his control of himself. The entire dragon collapsed to the ground. Control Spirit Bullet. Klein had used his worms of spirit as the material to contain the control spirit bullets made from the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. It could even freeze Sequence 3 Saints for 1 or 2 seconds. At that moment, Vin Rambus, who had an incomplete mythical creature form, wasn't much stronger than a Sequence 3 Saint. Back when Amon's avatar was hit by the control spirit bullet, it had also froze for more than a second. In addition, Klein could also get Kona's Kilgore to magnify the power of the bullet. However, to grab the opportunity, he had failed to do it in time. The string of team combination attacks from before had already made Klein turn poignant, as obtaining the aid of a demigod from the lawyer pathway was terrifying. It was very, very effective. Of course, under normal circumstances, the Earl of the Fallen's Magnify could only amplify the effects and influence that strengthened one's body or actions without helping others. However, the problem was that, as marionettes with worms of spirit within them, they were without a doubt no different from Klein. He hadn't been augmenting others, but himself. Seizing the opportunity of Vin Rambus falling into a state of paralysis, Winner Inuni obtained initial control over the spirit body threads. The incomplete dragon had just ended its rigid state when its thoughts became sluggish. Its movement had a certain delay. It had to be said that, after a Bizarro sorcerer obtained a powerful marionette, they could unleash terrifying powers through their cooperation with their marionettes. Klein also had a cheat-like method like control spirit bullets. This was something that could only be created by him because he was the only one who could stir the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. Of course, Amon and other powerhouses also had similar charms and bullets. The only difference was the effects would be different. Seeing that Vin Rambus had come under a certain level of control, Klein began preparing to disrupt any form of resistance he tried putting up, preventing him from escaping from his current state until he became a marionette. However, at this moment, his head suddenly ached due to an intolerable mania in his heart. Then, he became extremely down, as if he couldn't feel joy anymore. He despised himself and wished he could give up his life just like that, so that he wouldn't be a burden on others. In the blink of an eye, he became excited. His eyes seemed to be blood red and filled with hatred towards anything, wanting to destroy everything he saw. Not good. Before his mental state deteriorated, Klein realized that he had been influenced by Vin Rambus at some point in time. Something was wrong with his body of heart and mind. He hurriedly attempted to cogitate to fight against the abnormal mental state. However, various thoughts that didn't seem to belong to him flashed through his mind. Let's end it here. Secre. Think of a way to save yourself. What exactly happened? I think I have a serious mental illness, a psychiatric disease that's contagious. The special mental illness that Miss Justice mentioned? This is indeed a high sequence beyond her power of the spectator pathway. Why are you saying so much? That's a demigod psychiatrist you're facing. Turning him into a marionette will easily resolve this problem. Realizing that Gairman Sparrow hadn't shot the second bullet, Vin Rambus's face, covered in grayish-white scales, revealed a faint smile. Although he hadn't anticipated the tight cooperation between Gairman Sparrow and his two marionettes, causing him to quickly fall into a perilous situation, it wasn't like he hadn't done anything prior to this. Before he left the sea of collective subconscious, he had secretly planted contagious madness in a marionette. A marionette was, after all, a dead person. Although it was unable to be controlled by any other methods other than spirit body threads, it didn't mean that they didn't have an island of consciousness. It was just a dead mass, but it was precisely here that Vin Rambus buried a seed named madness. The seed couldn't affect the marionette itself, but it could secretly infect the sea of collective subconscious of its surroundings, causing the person who kept switching between bodies to unknowingly place themselves in an environment with a contagious mental disease. Also, this madness could also be transmitted via spirit body threads. In addition, this type of infection stemmed from oneself. It wasn't something an angelic blessing could screen. At most, it would be weakened and have the effects weakened. This was a high-sequence spectator's power, manipulator's mental plague. In ancient times, there would be people from time to time who were placed in repressed states for prolonged periods of time and appear abnormal at the same time. Their abnormality influenced the people around them, causing mass hysteria to happen. An ancient folk song once sang of it in such a manner. 7 young ladies are dancing weirdly on the street. 9 men are rolling on the ground laughing by their sides. On a horse carriage passing by, the nobles are slapping their faces. The stone children are crying outside the house by the street. People are hurting each other. The entire city is crazy. If one thought about it carefully, it would make one feel an inexplicable sense of horror. However, Vin Rambus knew that the scene described in the myth was true. It was an experiment from a spectator pathway demigod, a highly contagious mental plague. By the time Gehrman Sparrow's actual body went crazy, his control over his marionettes would undoubtedly be lost. When that happened, Vin Rambus would be able to escape from his predicament. It wouldn't take long, as it only took a few seconds. At that moment, a manipulator like Vin Rambus wasn't afraid that Gehrman Sparrow had the charm which Audrey had used, the one that could temporarily swap fates between two people. This was because a swap would put Gehrman Sparrow in a state of becoming a marionette. His thoughts would turn sluggish and his body would stiffen. As for Vin Rambus, being infected by the mental plague was a relatively simple problem for him to resolve. At this moment, Vin Rambus saw the Gehrman Sparrow on the rooftop aiming his left hand at the Gehrman Sparrow who was holding the iron-black, long-barreled revolver. He gripped his fingers and slowly turned his wrist. Distortion. Klein had used Kona's Kilgore's Beyonder powers to distort the level of his mental disease, weakening it and slowing down the deterioration. Making use of this period in which he had clarity of mind, he raised Death Knell again and pulled the trigger. Bang! Another control spirit bullet shot out and hit the motionless, massive, incomplete dragon. At the same time, Kona's Kilgore used Magnify. Despite being attacked, Vin Rambus didn't escape from Inuni's control, because he had fallen into a long period of feeling numb and stiff. Klein silently kept count of the time, shooting a third control spirit bullet before Vin Rambus truly recovered. And before the third control spirit bullet's magnified effects ended, the grayish-white, incomplete dragon trembled as it returned to normal, no longer looking sluggish. Chapter 1053, 1053 Presiden. 1053 Presiden. In the dimly lit world, the gigantic crimson moon hung silently over the house, while everything in the garden seemed to be asleep. The despair in the incomplete grayish-white dragon's eyes dissipated as it retracted its skin-covered wings, behaving like a docile hunting dog reared at home. The psychology alchemist's counselor, demigod of the spectator pathway, Vin Rambus, had lost his life and became Klein's marionette. Without bothering to enjoy this achievement, he switched places with Inuni, who was beside the grayish-white dragon, appearing as Gehrman Sparrow in his black trench coat and silk top hat. Then, he controlled his new marionette to treat the infection he received from mental plague. A gentle and cool breeze swept past the sea of collective subconscious, seeping into Klein's island of consciousness. It made him feel like the object reeking of a rotten, putrid, and discordant object in his body of heart and mind was being purged out of him with a surgical knife. Klein's face immediately contorted as he grimaced. He once again felt the excruciating pain in his soul. Thankfully, in order to create the control spirit bullets and the yesterday once more charms, he was already accustomed to this feeling. He didn't hold his head and roll around. After purging the contagious mental disease from his consciousness, the cool wind brought about a warmth that made him want to take an afternoon nap. It allowed his damaged spirit body to relax, as if he was soaked in a bath. His mind and body quickly recovered thanks to the nourishment. By the time he recovered from his mental disease, the gentle breeze that blew at him became intense. It swept the surroundings, wiping out all the contagion left in the air. After doing all of this, Klein made the grayish-white dragon rapidly shrink its body, converge its godhood, and turn back into its human form. However, as Vin Rambai's clothes had been ripped to pieces, the gray scales on his body didn't disappear. A few seconds later, the ascetic leader of the Church of Evernight, Ariana, walked out of the gigantic crimson moon in her simple robe and belt made of tree bark. Her long black hair cascaded down as she stepped across the void and arrived diagonally above Vin Rambus. The angel stretched out her right hand and, with a gentle squeeze, let Vin Rambai's blurry soul leave his body and float above his head. "Why are you helping George III?" Ariana asked directly. Vin Rambai's confused expression immediately turned serious. "This is the choice of the times, an inevitability of destiny. We are just following the flow of the tides and providing some guidance, allowing the times to develop in the right direction." The standard answer of the Twilight Hermit Order. From the looks of it, the psychology alchemist demigod doesn't know what Adam's true goal is either. Even as official members of the Twilight Hermit Order, most of them probably don't know. Klein didn't have any problems thinking thanks to his situation inside the concealed world. Ariana didn't show any surprise as she pressed, "What is the trend of the times?" Vin Rambai's eyes were unfocused, but his expression was solemn as he answered, "A war, one that will sweep the entire world." "This, isn't peace nice?" Klein frowned slightly as he couldn't help but mumble inwardly. He knew very well what a world war would do to humans. He only wished that his investigation with the Church of Eve might would be able to seize the key and successfully prevent the war which the Twilight Hermit Order was strongly pushing from erupting. Ariana fell silent for a second before asking, "What's the secret George III is hiding?" Vin Rambus revealed a smile. Every king is restrained by 3 major contracts and can only reach a limit of sequence 5. But with our help, he bypassed the restrictions and has already reached a higher level. Once the tides of the times come, he'll easily be able to ascend to the spot that should have belonged to him. 3 major contracts. What's that? It's understandable to limit a king to sequence 5 due to the strong push to keep mysticism under wraps. It's best for a king to be changed normally. The people will find it acceptable if they could live for 80 to 90 years old, but to still be active at 120 to 130 years will be the cause for conspiracy theories and panic. George III cooperated with the psychology alchemists and the demonist sect to live longer. Typically, this is a restriction on the king, not the other members of the Augustus family. They should have grounded angels among them, so there's no reason for them to support George III. Many questions arose in his mind. George III still isn't a demigod, is he? Is he using some method to possess a higher level and perform the acting ahead of time? Ariana asked unhurriedly. To the Church of Evernight, this was a crucial problem. If George III was already a demigod, they could directly contact the Church of Storms and Steam to capture him because the king himself was enough evidence. Vin Rambis's soul nodded and said, "Yes." "What is the exact method?" Ariana continued asking. Vin Rambis slowly shook his head and said, "I'm not sure. The person in charge of this matter is our president. I only remember him once mentioning that he wanted George III to have more talent." More talent? Upon hearing such a description, Klein instantly thought of something in Roselle's diary. In the eyes of the emperor, the so-called talent was to make one's psyche and soul more like a high-level ancestor. As such, be able to obtain the recognition of the corresponding beyonder characteristics or the mental imprint within sealed artifacts, allowing them to easily consume the potion and wield the sealed artifacts without the immense negative effects. This wasn't a perfect solution. It could even be said that there were great latent risks. This was because the mental imprint would revert and control the consumer or wielder's soul, causing them to experience certain changes. If anyone were to rely on this method to advance to a demigod, there was an extremely high chance of becoming a monster formed of mental sutures. Was George III hypnotized? He actually accepted such a method? No. If he was hypnotized, the Augustus family's angel or sealed artifacts would definitely discover the problem. Klein became even more puzzled as he waited for the ascetic leader floating in the sky to ask further. Ariana clearly knew what more talent meant. Without any change in expression, she asked, "Who is your president?" Vin Rambis revealed a look of reminiscence. "He has many identities and names, but I can confirm that he is the president of our psychology alchemists as long as I see him. His current identities and names are one of the 4 kings of the sea, the king of the Black Throne Barrows Hopkins, the former chancellor of the Backlund Medical School, the royal family's medical consultant, the already dead Polly Durlau, the famous ascetic of the Central Sonia Sea, Eric Drake, king of the Black Throne." It was only then that he realized that he had heard of this title, but he had always neglected it, not taking it to heart and seldom thinking about it. So this pirate king is from the spectator pathway. He nodded in enlightenment. Ariana listened quietly and asked, "What secret is George III hiding in the Blood Emperor ruins?" Vin Rambis's slightly dazed expression changed slightly. An extremely important thing. If he wants to grasp it, he will need a large number of sacrificial rituals. "What is it?" Ariana pressed without any pause. Vin Rambis was taken aback. I don't remember." He suddenly raised his hand to grip his soul's head, clearly in pain. However, no matter how he thought about it, he couldn't remember the answer. Was this memory forcefully deleted by Adam or a certain angel from the spectator pathway? Klein watched with a heavy expression as he felt that the secret in the ruins was more important than he imagined. Ariana fell silent for a few seconds before lowering her head and asking Klein, "Do you have anything you want to ask?" Klein thought for a moment and asked Vin Rambis, "What is the name of the high-sequence beyonder potions of the spectator pathway?" The pain in Vin Rambis's soul lessened as he slowly replied, "Sequence 4 Manipulator. Sequence 3 Dreamweaver. Sequence 2 Discerner. Sequence 1 Author." He didn't mention Sequence 0 Visionary, clearly unaware. "What's the potion formula for Manipulator?" Although Klein felt that his question was rather substandard compared to Mam Ariana's, he still asked. In a dazed tone, Vin Rambis said without hesitation, "The main ingredient is an elderly mind dragon's complete brain, or the crystalline heart of a tree mentor, or a beyonder characteristic of a manipulator. The supplementary ingredients are 80 milliliters of the blood of an elderly mind dragon, 3 golden leaves of a tree mentor, and 7 different drops of tears from different humans or non-human creatures that were shed due to intense emotions." The ritual is that on a special occasion with at least 10,000 people, drink the potion when they are in the midst of an emotional resonance. In contrast, the difficulty of a demigod ritual of the spectator pathway isn't that high. That's right. Spectators can heal and analyze themselves, allowing them to effectively deal with the madness and the loss of control brought about by the potion, so the ritual can be simplified. Klein nodded in thought. What's the potion formula for Dreamweaver? I don't know. Vin Rambus shook his head. All right then. Klein asked Vin Rambus why he had personally come to Audrey and received the corresponding answer. Then, he said to Ariana, I have no further questions. The questions he had couldn't be answered by Vin Rambus. Ariana's right hand pressed softly, causing Vin Rambus's soul to return to his body. Following that, the angel glanced at Klein and said calmly, Don't use him as a marionette. Before his mental imprint is removed, it's best you don't use his Beyonder characteristic to create items. Of course, I don't want Adam to visit me. Klein nodded sincerely. I will remember it. Thank you, ma'am Ariana. Chapter 1054, Tailor-Made Ritual. Chapter 1054, Tailor-Made Ritual. After thanking her, Klein immediately gave up his control over Vin Rambus, making it impossible for him to maintain his marionette-like state. With that, this spectator pathway demigod collapsed to the ground and became a corpse. Ariana lowered her head and took a look, the darkness in her eyes growing deeper. Vin Rambus's corpse immediately got erased like a pencil drawing, as if it was being wiped away by an eraser, inch by inch, leaving behind only the ice-blue metal cylinder. Right on the heels of that, beams of light seeped out of the void and quickly gathered together, forming a strange object. It was fist-sized and looked like a heart. However, it resembled a different kind of brain, with its surface being covered in grayish-white wrinkles, each crevice with countless symbols and strange patterns that extended into the surroundings. These connected to a world that Beyonders of other pathways couldn't see. This was the Beyonder characteristic left behind by a manipulator. Miss Ariana's concealment and reversing concealment process is able to quickly extract Vin Rambus's Beyonder characteristic. Klein came to a realization after a moment of pause. At this moment, Ariana calmly said, The mental imprints in it have all been removed. Thank you, ma'am Ariana. Not surprised at all. He bowed as if he had prepared to do so. He had decisively given up on his marionette because he foresaw that something like this would happen. In fact, his original plan was to bring Vin Rambus above the gray fog as a marionette, allowing him to use unshadowed crucifix to purge the manipulator, dreamwalker, hypnotist, and other Beyonder characteristics out. This way, Miss Justice no longer needed to worry about the ingredients needed before becoming a demigod. Even her Beyonder dog at home had a chance of advancing. After all, Audrey had briefly mentioned in the past to Dwayne Dantes that her act of escaping from Vin Rambus's control was all thanks to Susie. But later on, he considered that there was no way he could bring Vin Rambus above the gray fog inside this world of concealment, as it would directly expose the fact that he was the fool under Ariana's watchful eyes. And once he left, no matter where he teleported to, there was a chance of being discovered by Adam because of Vin Rambus's existence. In that case, giving up a marionette in front of Ariana was undoubtedly a better choice. At least, this angel had a high chance of helping him remove the mental imprint on the Beyonder characteristic. And none of these affected Klein's original plan. He could easily find some ingredients to make Vin Rambus's Beyonder characteristic into a problematic potion. He would then pour it onto an ordinary item so that it could absorb the potion and transform. After obtaining such a sealed artifact and binding it with the unshadowed crucifix, he could obtain the corresponding Beyonder characteristics by keeping track of the time. As for the mental corruption during this process, there was no need for concern. The unshadowed crucifix could also cleanse it. Klein picked up Vin Rambus's Beyonder characteristic, but he wasn't able to stuff it into the iron cigar case. He could only stuff it into his pocket. As for Ariana, she cast her gaze towards the ice-blue metal cylinder and said in an unhurried voice, It's from the cosmos, so it's best you don't use it. Even you carrying it with you should be limited. Otherwise, a gaze might be cast onto you, causing you to be corrupted and suffer aberrations. From the cosmos? Klein found the description familiar. Soon, he remembered the origins of its familiarity. This originated from the yellow light, Venethan's prophecy of the apocalypse in sites in the spirit world from the Abraham family. Casting one's gaze from the cosmos, the lands shatter. Everything in the world will cease to exist. The apocalypse. The origins of this sealed artifact is related to the apocalypse? What does the cosmos represent? What does it have to do with the astral world? A series of questions formed in his mind, making his expression turn heavy. Faced with his question, Ariana nodded gently and said, Yes, the cosmos. Is it the cosmos above our heads? He pointed at the dark night sky which was embedded with the gigantic crimson moon. Yes. Ariana gave an affirmative answer, but she didn't explain further. After some thought, he asked again, "There are many hostile existences that are attempting to destroy this world." Ariana's gaze swept across his face and finally stopped at his eyes. "I can't give you an answer. There are some things that make it easier to be infected the more you know. Both your body and soul will be infected. Once you become an angel, you can seek out the exact answer. The more I know, the easier it is to get infected." A chill ran down Klein's back. He didn't ask Rhodes earlier about the sealed artifacts that Vin Rambus possessed, because he was afraid that Adam would notice them if they left any traces behind. When facing a king of angels, no amount of caution was enough. Seeing that Ariana wasn't revealing anything else, Klein pointed at the ice-blue metal cylinder and asked, "How should we handle this item?" The description of the ascetic leader made him a little afraid of bringing the sealed artifact above the gray fog to disinfect. Ariana calmly said, "My suggestion is to sacrifice it to the goddess. Together with the contributions you have previously rendered, you can exchange them for what you want." Klein nodded slightly. "I understand." After expressing his gratitude, Ariana's figure was quickly erased and disappeared into the dark garden under the abnormally huge moon. And with that, the world of concealment collapsed. Klein observed for a few seconds before taking out candles and other ritual items he carried with him. He quickly set up an altar and sacrificed the ice-blue metal cylinder to the Evernight goddess. At the end of the ritual, amidst the howling winds, the burning ash of the herbs and the surrounding soil rose up and landed onto an empty spot on the altar. The ash and soil were connected, forming words. Sequence 3, Scholar of Yore. Main ingredients: Hound of Fulgrim, also known as Sapphira Castlekeeper, pair of eyes. 1 demonic wolf of Fog's transformed heart. Supplementary ingredients: 100 milliliters of Hound of Fulgrim blood, 30 grams of white frost crystal of demonic wolf of Fog, a large amount of real ancient historical records. Advancement ritual: Be separated from reality for at least 300 years and consume the potion after one becomes history and doesn't belong to the present era. This, Klein couldn't help but blink, wondering if he had seen the wrong description. The description of not belonging to the present era made him think of a line in his honorific name. "The fool that doesn't belong to this era. I've been hanging above the extraordinary door of light for more than 300 years. In a sense, have I already completed the ritual and am only waiting to consume the potion?" The mysterious space above the gray fog really has a very close relationship with the seer pathway. Could it be the manifestation of the uniqueness? Klein was momentarily delighted, but also grim. This was because he didn't know if a price was exacted for such a bestowment. Phew, I really want to jump to a neighboring pathway after becoming an angel to not follow whatever path was planned for me. For other Bizarro sorcerers, the hardest part about the advancement ritual is to live for more than 300 years. After all, this isn't a pathway that's known for having a long lifespan. Also, being separated from reality for 300 years easily drives one mad. For Bizarro sorcerers who are in a dissociative state, the risk of madness and losing control is quite significant. Klein looked at the Scholar of Yore's potion formula as thoughts couldn't help but flash through his mind. After an unknown amount of time, he ended the ritual and put away the corresponding items. As he walked out of the garden, the gigantic crimson moon and the pitch-black darkness faded away, disappearing inch by inch. Then, he saw fresh autumn flowers and the sunlight shining above them. He also saw a blonde girl waiting in between the house and the garden. Audrey's eyes wore an elated look as the corners of her lips curled up unconsciously. Klein nodded at her before his figure was enveloped by scarlet flames. Elsewhere in the garden, there was another flame soaring in the air, but it wasn't obvious. When the flames dissipated, Gehrman's sparrow was gone. The remnants of the crimson moon and the night scenery vanished completely. Audrey fell into a daze for a few seconds before thoughtfully looking away and entering Viscount Glaint's residence. After she left in a carriage with Susie and the servants, she returned home and had a chance to be alone. As expected, she received the world's invitation for a meeting. Above the gray fog, inside the palace, Audrey looked at the world Gehrman Sparrow and calmly asked, what was Vin Rambis's true goal? She had long known from Gehrman Sparrow's calm composure that Vin Rambis had been finished off. Klein answered frankly, the first is to find out if there's a mastermind behind Zio and Furz's actions. Secondly, when the princes expressed their goodwill towards Earl Hall's family, the cue was for you to not be an obstacle. In essence, it's to create a fracture between the 3 major churches. With regards to this matter, Audrey had already discussed it with Mr. World before. There was no need to seek further explanations as she asked, then why was a demigod like Vin Rambis personally visiting me? Klein smiled and said, if you wish to deceive the guards arranged by Earl Hall, as well as hypnotize a hypnotist with great certainty without causing any commotion, a Sequence 5 might not be capable of doing so. Therefore, it's best to send a demigod. Furthermore, You knew Vin Rambis and had interactions with him before, so your vigilance against him would be minimized. To be honest, if you weren't careful enough and had an unnoticeable helper like Susie, the whole matter would have gone on smoothly without you and I knowing until Monday. Justice Audrey didn't wear a thick mask. She smiled and sighed with mixed emotions. So I'm already this powerful. Powerful to the point of needing a demigod to be certain of success. He was even more powerful than I had imagined. You actually hypnotized a demigod that's good at hypnotism, Klein praised with a smile. Audrey pursed her lips without realizing it and smiled. That's mainly because of the fate siphon charm you gave me. My hypnotist potion seems to have completely digested as a result of this. Chapter 1055, Train of Though. Completely digested? That's understandable. This is the act of hypnotizing a demigod. Although it's thanks to the fate siphon charm, it only helped to open the door of the body of heart and mind. The subsequent consciousness manipulation and the cue planting needs to be done personally. If she weren't careful, she would trigger an intense rejection and would lead to failure. Acting, done to the extreme, would definitely accelerate the digestion process. Klein nodded gently and said in praise, "This is a good thing. It's even more so for the current situation." Audrey understood what Mr. World meant. In this storm that was sweeping around thanks to the Angel of Imagination Adam and King George III, even if she stood by the sidelines, she could sense her weakness and how powerless she was. She couldn't wait to improve herself. She tersely acknowledged and said, "I'll urge the Sun to give his conditions to complete the deal and try my best to advance to Sequence 5. When the time comes, I hope that I can receive the protection of Mr. Fool and remain conscious in my dream." Having been prepared for this, Klein smiled and said, "Actually, you don't have to wait that long. I'll be able to sell you a Dreamwalker's Beyonder characteristic by tomorrow, and at the latest, Friday." As it was a private exchange, Klein didn't act as the world by deliberately making his voice hoarse. All he did was sound reserved. "Really?" Audrey's eyes widened, not concealing her surprise. Klein nodded and said, "It's actually from Vin Rambis. The new cross that Mr. Fool obtained can allow the Beyonder characteristics to be purged." He spoke very simply without explaining the actual steps. He maintained Gehrman Sparrow's unique coldness. "Is that so?" The corners of Audrey's lips curled up as she broke into a smile. She pressed against her chest and said, "Praise Mr. Fool dash. And thank you, Mr. World. A double token of gratitude." Klein chuckled inwardly and calmly said, "It's just a transaction. You need to pay for it." He lampooned to himself. Audrey maintained her smile and asked, "What do you need?" "For a Sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic, £8,000. Klein chose something that Miss Justice could gather in the fastest time possible. Audrey didn't mind the price. She thought for a while before asking, "Can you sell the separated hypnotist characteristic to me as well?" When she said that, she smiled in embarrassment and said, "It's for Susie. The incident this time was resolved, all thanks to her. Yes, the higher her level, the greater the help she can provide will be. Well, I'll also help her. No problem. For £1,000. Having expected this, Klein directly named his price. In his plan, he could stop once the hypnotist was purged, doing so without continuing the separation process. Now, he would place the unshadowed crucifix together for a long period of time, allowing its remaining characteristics to take form. A total of £12,000. Audrey asked for confirmation, not feeling too much pressure. As she didn't have any major expenditures for the past few months, she only had £10,000 left. Just a little bit of economizing was enough to satisfy her needs. Seeing the world nod, she heaved a sigh of relief. "I'll pay it before Friday." After closing the deal, her mood became better with Vin Rambis having been killed. She asked as though she was chatting, "I'll also buy the complete brain of an adult mind dragon from the Sun as well. However, I won't be in such a rush. Susie won't be able to digest the hypnotist potion so quickly." At this point, she glanced shyly at Mr. World. "What needs to be exchanged for Vin Rambis's demigod characteristic?" Klein laughed and replied, "I still don't know what I'm lacking. In fact, other than the manipulator characteristic from Vin Rambis, I also have the corresponding potion formula. While you digest the Dreamwalker potion, I'll slowly think about what I need, and I'll get you to do certain things and gather some materials so that you can make sufficient contributions to exchange for them." Upon hearing these words, Audrey's green eyes lit up. "All right." After her reply, she asked with interest, "Is this the same as how Zio contributes to MI9? "Yes, it's also the same method that the various major churches use." Klein gave an affirmative answer. Audrey nodded and curiously asked, "Mr. World, do you know the name of the high-sequence Beyonder potions of the spectator pathway?" Klein answered simply, "Manipulator, Dreamweaver, Discerner, Author, and Sequence 0, Visionary." Hearing the names makes me look forward to them, especially Author and Visionary. Audrey fantasized for a few seconds before diverting the topic back on track. Did Vin Rambis say what the king's secret is? Also, why are they helping the king? She was partially asking for Zio, but on the other hand, she was also concerned herself. The king's secret? He wishes to bypass the 3 major contracts the royal family signed with the Orthodox churches and become a demigod. For this, he needs to use many sacrificial rituals to gain control of some important object inside the Blood Emperor's ruins. Haha, that was Vin Rambise's answer, but it might not be the entire truth and might very likely be only a part of it. As Klein answered, he shared his line of thought. As for the psychology alchemists or the Twilight Hermit Order, they need a war that sweeps the entire world. This is what they're pushing for and hope to see as the trend of the times. A war that sweeps the entire world, Audrey repeated softly. Her pretty eyebrows furrowed slightly, and her cheerful mood plummeted again. Although her status and standing hadn't made her truly experience the cruelty of war before, she was no longer sheltered and cut off from the world. She could already imagine it to a certain degree. After a brief moment of silence, Audrey took a deep breath and forced a smile. I hope we can stop this. After exchanging a few more words, she left the gray fog and returned to the real world. As for Klein, he busily used clear water, tree sap, herbal powder, thousand-faced hunter's blood, spirit world plunder powder, and other materials to dilute Vin Rambise's Beyonder characteristic and concoct a potion that had a questionable name, which was definitely filled with problems. Then, he found an ordinary glass bottle and put the potion inside. He wanted to know what kind of sealed artifact it would eventually transform into. This took quite a bit of time, so he used the power of the mysterious space above the gray fog to construct a spherical barrier around the glass bottle to prevent any influence it had on the entire area after it mutated. After doing all of this, he returned to 160 Buckland Street. He prepared to summon a Rhodes and ask it for information about the 2 Beyonder creatures known as Hound of Fulgrim and Demonic Wolf of Fog. At that moment, with the passage of time, the clouds in the sky had thickened and the sun was covered up once again. The entirety of Backlund had become as dark and cold as the morning. Standing in front of the desk, he looked out the window at the sky. For some reason, he felt as though he and the Church of Evernight had neglected an important problem. Their investigations had been going relatively smoothly during this period of time, and the intelligence they received was also delving deeper. However, for some reason, it made him feel uneasy. Is there some influence or misdirection in this matter? And truly is something that I can't think of? Even heading above the gray fog is useless. Divination will most likely point towards him. Klein hurriedly collected his thoughts, unfurled the paper, and drew a picture consisting of symbols that implied concealment and mystery, prying with a fountain pen. 1 second, 2 seconds. After nearly 8 seconds, the full-body mirror in the room turned dark. Aqueous light rippled and formed silver words. Exalted Great Master, your puny, loyal, and humble servant, Rhodes, is here to answer your summoning. I think I'm late. I'm already a grade 1 sealed artifact. I need some time if I want to circumvent the isolation. Please forgive me, Great Master. You're a grade 1 sealed artifact? Klein asked with a surprised look. He could already imagine what was going on within the Church of Steam. The mirror that likes to play question and answer games has suddenly gone crazy. The full-body mirror's silver words squirmed and formed new words. Great Master, is this a question? He wanted to answer no, but to maintain his image, he nodded and said, yes. Rhodes immediately produced a line of words. I'm not actually a true grade 1 sealed artifact yet. I'm just enjoying the treatment of a grade 1 sealed artifact in advance. This is mainly because a grade 1 sealed artifact needs to be reported to other churches and be given a new number. The Church of Steam doesn't wish to do so. So that's how it is. That's understandable. Klein nodded gently. Got it. The aqueous light on the full-body mirror's surface flashed again as new silver words formed. Supreme Master, do you have any questions to test your loyal servant, Rhodes? What do you know about Hounds of Fulgrim and Demonic Wolves of Fog? He asked without standing on ceremony, completely unfazed that it was actually 2 questions. In the mirror, the silver words squirmed like they had a life of their own and changed shapes. The Hounds of Fulgrim are a type of unique creature of the spirit world. They live in the historical void. Even the 7 lights only know of them and are unable to interact with them unless they leave the historical void and attempt to hunt. But even so, what you see might only be a projection of their past. The Demonic Wolves of Fog are a type of high-level demonic wolves. After the death of the ancient gods and the Cataclysm, and with them being killed by the Antigonus family, Zeridal family, and the Church of Evernight, they're extremely rare now. Furthermore, they're all good at anti-divination and deceit. They aren't easy to find. In other words, the Church of Evernight likely has materials and items related to the Demonic Wolf of Fog, and with this, I can bring it to the spirit world and use the law of Beyonder characteristic convergence to bait a Hound of Fulgrim. Klein began his train of thought as he read on. Chapter 1056, The Real Devil. After getting a grasp of the situation, Klein looked at the full-body mirror in the room and asked, "What's the king's secret?" The surface of the mirror that seemed to lead to another world had aqueous light ripple before revealing a scene. It was a ruin that was hidden deep in the darkness, covered in the dust of history. However, it was completely intact. Does that mean that the king's secret is in the Blood Emperor's ruins? Rhodes doesn't dare to answer directly, or is this as much as it can see? After some deliberation, he said to the magic mirror, "It's your turn to ask." The image in the full-body mirror didn't change at all. It only revealed silver words. "Great Master, do you have any other questions?" "Yes." Without standing on ceremony, Klein nodded and asked, "Where is Saintess of White, Katerina, presently?" In the mirror, the silver words rapidly faded and disappeared, but the background didn't change at all. It was still the Blood Emperor ruins. If not for the words appearance and disappearance, I would have thought that this magic mirror crashed. Katerina is hiding in the Blood Emperor's ruins? The real one? Klein nodded thoughtfully. "It's your turn." Above the scene, silver words condensed once again. "Benevolent Master, why don't you leave Backland?" "That's a good question. I originally had such plans. I originally investigated the Great Smog of Backland because of my outrage over the innocent deaths of the poor like old Kohler, as well as being lost due to the shattering of my main goal. Later, I ended up with the identity as a blessed of the goddess. Later on, I tried to prevent a disaster from happening and prevent the people I know from suffering due to the ambitions of the powerful and to not drown because of the tides of the times. I was willing to bear some of the risks. As for now, knowing that there might be a war that would sweep the entire world, and discovering that the advancement ritual of Scholar of Yore is practically tailor-made for me, with signs of things being arranged, I've already come to a realization that I might not be able to escape even if I tried. Or should I say that I'm unlikely to escape my destiny even if I were to flee Backland? In that case, I might as well take the initiative to face the risk head on and see if I can figure out the truth and find a chance to survive, grasping my fate in my own hands. Klein's thoughts kept churning before they settled. Following that, he calmly replied, "Leaving can't really solve the problem." With that, he asked, "Where's Trissy now?" The full-body mirror finally changed the depicted scene. This time, it was pitch black. Occasionally, thick objects would slip across the surface. Rhodes also can't see Trissy's situation. Klein nodded slightly and said, "It's your turn to ask." The mirror was filled with aqueous light and wisps of silver formed a sentence. "Great Master, I have something to tell you." "May I?" "Go ahead," Klein replied, somewhat curious. The silver words changed into new words. "You have to be careful with what follows next." It even used an exclamation point. Rhodes noticed something unpleasant. After thinking for a few seconds, Klein said, "What do you think can threaten me?" "I don't know. I have a feeling." Rhodes reorganized its words, turning them from silver to grayish-white. It was obvious that it meant to express its sadness and self-reproach. Without waiting for a reply, new grayish-white words appeared in the mirror one after another. "Great Master, I have another scene to show you. Is that okay?" "Sure." Klein spoke slowly. The full-body mirror's surface produced ripples as the pitch-black darkness changed. It became deeper and deeper, sparkling like diamonds. This was a beautiful and vast night. The scene that Rhodes displayed is directed at the goddess who's intrinsically the stars, or it's the gaze cast from the cosmos. It seems like it doesn't dare to express it directly. Klein considered for a moment and didn't attempt to ask further. "Let's end it here for today." "All right." The grayish-white words were once again dyed with silver as the speed at which they appeared had slowed down for some reason. "Great Master, why you haven't said that you would summon me, your loyal servant, Rhodes, again if you have other questions in the future. It's a mirror that needs to follow procedure." Klein said in amusement. "Of course, I'll summon you again when I have other questions." "Yes, Master. Goodbye, Master." The silver words on the mirror returned to their normal speed, forming a hand that kept waving. After everything returned to normal, Klein burned the paper with the summoning symbols and drew the curtains. He once again stared at the cold and dark sky. Empress Burrow, in a small, Evernight cathedral. Zio and Furs received Miss Justice's update thanks to Mr. Fool, and they knew that the problem had been resolved. They roughly understood what the king's secret was. Truly impressive. Furs, who believed in the god of steam and machinery, opened her eyes in the dark and quiet prayer hall, turned her head, lowered her voice, and sighed. Read the next chapter on our VIPnovel.com. She originally wanted to directly say that Mr. World or Gehrman Sparrow was truly impressive, but she no longer wanted to make such a mistake. The past week made her feel like she had been in the mysterious world for more than 10 years. Zio opened her eyes as well, but she first drew a crimson moon on her chest, a form of showing her penitence towards her disrespect for the goddess. "Yes, that's a..." Before Zio could finish her sentence, the message she tried to convey reached Furs. What she wanted to say was that Vin Rambis was a true demigod, but from the time she and Furs entered the cathedral, Less than 10 minutes had passed. Yet, he had been finished off by Gehrman Sparrow. As saints, there was such a huge gap. Perhaps it's the blessings of an angel. With her experience in supernatural events and writing novels, Furs made a vague guess. As the prayer hall was dark and quiet, making it unsuitable for communication, Zhou didn't directly respond to Furs's words. She nodded, stood up, and walked into the aisle. The two of them left the prayer area, and after approaching the door, Zhou exhaled and said, "I really hope that I'll be this powerful one day. I have such thoughts occasionally too." Furs smiled. No matter what, you've already completed your investigations, haven't you? Although the so-called secrets are definitely worth digging into, the outline of the matter is rather clear. Zhou looked at the door ahead of her and fell into a daze for a few seconds. But what's the point? I can't do anything about this matter. No. When it comes to enemies, that person's identity isn't too lofty. At least, he's someone we can look at directly. Furs seriously comforted her friend. When you obtain a qualitative change in strength, you'll discover that you have the ability to participate in that matter, at least in matters that don't involve even higher levels. Furs, who had joined the Tarot Club for quite a long time ago, had witnessed matters that had been planned by Mr. Fool. He had used his blessed and the members of the Tarot Club to destroy the descent of the true creator, revealed Banshie's secret, obtained a portion of the authority from the Storm Domain, and interfered in the ownership of 0-08. Compared to the angels, King of Angels, and even true gods that were involved in these matters, King George III alone was indeed nothing special. Zhou slowly walked to the door and said after a moment of silence, "I understand what you mean. We'll return to the East District. We won't be in a hurry to move. Once I obtain the Judge Potion formula, we'll disappear and go into hiding. I believe that after today's incident, they probably wouldn't dare to investigate us. That's for sure. They're just lurking in the dark, in spots that cannot see the light of day." Furs hurriedly echoed before exclaiming, "I only hope that before we move again, my letter to my teacher can be delivered." Zhou grabbed her yellow hair and walked out of the church gates as she said in a serious manner, "After I get the formula, I'll buy that button and try to advance as quickly as possible." "Not bad. You've recovered your fighting spirit," Furs teased with a smile. Zhou didn't say another word as she continued proceeding forward with a solemn expression. After walking a few dozen steps, she suddenly stopped and said without turning her head, "I don't think I have enough money to buy that button. When the time comes, lend me a little. I'll definitely return it." Furs was taken aback for a second before chortling, "Okay, if my guess is correct, I should be able to get the subsequent items from my teacher." Thursday afternoon. Using the excuse of having some rest, Klein returned to the master bedroom and entered the bathroom. He took 4 steps counterclockwise and arrived above the gray fog. He believed that the glass bottle that was filled with the potion had already finished absorbing it. Sitting at the high-back chair of the Fool, he waved his hand and removed the isolation barrier, pulling his target over. The transparent glass bottle was already stained with a dark color. It had a mesh pattern on its surface which shimmered slightly, giving off an artistic flair. It was empty inside, with not a single drop of the potion remaining. The spacious bottle's mouth was covered with a layer of mist that glowed. It made Klein feel as though his gaze was being sucked in the moment it landed upon the mouth of the bottle. A voice sounded from the bottle. "By throwing in 100 gold coins in it, you can fulfill a wish. By throwing in 100 gold coins in it, you can fulfill a wish." Who did you learn this from? I have to say, this monotonous statement does have some hypnotic effect. Throwing in 100 gold coins would be akin to opening the doors of the body of heart and mind and becoming the bottle's slave. Klein did a simple analysis before beckoning for the unshadowed crucifix. Using the pressure brought about by the gray fog, he stuffed it into the bottle's mouth. "You devil!" The voice in the bottle screamed shrilly before it was miserably blocked by the gray fog. Chapter 1057, The Extraordinary and the Ordinary. After dealing with the mutated glass bottle, Klein took out his golden pocket watch, opened it, took a look, and took note of the time. He had to return 3 hours later and separate the unshadowed crucifix from the bottle of slavery. Only then could he obtain a single manipulator's Beyonder characteristic, and not a product that was mixed with the previous sequence's Beyonder characteristics. "It feels like I'm doing an experiment." Klein nodded slightly, put away his pocket watch, and returned to the real world where he had his actual afternoon nap. At 4 in the afternoon, his valet, Enuni, knocked on his employer's door under butler Walter's watch. "What's the matter?" In his pajamas, Dwayne Dantes rubbed his forehead and opened the bedroom door. Enuni bowed and said, "Sir, you accepted Madame Rihanna's invitation for high tea the night before. It's today." Klein looked at butler Walter and said, "All right, give me 15 minutes to prepare." Then he instructed his valet, Enuni, "Come in and help me change my clothes." When only he and his marionette were left in the room, he controlled the latter to bring out clothes suitable for high tea. taking glances at the wall clock from time to time. After about 10 minutes, after tying his bow tie and putting on his coat, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and headed above the gray fog. At that moment, 3 hours had passed since he last entered. Placed at the end of the long bronze table, the mutated glass bottle which had been firmly bound to the unshadowed crucifix with the gray fog's power no longer had the twinkling mesh, looking as though it went from being a piece of art to a common item on the street. At the bottom of the glass bottle was a large amount of grayish-white matter that had been purged. It flowed freely, forming a heart-shaped object the size of a child's fist. Not only were there wrinkles on it, but there were also cracks that resembled eyes. As for the complicated, three-dimensional, illusory patterns, labels, and symbols that extended into the void, they were nearly identical to Vin Rambis's Beyonder characteristic that Klein had seen from before. It's just a little different. Klein released the gray fog suppression and took out the unshadowed crucifix from the bottle mouth. With this step, the item that was purged out was completely separated from the mutated glass bottle, becoming complete and independent. Klein reached out his left hand to pick up the item that resembled both a heart and a brain, and after examining it for a few seconds, he threw it into the junk pile and allowed the gray fog to envelop it. At this moment, a weak voice sounded from the mutated glass bottle. "You, devil!" Klein didn't respond as he thrust the unshadowed crucifix back in with his right hand, using the power of the gray fog to press down on it. And with that, the ancient palace returned to its tranquil state. After returning to the real world, Klein put on his top hat, held his cane, and left 160 Buckland Street on his carriage. He headed for Member of Parliament Mock's residence at Unit 39. Inside an elegant activity room at Member of Parliament Mock's house, a few guests sat around an intricate, three-tiered tray. In front of them was a cup of charming black tea. Klein took a small cucumber sandwich and took a small bite. Half-jokingly, he shared his true feelings. The desserts today seemed very unique, be it the carrot cake or cream puffs. Mock laughed when he heard that. "Dwayne, your observation skills are truly impeccable. This has nothing to do with one's observation skills. As long as one isn't blind, it's impossible not to tell that the shapes are all banged up," he lampooned silently before saying. "It sounds like something remarkable. Of course, it's personally made by Hazel. You can try it later. Although she can't control its appearance effectively, it really does taste good," Mock said proudly. By the side, Portland Moment, who was the Backlund University of Technology's chancellor, laughed and said, "This doesn't sound like the Hazel I know." Mock glanced at Ma'am Rihanna and said in satisfaction, "Everyone grows up, right? Hazel has really matured recently. Not only is she willing to learn those classes in preparation for socializing and marriage that she used to hate, and occasionally makes desserts and plays music for us, but she'll also frequently offer to accompany her mother to attend musicals, horse racing matches, shop at the departmental store, and listen silently by the side at all kinds of saloons and balls." According to Miss Justice, Hazel's treatment progress has reached a point where she can recall the terrible shock and pain she had suffered. Although it's just a direct sense of the emotions and doesn't involve the exact sequence of events, it's enough to make her dream of losing her parents and relatives. This made her learn to cherish her family. For this, she has decided to change herself to a certain extent. Klein nodded in thought and said with a smile, "That's excellent." "Indeed," Mock replied while full of emotion. "I was worried about her personality, worried that she wouldn't have a good marriage and be unable to date people in our circle. After we pass away, she wouldn't be able to find help when faced with difficulties. But now, I can finally feel at ease." Mock revealed a sincere smile as he revealed his worries that he seldom divulged. He raised his arm and waved it gently. Then he said with great confidence, "Why am I making an enemy out of the bloody smog and pollution? Why do we have to fight over the colonies in East Balham with Faceac and the West Balham with Intis? Isn't it to let our children lead a better life, so that we have fewer worries? To me, Hazel's maturity is greater than the contributions I made at East Balham, far more meaningful than my fights in the House of Commons." As Klein listened to Mock's recount, he couldn't help but look out the window. It was dark outside and the sun was gone. At this moment, Portland Moment replied to Mock jokingly, "No, those things are for our own good." At this point, he looked at Klein and said, "Dwayne, have you thought about it? Do you want to invest in my mechanical laboratory?" Klein let out a soft chuckle. "Mr. Chancellor, why are you still so anxious like a young man? I've already read through the information you gave me and have a rough impression of the rights and revenue. Frankly speaking, I'm very interested. To let talented young adults obtain training at such a mechanical laboratory is greatly satisfying. This should be something we invest in. What's most valuable in this day and age? Talents. Emperor Roselle once said that." Portland Moment chuckled. "So, how much do you intend to invest?" Dwayne raised his porcelain cup and drank a mouthful of black tea. "The initial plan is £10,000. As expected of the most famous tycoon in Backlund recently. I can't even guess how many assets you have. First, you donated more than £10,000 of shares, then you spent £20,000 buying Mager Manor, and now you're donating £10,000 to the Portland Mechanical Laboratory. Ma'am Rihanna couldn't help but exclaim. Portland Moment gave a thumbs up. This is a truly keen investor. Klein smiled and said, but I'll still find a team formed by lawyers and accountants to verify the actual situation and stipulate the conditions. Professional matters should be left to the professionals. Besides, I still have to consider investing directly or first establish a company or foundation and complete the investment through it. Oh, Portland, I think there's one aspect that you didn't take into consideration. How can such an important laboratory not have any security measures? Aren't you afraid of commercial spies or foreign powers infiltrating and causing destruction? Portland Moment was taken aback as he slowly nodded. That makes sense. I previously neglected this problem. Having accomplished his goal, Klein no longer harped on the topic. Instead, he deliberately asked, has there been news regarding Brigadier General Conas Kilgore? Mock sighed and said, no. Civilau's Yard said that Mager Manor and the surrounding areas have been searched. They didn't even find any leads. As he spoke, the House of Commons Member of Parliament lowered his voice and said, I suspect that the Brigadier General had an accident while carrying out a secret mission. The current mood of the higher-ups has been a little strange, from a certain point of view. You guessed right. Klein sighed. I hope nothing happens. Amidst high tea, Klein took note of the time and went to the bathroom. Above the gray fog, he placed the Dreamwalker characteristic into the junk pile that seeped out of the mutated bottle. By the time high tea ended and he returned to 160 Buckland Street, the sky had already darkened. The street lamps on both sides of the road were lit up ahead of time as the rain pattered down the carriage windows. Now, all the questions are concentrated on what's hidden in the Blood Emperor's ruins. As long as the three churches discover the problem in time, they can prevent many things from happening. Klein looked out at the street lamps that looked blurry from the rain as he considered the recent developments. For now, apart from capturing Katerina, I can't provide much help. Furthermore, the goddess is digesting or controlling death's uniqueness. She might not have the power to provide a response at that level. Read the next chapter on our VIPnovel.com to solve this problem. I either get a grade 0 sealed artifact with a targeted effect from the Holy Cathedral, or I rely on the Church of Steam and Storms and see which one of the true deities will respond. A grade 0 sealed artifact might not be enough since it involves a king of angels, and there might be traitors amidst the two churches. Traveling from 39 Buckland Street to Unit 160 didn't take long. Before Klein could straighten out his thoughts, he had already returned to his doorstep. He had no choice but to get off the carriage. When he changed his clothes on the third floor, his spiritual perception was triggered. He saw Rionette Tinker walk out of the void with 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in hand. It's from Sharon? A guess came to him as he received the letter. That's right, one of the heads held by Rionette Tinker replied. Without another word, Klein opened the envelope and unfurled the piece of paper. There was only one line on it. We'll take action at 10 tonight. Chapter 1058, A Tool. Tonight at 10. Looking at Miss Messenger, who stayed in place, Klein walked to the desk and wrote, I'll be on time. In addition, the situation in Backlund has become tense recently. Make sure to keep the matter under control. After reminding Sharon, Klein folded the letter and took out a gold coin and a rectangular diamond that kept refracting light. This is a yesterday once more charm. It can allow you to temporarily borrow powers from your past self. Klein handed the 3 items to Rionette Tinker. One of the blonde, red-eyed heads in Rionette Tinker's hands opened its mouth and bit down on everything. The remaining 3 said, Why? Give me. Count it as part of the remuneration I'll be paying in advance, Klein said with an ordinary smile. A Rhodes's reminder made him feel that it was imperative to make more preparations. Rionette Tinker didn't ask further. The 4 beautiful heads bobbed up and down from their hair as though they were nodding. She then stepped into the void and vanished from the room. Looking at the light rain and the dark sky outside the window, Klein took off his coat and handed it to his valet, Inuni. 9:50 p.m., on a street near the Tussock River in Sherwood Borough. In the commonly seen autumn-winter rain in Backlund, a rental carriage turned in and slowly moved forward. On the carriage, the red-eyed Emlyn White, who was holding a top hat in his hand, looked at the young man with pale looks and disheveled hair before curling his lips. Is it here? The incorporeal figure, Marie, nodded. He pointed to a neighboring building diagonally across at the shops over there and said, That's right. That's a bookstore. The owner's name is Charlie Raker and is pure Loanese. However, he went to the southern continent once when he was young, hoping to become a tycoon. There, he became a member of the Rose School of Thought and a believer of the Chained God. He was later sent back to Backlund and was made to gather intelligence, as well as provide assistance to the other Rose School of Thought members who are executing other missions. We've been watching him for a while and wish to finish him off and sever the source of intel for the Rose School of Thought, so that we can create a better living environment for ourselves. However, we ultimately held back. Emlyn smiled and said, "The facts have proven that tolerance can indeed be exchanged for better results." To be honest, your performance is quite different from what I imagined for a temperance faction wraith. I thought you would be very terse. Marie glanced at the vampire, who was already a viscount. Different people have different personalities, and temperance is only meant to control excessive desires. I'm afraid you wouldn't understand, and that it would affect the final result of the mission if I didn't explain this matter too clearly. That way, the desires that need temperance will exceed the limits of what it should be. Although it's very philosophical, there's no need to use me as an example. Emlyn leisurely leaned against the wall and looked at him. Continue with the previous topic. Marie looked out the window again. In Charlie Raker's house is a female servant from the Paz Valley. She's also a member of the Rose School of Thought. In addition, in the two houses diagonally opposite to Raker's house lives a widow and a male alcoholic. They're believers of the chained god, and they would transmit information to the Rose School of Thought at critical moments. The thing you need to do is to secretly monitor these three people while we're dealing with Charlie Raker. Through the information sent, you'll be able to lock onto the person in charge of the Rose School of Thought in Backland. Of course, we'll definitely give Charlie Raker some opportunity to seek help or send out a signal. Emlyn nodded slightly and said, "I understand." He then turned his head to look at the sky, which had dark clouds that blanketed it, blocking out the crimson moon. He turned the ring with the ghostly blue gem on his ring finger. This was the Oath of Rose ring. It allowed Earl Mistral to share his sense of sight, hearing, and smell. This ring went around one big circle and ended up back in Emlyn's hands. Of course, it was only temporary. As such, Earl Mistral had already heard what Marie had said and shared it with the other sanguine participants. Emlyn originally believed that although he was only the intermediary who was in charge of communication and didn't play an important role, even if that were the case, he felt that he was able to showcase some of his spells as a Scarlet Scholar, allowing him to pass the information in a really cool and elevated manner in front of Wraith Marie. To his surprise, he didn't need to do anything. All he needed was to be on scene wearing the ring. This made him very depressed. He felt that he was purely a tool. Without being a demigod, I'm not qualified to directly participate in many things, much less to save the race. At that moment, Emlyn felt a little impulsive. He felt that his level wasn't worthy of his secret identity and that he was unable to bear the responsibilities he needed to bear. As for the Oath of Rose's effect of being able to allow the thoughts of the two wearers to appear in the minds of the other party from time to time, Emlyn wasn't worried. He had asked Miss Justice to hypnotize him so that he wouldn't think about matters that he didn't want the sanguine upper echelons from knowing tonight. Just as he had this thought, he suddenly heard Earl Mistral's voice. Arrogance, childish, naive, this is a particular thought of Earl Mistral that was transmitted by Oath of Rose. Emlyn scoffed inwardly as he began chanting a name. Ernst Boyar. Ernst Boyar. This Viscount had been hypnotized under the protection of Earl Mistral and had been volunteering at the Harvest Church for a long time. At that moment, Marie glanced at Emlyn's expression and nodded. Your current attitude is reassuring. Very serious, very solemn, and very focused. Emlyn was first taken aback before he curled his lips slightly. Thank you. The second floor of the bookstore was Charlie Raker's house. This businessman was over 50 years old, and his parents had long passed away. Despite being never married, rumors had it that he had a few illegitimate children, but none of them lived with him. After instructing the servants to check if the house's windows were locked, he returned to his bedroom and poured himself a cup of red wine. He sat on the sofa and savored it in a relaxed manner. He was used to drinking some wine before sleeping. When he finished the red wine, Charlie Raker stood up and walked towards the bathroom. When he passed by the full-body mirror in the bedroom, he casually took a glance, and his body suddenly froze up. In the mirror, his face had unknowingly turned abnormally pale. His eyes were protruded, and blood was seeping from the edges. The corners of his lips were slightly red. As a member of the Rose School of Thought, Charlie Raker wasn't unfamiliar with such a situation. He didn't scream or run recklessly like ordinary people. Instead, he raised his right hand and extended it to his chest. Just as he touched the accessory he was wearing, his body felt like it had fallen into an unmeltable icy abyss. It was cold from the inside to the outside. The cold seemed to have a life force of its own as it expanded rapidly and covered every corner of Charlie Raker's body. It made him feel like his joints and muscles no longer belonged to him as they began to abide by the commands of others. At that moment, it was as if there was another person in his body. It was cold and blurry, filled with malice. It directly took over everything other than his thoughts. At the same time, Charlie Raker saw new changes to his body in the mirror. Two figures appeared in his eyes. One was a young man in a white shirt and black vest. With his right hand having made contact with the object at his chest, a bright light flashed in front of him. The light seemed to come from a miniature sun, casting light and heat in every direction. Charlie Raker immediately felt warmth and was no longer controlled by the cold in his body. He blurted out a word. Cleanse. The miniature sun in front of his chest burned intensely. It was like warm water that surged into his chest, forming ripples. With that, Charlie Raker regained control of his body and gave up on the door. Instead, he ran towards the window. The curtain wasn't drawn, and it was drizzling outside, dimming the street lights outside. Tap, tap, tap. When Charlie Raker walked past the carpeted coffee table area, he suddenly stumbled and nearly fell. The carpet seemed to come alive as it wrapped around his ankles. Bang! The coffee table flew up, and the porcelain teacup and all sorts of documents landed on Charlie Raker's face. It shattered to pieces, turning into a strange, dismembered puppet. Suddenly, Charlie Raker's figure appeared elsewhere as he continued running with a sense of fear lingering in his heart. He had never hated his bedroom for being this big before. Tap, tap, tap. Fountain pens shot randomly, and paper swatted around as Charlie Raker finally ran to the window. As a devout believer, he didn't break out of the window immediately. Instead, he held the curtain and pulled it. At the same time, he pressed his other hand onto the gas pipe. A layer of white frost instantly formed on the black metal surface. Crack! The glass window in front of Charlie Raker shattered as every piece of glass flew out like a bullet and hit the merchant's face, piercing through his perfectly fine skin. It caused blood to gush out at his neck. Charlie Raker's eyes darkened, and he fell back weakly. During this process, he screamed and yelled, but his voice couldn't be heard beyond the room. At this moment, in another room, a maid from the southern continent could clearly see the light from the gas wall lamps shaking. She immediately turned her head and looked towards where her employer was, only to see that the gas pipes there were covered in white frost. In a house opposite to Charlie Raker, the brandy-nosed man, who had rolled up sleeves and gulping down alcohol, suddenly noticed that the curtains were only half closed. For the secret signal that he and Charlie Raker had agreed upon, having the curtains completely drawn meant that there wasn't a problem. Having half the curtains drawn or only one side meant an emergency situation. It required him to inform the higher-ups immediately. He abruptly stood up. Chapter 1059, The Authority of the Moon. The red brandy-nosed man rushed to a safe within a few steps where he then took out a radio transceiver and a codebook from a secret compartment. He crouched there and transcoded the incident that happened to Charlie Raker. Then, he started to send the telegram. Meanwhile, in the house above the Raker bookstore, a brown-skinned maid rolled up her sleeves and poured an indigo-blue liquid on her left arm. Her skin around the spot immediately changed colors, but under the indigo-blue colors, there were wisps of black light extending out like threadworms. These black beams of light quickly manifested a strange, palm-sized face. Its eyes were as tiny as rice grains, and its mouth was as wide as a tea plate. Charlie Raker has had an accident. The maid enunciated each word while looking at the face on her arm. Every word she said seemed to have its own shape, forming an indigo-blue-bodied entity like her mouth and arm. Immediately following that, the words that seemed to be written began to intertwine as they were enveloped by smoke of the same color. At this moment, the strange face on the maid's arm slowly opened its mouth and sucked in the indigo-blue smoke and text. All the abnormalities vanished, other than the patch of skin on the maid's arm remaining an indigo-blue color. In the darkness outside the window, a tiny, ordinary bat flapped its wings, changing its motionless state and flying off to some unknown location. On another street that was less than 500 meters away from the Raker's bookstore, in the air above a restaurant that specialized in southern continent cuisine, tiny bats flew out from the darkness and gathered together, forming thick smoke. The smoke and bat appeared incorporeal and disappeared in the blink of an eye. All that was left behind was a man wearing a tuxedo without the corresponding hat. This man was thin, tall, and upright. He had light-colored hair that was nearly silver in color. His eyes were bright red like blood as though blood was hidden within. He was none other than Sanguine Earl Mistral. He raised his left hand with the ghostly blue gem ring and touched the slightly exaggerated bow tie. He looked down at the restaurant that had already closed and said, "Both pieces of intel eventually led here." As soon as Mistral finished speaking, a figure appeared in front of him, wearing a black regal dress and a bonnet. She had light blonde hair and blue eyes, and her face was pale like a rather intricate doll. The trees on the street below suddenly swayed gently as the light from the gas lamps flashed. A puppet. Earl Mistral nodded slightly and acknowledged Sharon's status and level. Sharon ignored him and looked at the second floor of the restaurant. There are remnants of Mother Tree of Desire worship. Then there's no problem. Mistral turned around in midair and nodded towards the darkest area. Lord Nibs, please seal this place. An elderly, deep sigh sounded before a pair of wings covered in dark-colored skin and countless patterns suddenly extended out of the darkness. It extended out, turning broader and bigger, taking 2 to 3 seconds to envelop the entire area. The restaurant sank into an unnatural state of darkness, as though it had been moved out of the real world. Mistral didn't hesitate, nor did he attack directly. He took out a bronze box embedded with many ruby gems and took out something from it. It was a transparent glass sphere that resembled an eyeball. Then, the sanguine Earl, Mistral, grimaced as the glass sphere fell from his fingers and landed downwards. The glass sphere emitted a glint in the darkness as it constantly changed directions and moved towards something in the air as though it was being attracted by something. Finally, it landed in a room on the second floor of the restaurant. A dazzling white light exploded. It was as if a sun had risen in the room, illuminating everything. It made all the corruption, decadence, evil, undeath, and darkness rapidly melt away. Mistral, who had already closed his eyes, suddenly frowned and let out a puzzled voice. He didn't feel any resistance from that restaurant. Sharon, who looked down from above, leveled her gaze. Although there wasn't much of a change in her expression, her tightly bound blonde hair seemed to shake a little. After the sun rose, it quickly set. The bright white light shone helplessly and silently in the darkness. As this was an item that was targeted at evil spirits, the building in the restaurant didn't suffer any damage. The sanguine Earl, Mistral, opened his eyes and looked at it for 2 seconds before reaching up with his right hand and clenching it. The darkness above the restaurant instantly came to life, transforming into illusory chains that bound the entire roof. Amidst the jarring sounds, the roof was forcibly uprooted and suspended in midair. Without this obstacle, be it Mistral or Sharon, they could clearly see the situation in the target's room. On a square table covered in table linen, a radio transceiver sat on it with a transcoded telegram message beside it. In contrast, the ground was indigo blue and charred. On the other side of the room, there was an old piano. The piano stools were brown in color and seemed to have been moved moments ago. On the piano, there was a cup of red wine. There was a small, sticky, flesh-colored figure soaked inside. As for the decorations and layout, it was like any normal residence. The only difference was herbal powder and essential oil extract splattered around. This made Sharon, who could directly obtain information from the spirit world, have a thought. The person here had just left. Before she, along with Earl Mistral and Marquis Nibs, could react, the flesh-colored figure soaked in red wine emitted a misty glow. The light instantly burgeoned and brightened, forming a gigantic, crimson moon in the room. The crimson moon's glow dispersed the darkness of the region, making the demigod participating in the battle feel as though they were on the ground and looking up into the sky. Sharon's blue eyes froze for a moment. She raised her left hand suddenly and flipped it gently, revealing a dark red accessory in her palm. The accessory looked like a full moon, and there were crimson gems embedded around it. In the center, there were symbols filled with full moons and mysterious labels. This was the scarlet lunar corona which Sharon had obtained thanks to Sherlock Moriarty's help. It kept emanating a tranquil halo, imbuing the wielder with immunity to the effects of the full moon. However, the crimson moon in the restaurant wasn't something that was as simple as a full moon. It was even closer to a blood moon, or even stronger. An indescribable surge of spirituality came into existence, making the area which Nibs's gigantic wings had isolated present a strange, deeply silent feeling. Even though Sharon wielded the scarlet lunar corona, she sensed the maleficent thoughts in her burgeon as though an indescribable change was brewing. She instinctively wanted to turn into an evil spirit and hide in objects like the trees and gas lamps along the streets. However, her rationality stopped her impulsive reaction because the crimson moon's illumination had no blind spots. At that moment, the sanguine Earl, Mistral, saw his stomach bulging bit by bit. He felt that the life pulsing in his veins was slowly condensing as though making an attempt to take form. As a supernatural creature that could use the power of the moon, he hadn't prepared to eliminate the effects of a blood moon. He originally believed that he would be filled with joy in such an environment, allowing him to freely show his prowess. But he never expected the abnormal changes to far exceed his expectations. He felt that if this continued, he would give birth to new life. It was unknown where this terrifying vileness stemmed from. The authority of the moon included fertility and proliferation. At the same time, from the huge bat wings that isolated the surroundings and created darkness, white fur grew out in an extremely harrowing manner. Nibs grunted softly as cracks appeared in the sealed-off area. A few streets away, a bored Emlyn White was rubbing the blue gem inlaid Oath of Rose. It was at this moment, Emlyn suddenly obtained the senses of Earl Mistral, seeing and hearing what he could. The feelings and thoughts that belonged to Earl Mistral were transmitted into Emlyn's mind after a long period of time. He sat up straight in fright. His expression distorted as his stomach churned, feeling the urge to vomit. With the help of creeping hunger, Klein's actual body was hiding in the shadows outside the restaurant. But the marionette he controlled, Kona's Kilgore, had already hidden into the darkness created by Nibs and used distortion to circumvent the isolation, staying within range of his control of the spirit-body threads. At that moment, under the illusory crimson moon's illumination, he was surprised to discover that his marionette, which was intrinsically dead, had an inclination towards reproducing, and that new life was definitely the offspring of the mother tree of desire. This is sanguine ancestor Lilith as mentioned in the legends of the City of Silver, as well as the manifestation of the primordial moon, which Emlyn has mentioned before. Indeed, the mother tree of desire has already grasped a portion of the moon's authority and has corrupted it into an especially evil state, far more than it originally was. Klein was just about to swap locations with his marionette and enter the region illuminated by the crimson moon and teleport away with Miss Sharon when he felt an indescribable sense of joy within him. It was the joy of seeing a flower in his garden slowly bloom after a long night amidst the morning fog. It was the joy from leaving the city and heading to the suburbs, taking in fresh air in a forest after the rain, watching mushrooms grow. It was the joy of seeing everything grow healthily with new life descending upon the world. The white fur on the huge bat wings fell off completely as Earl Mistral's protruding belly shrank back. The look in Sharon's eyes, who struggled to hold on to scarlet lunar corona, seemed to relax. Right on the heels of that, the crimson moon in the restaurant quickly dimmed, as if large amounts of light had been sucked away by someone. Finally, the crimson moon vanished and everything returned to normal. Did Sanguine Duke Ulmer take action? Klein nodded thoughtfully and continued hiding in the shadows. Mistral restrained his anger and looked down at the dining room. He said in a low voice, "The target seems to have detected something ahead of time. It wasn't that much earlier." Combining the present situation and the revelations obtained from the spirit world, Sharon gave her answer. Mistral's bright red eyes revealed a strange glint as he observed for a few seconds before saying, "It was almost at the moment we came over when the person left. The person who left behind the glass of red wine and the strange puppet. This trap doesn't look like it was prepared. It's closer to a last-minute setup." Upon saying that, Mistral looked at Sharon and said, "How did they detect danger in such a timely manner?" Sharon's expression was calm as she replied, "It's not because of the mother tree of desire. This evil god wasn't capable of infusing too much energy into reality, making it difficult for her to send any preemptive warnings." Chapter 1060, Covered Up Secre. The sanguine Earl, Mistral, frowned slightly. Although he was unwilling to admit it, he said rather honestly, "I don't think there were any leaks prior to this. Because if that was the case, the Rose School of Thought's demigods would have had plenty of time to use the response from the mother tree of desire and abomination Sua, laying a more dangerous and terrifying trap. It wouldn't be something an angel could easily resolve." This was also the reason why Mistral had said that the trap appeared to be a last-minute setup and looked rather hasty. This proved that there was no mole. After all, the ones who knew of the operation before tonight were the ones involved. If they wanted to leak the information, they could have done it earlier. This was unless someone changed their minds or wanted to use the urgency of time to obtain more benefits. And all of these would only leave clear traces. The black bonnet Sharon continued looking at the restaurant that had lost its roof. After a moment of silence, she said, "Perhaps it's a way of detecting danger via other means." For this operation, the Sanguine had used a sealed artifact that could even disrupt a devil's danger premonition, much less things like spiritual intuition. Possibly, Mistral couldn't think of a better explanation. At that moment, in a room on the second floor of the restaurant, other than the red wine and strange figure evaporating, everything else remained untouched, as if nothing had happened. Originally, Sharon and Mistral could attempt using divination to find answers to their questions and restore what had happened before the attack. But now, they couldn't do so because the surrounding area had been illuminated by the crimson moon. It was equivalent to receiving the corresponding cleansing from the mother tree of desire. This meant that divination easily led to this evil goddess, and the results would be unimaginable. Without waiting for Sharon to speak, Mistral took a silent, deep breath and said, "There are incidents in every matter. There's no such thing as a 100% success rate. Let's leave it here today. If we stay here any longer, the officials might discover something amiss." As soon as he said that, the black chains hanging from the roof instantly turned dim and illusory. The roof descended once again, covering the second floor of the restaurant and looking no different from what it was like before. Of course, when the storm rained, there would definitely be water leaks. If there was a storm, the entire roof would be thrown up again. The gigantic bat wings that blanketed the area shrank back into the darkness as the drizzle once again took center stage. Hidden in the shadows, Klein watched as Miss Sharon's figure rapidly turned transparent and vanished. He saw an illusory cloud of smoke puffing up and countless tiny bats flying in every direction. He couldn't help but frown and silently mutter to himself. What exactly happened? It wasn't worrisome to have an accident. What was worrisome was not even knowing what the accident was. Regardless of what one's level was, the unknown was always frightening. At that moment, he suddenly heard a staccato voice. What exactly happened here? When Klein turned his head, he realized that Miss Messenger had walked out of the spirit world at some point in time, standing alongside him. The four blonde, red-eyed heads in her hands were all trained at the restaurant. Can you see what happened here earlier? Klein asked hesitantly. After the mutant pathway reached the Wraith stage, the Beyonder was free to enter and exit the spirit world, allowing them to receive revelations from there directly. Be it their spiritual intuition or divination, they were rather formidable at that. A corresponding sequence 2 angel was definitely powerful in such aspects. Therefore, Klein posed the question. The four heads held by Rionette Tinker shook as they said in unison, "No." Klein nodded thoughtfully. Without further questions, he controlled his marionette to leave the area. Emlyn White, who had retched for a while, rubbed the ring that was embedded with a ghostly blue gem. He muttered to himself in surprise. It ended just like that. Through the oath of Rose, he could sense Earl Mistral's frustration, anger, and reluctance to vent his anger at a lady or others. His initial judgment was that the operation had failed because of an accident. It's over. Upon hearing his words, Marie was equally stunned. He had actually wanted to ask Emlyn White the reason for his sudden nausea and grimace, but he had perfectly tempered his curiosity and restrained his urge. Tish, I didn't find the target. Emlyn tried his best to recall what Earl Mistral had seen and heard, but due to the seal by Marquis Nibs, he was only able to see the situation via Oath of Rose after the Crimson Moon rose, and these feelings were made ineffective quickly after the anomaly. At the same time, Emlyn mumbled inwardly, the demigod from the Temperance faction came here while possessing a doll? Which master's work is this? It's simply art. Didn't find the target? How can that be? Marie's brows furrowed uncontrollably. From his point of view, everything in the operation had been going smoothly up till that point in time. Whether it was him, Sharon, or the Sanguine, none of them had the motives to leak the information to the Rose School of Thought. As for Sherlock Moriarty, he had proven his credibility through numerous collaborations. Suppressing his immense disappointment and puzzlement, Marie said without much change in expression, then weave to leave the vicinity as quickly as possible. As soon as he said that, his figure began to fade, revealing the qualities of a wraith. Emlyn subconsciously wanted to ask him if he knew of any doll masters, but after opening his mouth, he found that it was damaging to the image of the Sanguine. Therefore, he could only swallow his words back down. Even if I know that master, I don't have the money to buy it. To bear the burden of my mission, I have to sacrifice something. Unfortunately, we didn't capture the demigod of the Rose School of Thought this time, making it impossible to figure out the current situation of their headquarters. It'll be difficult to receive that holy artifact of the ancestor. Amidst Emlyn's thoughts, his expression slowly turned grave. Backlund Bridge area, Iron Gate Street, in one of the billiard rooms of the Bravehearts Bar. Klein, in the image of Sherlock Moriarty, was sitting opposite Sharon and Marie. After a brief moment of silence, the black regal dressed Sharon, who was seated on a high stool, said to the detective, "What are your thoughts on the matter?" Klein thought for a moment before saying, "The influence that the Crimson Moon brought was quickly destroyed." What you mean to say is that since the Rose School of Thought's demigod had already sensed the immense danger through a certain method or a certain existence, why would he set up a trap that didn't have any effects? Marie exchanged looks with Sharon before asking in thought. Yes. Klein nodded. He should be able to foresee that under such dangerous circumstances, a trap at this level can be easily resolved. Then, why would he waste time setting it up and not flee immediately? This is the natural instinct of a living creature. Wearing a small bonnet, Sharon moved her head indecimably. On the surface, it's a trap, but it's actually to cover up something? Klein replied, delivering the sentence at a slower pace. Yes, using such a trap to cleanse the scene and stop any divination to conceal the actual situation back then. Only if there's a secret to hide would a demigod from the Rose School of Thought take the risk and stay on the scene for such a long period of time. But it's also possible that they didn't expect us to have an angel from the Sanguine to help deal with the trap, Marie suggested. Klein smiled and said, they wouldn't ignore the angel behind you. For you to have launched a surgical strike on the concealed Rose School of Thought members in Backlund, you must have defectors who know them well. He was referring to the existence of Rionette Tinker. What secret would they need to cover up? Sharon seemed to accept Klein's suspicion as she sat upright and asked. Klein shook his head. There are too many possibilities. Perhaps they discovered the secret of the attack in time. Perhaps they were planning on plotting something in Backlund. Having said that, Klein tried to consider if the Rose School of Thought was associated with the current tense situation in Backlund, but he realized that there was no place for them. Be it the orthodox deities or the evil gods, they were unlikely to work with the Mother Tree of Desire. This puzzled Klein even more. He didn't know what kind of unknown accident such an unknown factor would brew. He paused for a moment as he swept his gaze across Sharon's and Marie's faces. In short, we need to be careful and cautious. We need to avoid coming here as well. Yes, under the premise that you can ensure your own safety. Try to monitor other members of the Rose School of Thought again and see if we can figure out the secret they're hiding. Thank you. Sharon's figure floated up and bowed. Marie did the same. The scarlet flames soared up as Klein vanished from his spot. According to the agreement, as he didn't have the chance to take action, the only remuneration he received was one free instance of help from Rionette Tinker. After returning to 160 Buckland Street, Klein took off his clothes and went to bed early, hoping to wake up early. Suddenly, he heard a series of illusory pleas. It was from a woman, Miss Justice. With a guess, he nodded and entered the bathroom. He took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. As he had expected, the supplicant was Justice Audrey. This lady had gathered £12,000 in cash, hoping that Mr. Fool could transfer it to Mr. World to complete the transaction of the Dreamwalker and Hypnotist Beyonder characteristics. Yes, if the ritual can be replaced by Angel's Embrace, Miss Justice can try to advance in the next 2 days. When that happens, it's time to place the exploration of Grozel's travels in the schedule. Leonard has already become a spirit warlock for days and has nothing to do. Klein heaved a sigh of relief and replied to Miss Justice, getting her to begin the sacrifice. With the current situation becoming more and more tense, with more and more unknown factors, he wished to strengthen himself as quickly as possible. This included many aspects. First, the increase in the number of marionettes and sealed artifacts. Second, the recovery of his helpers. And thirdly, a further grasp of knowledge and secrets. This aided him in knowing the truth and obtaining the true attitude that the different factions have, thus finding an opportunity from within. The exploration of Grozel's travels corresponded to the third point. Chapter 1061, Whose Dream? Friday. In the dead of the night, in Audrey's bedroom. After receiving a signal, the golden retriever, Susie, opened the door and left by herself, slumping down outside to prevent anyone from disturbing Audrey. Audrey took the Dreamwalker's Beyonder characteristic, the corresponding supplementary ingredients, and the apparatus used for concocting the potion out from a hidden spot. Most of the supplementary ingredients came from the City of Silver, and they were things that she hadn't paid for since Little Son hadn't thought of something he needed. She concocted the potion skillfully and looked at the liquid that was dotted with darkened points of grayish-white light. She took a step back, clasped her hands, and placed them in front of her mouth as she chanted softly, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era." Just as her prayer ended, countless figures in an indescribable form appeared in front of her. They quickly swam and meshed with one another as though they were active in the sea. Above the sea were 7 pure beams of differently colored light that seemed to contain infinite knowledge. Above these 7 lustrous brilliances was an endless grayish-white fog, and above that was a towering and magnificent palace. At that moment, the door to the palace opened as a figure formed from golden light spread out its 12 pairs of wings formed from scarlet flames and flew down, landing in front of Audrey. The 12 pairs of fiery wings were layered as they wrapped the blonde, green-eyed girl into an embrace. Such a scene only lasted for a second or two before vanishing. It was as if she was hallucinating, but Audrey always had the feeling of being immersed in this kind of holy and lofty feeling. She calmed down and sincerely thanked Mr. Fool. With Angel's Embrace, she could maintain lucidity in her dream and wake up whenever she needed to. She didn't have to worry about being engrossed in her dreams and being unable to extricate herself. This meant that she had already held the corresponding ritual for Dreamwalker, and the effects were definitely better than what it could have been. After all, not every hypnotist can obtain such benediction from a hidden existence and be embraced by a special angel such as this. Audrey, all the best. Audrey mumbled inwardly before she stopped hesitating and picked up the glass bottle, drinking down the potion inside. The potion wasn't as bad as she imagined it to be. It was a little sour, a little sweet, a little bitter, a little surreal, and a little stimulating. It was like a wild dream she could let herself loose in. Before she could feel the effects that the potion exerted on her body, Audrey was suddenly startled before she regained consciousness. She saw that the night was becoming dawn outside the window, with the sun rising from the horizon, dyeing the sky red. Within the garden, flowers were blooming, the tips of the blades of green grass shimmering with crystalline dew. It was as if Audrey had become the ruler of this world. Her consciousness floated up as she looked down upon the various scenes. Her father and mother held hands as they strolled down the garden trail, taking in the fragrance as they bathed in the morning light. Having worked through their differences, her 2 brothers, Hibbert and Alfred, rode on horses and brought servants along with them. Laughter accompanied them as they entered the woods, competing against each other for a more successful hunt. The ambassadors or special representatives of the various countries like Fasak, Intis and Phaenopotter signed an agreement at Loan Sodila Palace, announcing to the world that a war wouldn't happen, thus dispersing all the dark clouds in the sky. The smog situation in Backland improved. Every company's factory had passed the double review of the Alkaline Industry Inspector and National Atmospheric Pollution Council, and they had promoted such standards to other countries. Maximum working hours and the basic labor environments for workers were guaranteed, and the development of every industry was getting better. The number of tramps had dropped to an unimaginable level, and all kinds of protective measures spearheaded by the kingdom covered everyone. There were more and more workers who could afford bicycles. On the streets, the bicycles clustered together like a huge army, driving in different directions amidst ringing sounds. Children didn't need to work in factories at a young age. They could giggle and fool around, running into classrooms with tables and chairs. Inside, they flipped open their textbooks and began listening attentively. If they didn't wish to study, it was solely of their own choice, not because they lacked the conditions. Women were no longer discriminated against due to their gender. Even a laundry maid could rely on studying to obtain knowledge and find better jobs. There were reporters, teachers, policewomen, soldiers, miners, and civil servants, seen in every walk of life. All kinds of mechanical items appeared on the streets and alleys, bringing the people convenience and joy. In the square in front of the Evemite Cathedral, pigeons flew up and landed. People were either sitting or playing the accordion, fully enjoying their lives. This was Audrey's dream for the future. Unaffiliated Beyonders didn't have to worry anymore. As long as they received a checkup of their physical mental condition, they could walk openly and use their Beyonder powers to earn money in a legal way. This is really wonderful. If it weren't for me being clear-headed, I would have lost myself to this. I would have descended from my commanding position in my consciousness, taking a stroll with my parents, hunting with my brothers, and occasionally going to school to teach children. I would often work hard for the extension of the world's peace. Audrey stared at the dream, feeling a bout of poignancy. She then felt her astral projection rise once again, breaking out of the confines of the hazy world. She saw that her dream was like a huge bubble that grew out from the island of consciousness while silently enveloping it. The air bubble was surrounded by a gray fog. From afar, she could vaguely see other air bubbles, and below them were their corresponding islands of consciousness. Deep within the gray fog was a silent, undulating, shimmering, wavy, illusory sea that seemed bottomless. The sea of collective subconscious. This is the scene of a mind world for a dreamwalker. Only from Manipulator onwards is one really able to interfere with the sea of collective subconscious. Audrey nodded in enlightenment and retracted her gaze. Without staying any longer, she forcefully escaped from her dream. Her vision returned to normal immediately as it remained pitch black outside. Only the street lamps around the garden were emitting light. She then cast her gaze on the full-body mirror in her bedroom. She felt that she didn't seem too different from before. Only when she observed carefully did she realize that her pair of green eyes were becoming more limpid and deeper, as though they could reflect the souls of others. Closing her eyes and taking in the knowledge brought by the potion, Audrey quickly grasped the core power of Dreamwalker. By guiding and controlling a dream, she could obtain information and affect the enemy. There were two aspects. First was guidance, which was similar to Nightmare of the Evernight pathway, by using the different changes in a dream to guide a target into revealing one's deepest secrets. The difference was that a nightmare could forcefully pull a person into a dream. However, dreamwalkers weren't capable of doing so unless they were combined with hypnosis. The second was alteration. By modifying a target's dream, one could influence a target over a long period of time, changing them and making them do things they wouldn't usually do without them realizing it. The principle behind such an alteration used a dream as the incisive points and the astral projection as a point of leverage, slowing contaminating the target's soul body before affecting the body of heart and mind, planting it deep in the subconscious. Compared to directly using hypnosis, a control that stemmed from dreams was more mild and furtive, making it difficult to be noticed and suitable for targeting targets at a higher level. From the looks of it, most matters that involve love at first sight might have had a few hidden cases that were a result of dream alteration. Yes, amongst many popular best-selling novels, the female lead often dreams of a figure and spends a beautiful, romantic time with him. Therefore, when they encounter the male lead who's similar to the figure in their dreams, they will quickly succumb to them and have a strong penchant for love. Audrey recalled the novel she read in the past and suddenly found it amusing. To her, be it guidance or alteration, they weren't an essential enhancement over hypnosis. Instead, there was another beyonder power that she liked even more. It was dream traversal. This made her body turn incorporeal, as if she was an elf in a dream or a dreamwalker. Not only could she directly hide in someone else's dream, but she could also jump from a dream to another dream, completing a blink in the physical sense. The restriction of such traversals was that the distance between two dreams couldn't exceed 500 meters, and they had to belong to intelligent creatures. In special environments, this can effectively hide myself. Why didn't Vin Rambus directly affect me through dream alteration? Because this place is protected by the church? The Evernight pathway is also skilled in the domain of dreams. Audrey thought as she began converging her spirituality. In the ancient palace above the fog, along the long bronze table, Klein sat a few seats diagonally across from Leonard. Why are you suddenly looking for me? Leonard leaned back in his chair and asked lazily. Regardless, he still remembered that this place belonged to Mr. Fool, so he didn't dare appear too casual. Klein glanced at him and said, I need your help with something. You need my help? Leonard pointed at himself and asked in surprise. Are you referring to Pallas? He didn't think he could help a demigod like Klein. You have a very clear understanding of yourself, Klein said. However, I'm really looking for you this time. It mainly involves a few dreams. Dreams. Leonard came to a realization as he said with a hint of puzzlement and laughter. Klein, you seem to have changed a little. I mean, you've become more like the past, no longer wearing that gloomy expression. Without waiting for a reply, he straightened his disheveled hair and smiled. That's a good thing. Well, I'm still quite good at dreams. Who do the dreams belong to? Without batting an eyelid, Klein replied. A lone soldier from more than 100 years ago, a fourth epoch aristocrat, an ascetic from the third epoch, and an elf and giant from the second epoch. What? Leonard asked with his green eyes wearing a blank look, wondering if he had heard wrongly. Ignoring the elves and giants from the second epoch, even the nobles of the fourth epoch had to be from particular beyonder pathways, and to have become saints before they could survive to this day. It can't be that they're all angels aside from that lone soldier, right? Entering the dream of angels. I think it's better to find old man. Leonard's thoughts churned instantly as though he was in a dream. Chapter 1062. Teaching Online. Klein glanced at Leonard and smiled. The targets aren't demigods. They've only lived to this day due to some sort of influence. This is also the secret I wish to discover through dreams. He deliberately emphasized the word lived. Without waiting for Leonard to respond, Klein continued. The aristocrat from the fourth epoch is a member of the Zoroast family. You might be able to use his dream to learn more about Pallas Zoroast, old man's descendant. Leonard's heart stirred as he looked forward to the proposal that Klein raised. Although he had gotten along rather well with Pallas Zoroast and gradually built some trust in this angel, he still held the most basic level of vigilance against him. After all, he was an outsider who lived in his body. At that moment, Klein added, For now, don't mention this matter to Pallas Zoroast. Do you think I'm such an unreliable person? Leonard grumbled inwardly as he replied, There's no need to remind me. Seeing that Leonard had agreed, Klein smiled and said, Get me a few drops of your blood when you return. This is necessary to explore the dreams. He didn't specifically mention how to give the blood to him. After all, Leonard knew at least two methods. Firstly, he could sacrifice it to Mr. Fool and request that he bestow it to the world. The other was to summon the messenger of mysterious origins and place the blood inside a bottle, sending it over with a letter. Blood. Leonard subconsciously repeated the word. In mysticism, one's blood was an important item. It was best not to give one's blood to others. Otherwise, they might die without knowing the reason. Sometimes, death wasn't the most terrifying outcome that could happen. After a brief moment of hesitation, Leonard nodded. When will the exploration begin? Klein was prepared for this question as he replied, Late Sunday night, close to midnight. He wanted to give Miss Justice time to converge her spirituality and familiarize herself with her abilities. All right. Leonard didn't say anything else. Following that, Klein seriously explained skills in sophistry so that the dear poet knew how to pacify his grandpa after returning. After returning to the real world, Leonard was deliberating over his words when he heard Pallas Zoroast's slightly aged voice. Why did your former colleague look for you? Is there anything that cannot be explained in a letter? Leonard adjusted his sitting posture and chuckled. He's afraid that the letter will be leaked. After all, it might involve that person. Just as he finished his sentence, Leonard inwardly mumbled, Of course, the most important thing is to be wary of you. What I see is equivalent to what you see. That person, Pallas Zoroast seemed to understand who he was referring to. Yeah. Leonard picked up a cup on the table and drank a mouthful of malt beer. He found an ascetic from the third epoch. He hopes to learn the history of that epoch through his dream. What Leonard said was the truth, but it was only a portion of the truth. This was the skill that Klein had specially taught him. An ascetic from the third epoch? He's still alive? Pallas Zoroast asked in surprise. Of course, he wasn't too surprised. After all, at his level, even if he didn't grasp 100 methods that allowed people to live from the third epoch, he knew at least 5 or 6 methods. The easiest way was to steal the time or life of others to imbue it into a target. He's likely still alive, but has a very special condition, Leonard explained what he knew. Palaz Zoroast fell silent for 2 seconds before saying with a chuckle, "Is that so? Then I can only wish you the best in not seeing scenes you shouldn't see in the dream. Of course, your former colleague is protected by an existence of concealment, so he must be prepared." Leonard didn't respond to the topic. He suddenly exclaimed, "Old man, are you actually not the least bit curious? Don't you want to know what the true deities were like in the third epoch, or the cause of the cataclysm?" This was the second technique in sophistry that Klein taught him. Rather than being asked, it was better to take the initiative to ask questions. "I can roughly guess what's going on," Palaz Zoroast replied with a sigh. He then scoffed. "You took too much initiative to control the flow of our conversation today. This is very different from your past behavior. This means that you have a secret you're hiding deep down. Not bad, it's much better than the past. At least it's not something that can be seen through at once." Leonard's expression froze. Palaz immediately chuckled. "See, I just gave it a try and you exposed yourself. You still lack training. Your former colleague is really TSK." Leonard could only respond with a dry chuckle. He put down his cup and leaned forward. He then picked up a silver ritual dagger and cut open a wound, causing a few drops of blood to drip out. Meanwhile, at Earl Hall's residence, Audrey was also holding a dagger with gems embedded in it. She was preparing to fulfill the promise of providing help for free. She moved the tip of the dagger towards the back of her hand. "The pain is very mild. The pain is very mild." As she hypnotized herself, she exerted force and tore open a wound. It was currently impossible to tear her skin without using strength, even if she didn't reveal her dragon scales. On Sunday night, after attending a ball, Klein returned to 160 Buckland Street. He made up an excuse that he was feeling tired and needed to sleep early. In the wee hours of the night, he got out of bed, set up a ritual, and summoned himself. After some work, he sat in the seat that belonged to the world German Sparrow. He confirmed that once the summoning ended, he could use the gray fog's level and standing to forcefully extricate himself from Grozel's travels. At that moment, in front of him were 3 metal bottles and a silver mask. The former was filled with his, Leonard's, and Audrey's blood, while the latter was sacrificed by Miss Justice ahead of time. As she knew that Mr. Starr would be involved in the exploration of the dream this time, she planned on wearing lie the entire time to mask her face and avoid her identity from being uncovered. After examining it for a while, Klein made the hard-covered, deep brown Grozel's travels to fly out of the junk pile and land on the long bronze table. At the same time, he placed the unshadowed crucifix into his body. Following that, he pulled Justice Audrey and the Star Leonard above the gray fog. 2 dark red beams shot up at the same time, forming rather blurry figures. Audrey and Leonard cast their gazes at the bottom of the long, modeled table and sized up the items in front of Mr. World. Then, their attention was drawn to the ancient book. Audrey's eyes darted around as she curiously asked, "Our exploration this time is related to this book?" "Yes, our targets are inside this book," Klein replied with a smile. "Inside the book?" Leonard asked in surprise. Even though he was a red glove and had also read a large number of supernatural case files, he had never heard of communicating with characters in a book. Klein nodded slightly and said, "Yes, this is a magical book. Inside it, there is a world that was envisioned. What happens in that world becomes the book's contents." Envisioned. Audrey acutely grasped the key phrase, linking it to its synonyms. She had only just learned a few days ago from Mr. World that the spectator pathway sequencer was called visionary, and she knew very well that the king of dragons, the ancient god, Anquelt, was the dragon of imagination. After some deliberation, Klein said, "My description might not be accurate. It might be an envisioned world or a true dream. The only thing I can confirm is that it was created by an ancient god from the second epoch, the dragon of imagination Anquelt. I obtained it from Vice Admiral Iceberg, ancient god's relic. It's no wonder that it can make a giant and elf from the second epoch, a third epoch ascetic, a fourth epoch human aristocrat, and fifth epoch Loanese soldier survive till now." Leonard came to a realization as he couldn't help but size up the world German Sparrow. He couldn't imagine what kind of experiences Klein had ever since he left Tingen. At this moment, Klein looked around and pushed the lime mask to Miss Justice as he said, "Let's head on in." "All right." Audrey put on the silver mask. Leonard looked around and nodded. "Okay." Klein immediately picked up the 3 metal bottles and poured out some of the blood inside, smearing it on the cover of Grozel's Travels. So this is what the blood was for. Just as this thought flashed through Audrey's mind, she saw a white snowy storm. Amidst snowflakes the size of down feathers and a biting cold wind, a city that was more than 15 meters tall stood nearby. A soldier wearing leather armor on guard by the gates was huddled in a spot that was immune to the wind and snow. As long as there weren't any merchant convoys, he wouldn't head forward to block any ordinary pedestrians. This is a world that was completely envisioned. It's like it's real. Leonard looked around as he spread out his palm and caught several snowflakes. He felt the coldness of its touch before they quickly melted into water. After confirming the environment, Leonard suddenly realized something. Klein was maintaining the image of the cold and refined Gehrman sparrow. Miss Justice wore a silver mask, revealing the bottom of her face, green eyes, and blonde hair, making it impossible to imagine her actual appearance. As for himself, he didn't disguise himself at all. This was a habit of official Beyonders. They openly carried out missions without any disguises. Mr. Star really is laid back, and his hair is combed very casually. It's such a pity. Otherwise, with his looks, he can be a model on the covers of magazines. As a noble lady who had seen too many handsome men, Audrey politely glanced at him before retracting her gaze without making any excessive observations. Klein chuckled inwardly and pointed at the city in the snowstorm. Our first target is the ascetic, Mr. Snowman, from the third epoch. This was the person most likely to have a link to Amon and his brother. According to Klein's plan, after Snowman would be the fourth-generation aristocrat, Mobit. This was because giant Grozel and elf Ciatas involved matters at much higher levels, and there was a high chance of there being an accident. Therefore, it was safer leaving them at the end of the schedule. After the exploration of the four people's subconscious via their dreams, they would then enter the sea of collective subconscious in search of any possible secrets. Chapter 1063, The Lord's Left Hand. Chapter 1063, The Lord's Left Hand. In a rather remote spot in Pesot City, there was a building made of stone. It looked rough and was a cathedral that needed some construction work. The most eye-catching and intricate part was the altar. Erected over it was a wooden cross and a tall figure carrying the cross. Ascetic Snowman was sitting in the first pew, facing the divine statue, his head bowed and his eyes closed in focused supplication. He was a middle-aged man who wasn't considered old but had some wrinkles. He was wearing a simple white robe that had been washed countless times. He had brown short hair, and on his exposed arms, shoulders, calves, and feet, there were all kinds of old scars and scabs. At that moment, two men and a woman appeared at the cathedral entrance. The men were dressed in black robes that were completely different from the surroundings. One was wearing a vest and half-top hat with a formal bow tie, and the other casually wore a white shirt. The former had a pronounced outline with a cold expression, while the latter had black hair and green eyes. He looked pretty good, exuding the romantic air of a poet. The lady was wearing a long white dress that was tight at the waist with frilly designs at the sleeves. Lacy flowers were sewn in a meshed manner at her chest. She wore an intricate silver mask, revealing a pair of emerald-like eyes, her high nose, her lip-glossed lips, and lower half of her face. It prompted anyone who laid their eyes on her to imagine how beautiful her actual appearance was. They were extremely attractive. It was the same regardless of the angle one took. However, the passers-by, and few members of the congregation, and the praying ascetic didn't even give them a look, completely ignoring them. This was a combination of hallucination and psychological invisibility. Audrey was already in operation mode, no longer showing any curiosity. She swept her gaze and said in a gentle voice, "What's most important now is to get Mr. Snowman to sleep. Otherwise, we'll have to wait until tonight. The night in this world. Relax. It's trivial," Leonard replied with a smile. Compared to Miss Justice, who had only experienced a few supernatural incidents, as a nighthawk, he was already too used to such things. He was very composed and even wanted to joke with Klein. Of course, he didn't know that Miss Justice had recently hypnotized a demigod. Klein glanced at his former teammate. "Then let's begin." He was carrying unshadowed crucifix on him, and in less than 3 hours, he would be dropped back to Sequence 5 and have his Bizarro Sorcerer Beyonder characteristic purged, so he naturally didn't want to waste any time. He's back in his crazy adventurer state again. TSK. Leonard didn't beat around the bush. He raised his hand to neaten up his hair as his green eyes suddenly turned deep. Silently, the praying ascetic, Snowman, had fallen into a deep sleep. This is the Beyonder power of a nightmare. Looking at this scene with sparkling eyes, Audrey thoughtfully muttered to herself. In fact, she was aware of the powers of a nightmare, having seen them in action before, back when they were dealing with the Sanguine Viscount, Ernst Boyar. However, she was unable to grasp the full picture of it due to the urgency of the situation. It was only now that she made a complete observation of it. Right on the heels of that, she raised both her hands and grabbed the arms of the world and the star. Using her abilities of Dreamwalker, she led them into Snowman's dreamscape. "I can do it myself," Leonard mumbled the moment he entered the hazy world. Klein and Audrey ignored him and quickly surveyed the area, taking in the entirety of Snowman's dreamscape. They were also inside a cathedral, an unusually majestic cathedral. Ancient stone pillars propped up a towering dome, but they didn't make the hall appear too segmented and cramped. It still remained extremely spacious. The cathedral's door was wide and tall, even for giants. Lined on both sides were candles placed in silver cups that emitted a warm glow. The altar right in front was grand and magnificent. Above them were grayish-white crosses and a sculpture of God bearing the cross. The statue's face wasn't very clear, but it felt like it was showing pity towards all beings in the world. Snowman was similarly sitting in the first pew facing the holy altar. His head was bowed and his eyes closed in focused supplication. This is similar to the afternoon town's abandoned cathedral that little son showed to us. It should be a building from the same era. Audrey swept her gaze across the brick arches and whispered. At the same time, she tried to suppress her curiosity and told herself to remain calm. Little son? How is he little? That fellow is clearly taller and larger than me. Afternoon town's abandoned cathedral. Leonard thought in puzzlement as he lampooned. When he joined the Tarot Club, the son Derek had long returned to the City of Silver. Although he would occasionally mention the exploration of the giant king's court, he didn't conjure any of the corresponding images. Indeed, Klein retracted his gaze and agreed with Miss Justice. Then, he said to her, try to guide Snowman's dream and get him to reveal the important information in his subconscious. Focus it on the kings of angels. This mission could be accomplished by both a nightmare and dreamwalker. The reason why he had Miss Justice do it was because he wanted to give her a chance to digest the dreamwalker potion. After all, Leonard had already passed that stage. And no matter what, in matters that involved the subconscious, Beyonders of the spectator pathway were definitely more professional. The way they carried it out would be more precise and effective. It was only then that Leonard realized a problem. Miss Justice's abilities involved the domain of dreams. This meant that she had already advanced to Sequence 5 Dreamwalker. Isn't that too fast? Leonard was secretly surprised and in disbelief. He remembered that Miss Justice had mentioned it during their exchange when he joined the Tarot Club. It hadn't even been a month since she became a hypnotist, and now, only 3 months had passed. She had indeed tried to purchase the ingredients needed for her advancement at the tarot gathering, but to completely digest the hypnotist potion in 4 months is shocking enough. Leonard's mind raced as he had a baffling feeling that the pride of becoming a Red Gloves captain, a quasi-high-ranking member of the church, a Sequence 5 spirit warlock was gone. While his thoughts were running wild, Audrey tersely acknowledged the request and took a few steps forward to stand beside Snowman. Illusory ripples suddenly appeared in her jewel-like eyes. Those ripples constantly sank deep into the depths, returning to the darkness and tranquility. Invisible ripples emanated out as the altar in front of the cathedral suddenly turned blurry. These magnificent objects, along with the cross and the divine statue, warped and suddenly unfurled, emitting lights and shadows that weren't considered too intense. The light and shadows intertwined into a three-dimensional portrait of a towering mountain range. The main peak reached high into the clouds, but the white cloud didn't dare to conceal the main peak as it automatically separated around the peak's 2 sides. On the peak of the mountain stood a huge cross that was even taller than the mountain. In front of it stood a majestic figure that was covered in layers of stacked halos. 2-winged, 4-winged, and 6-winged angels were either holding bugles, playing the harp, or playing flutes, dancing around the majestic figure as they sang and extolled. 8 blurry figures with 12 pairs of wings surrounded the majestic deity. Some fell to the ground beside his feet, leaning against him, as if completely relying on him. Others floated on both sides, awaiting his orders. This was a scene that Klein had seen before. He knew that the deity was the ancient sun god, and he knew that the figures with 12 pairs of wings on their backs were the kings of angels. At that moment, Snowman opened his eyes and looked at Justice Audrey. As if teaching his student, he solemnly said, "Only the Holy Spirit can truly serve the Lord. This is the goal I've been chasing my entire life. I see the Lord standing above the infinite radiance, benevolence scattering over his kingdom and the land. Around him are 8 kings. The dark angel was the first angel created by the Lord. He is his left hand, his proxy and the deputy of heaven. The angel of imagination is the Lord's eldest son. The Lord said that in a distant future, you will become the savior of all life. The angel of time is the Lord's second son. The Lord said that you are a god of trickery and a god of mischief, the light at the dawn of the apocalypse. The white angel, wind angel, and angel of fate are loyal followers of the Lord, firm, brave, honest, having been that way from the time when they were weak till they became strong. The wisdom angel was sanctified due to his redemption from being penitent and contrite, completely opposite from the ones who fell after eating the fruit of sin. The war angel is the Lord's rage, the Lord's punishment. His appearance over the land means war is at hand, from the looks of it. This ascetic has never been to the ancient sun god's divine kingdom, nor has he ever seen a king of angel. What he's describing is probably from religious canon. In other words, what he says is what the official text says. From the looks of it, Dark Angel Sasser was really the leader of the kings of angels. He was most trusted by the ancient sun god and was called the deputy of heaven. Yet, such an existence was him, bewitched. I wonder what his outcome was in the end, and why there aren't any traces of him to date. Klein seriously listened to Snowman's description and had a clearer understanding of the kings of angels. He never expected that the ancient sun god would predict that Adam would be the savior. This left him somewhat puzzled. So these are all the 8 kings of angels. Leonard listened attentively as well. This was something that Old Man Pallas hadn't told him in detail before. It was a real secret from ancient times, something that happened before the cataclysm. Audrey had seen the mural of the 3 kings of angels eating the city of Silver Creator. Through the corresponding images, she had matched them to the eternal blazing sun, the Lord of Storms, and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, so she wasn't too surprised. She turned her head and looked at the world and the star, calmly interpreting the hidden meaning behind those sentences. According to what Mr. Snowman said, the Dark Angel was created. The 3 kings of angels, White, Wind, and Fate, had followed the ancient sun god from a weak stage until they slowly empowered themselves. The weak stage here probably refers to sequence 4. The wisdom angel should be an outsider who joined later, and he might have been from an opposing faction in the beginning. When he heard Miss Justice's words, Klein suddenly remembered a name. It was the Dragon of Wisdom as mentioned in the City of Silver's myths Harabergen. He then nodded, indicating for Miss Justice to continue. After Snowman recited some related scriptures, he suddenly solemnly said, "Our diocese has cultists who believe in the Evernight hiding within it. These are the orders from the kings." Chapter 1064, Drawing Closer. Cultists who believe in the Evernight. Upon hearing Snowman's words, the 3 present were more or less thrown into an awkward situation. Klein, Audrey, and Leonard all had a certain relationship with the Evernight goddess. One was a standard cultist who believed in the Evernight. The other wasn't only a cultist, but a quasi-high-ranking member of the cult, an elite team leader. The other was even worse, a blessed of the evil goddess. Ahem. From the looks of it, the Church of Evernight appeared earlier than what the historical record stated. They can be traced back to a long time before the cataclysm. However, it existed in the form of a secret organization. Klein cleared his throat and did a simple analysis, breaking the sudden silent mood. Audrey pursed her lips and nodded. She continued guiding Snowman's dreams, letting him reveal the information related to the King of Angels in his subconscious. Unfortunately, Snowman was only a Sequence 5 ascetic. He would be considered a quasi-high-ranking member in the 5th epoch and would be able to come into contact with several important figures and historical secrets. However, before the cataclysm, a Sequence 5 didn't enjoy such a status. He wasn't even able to enter the divine kingdom, so he naturally knew little about the kings of angels and the ancient sun god. What he knew was limited to what was written in the various religious canons. However, Klein keenly noticed that he had mentioned something. There were traces of the remnant giants in the Northern Ridge mountain range. This mountain range's present name was Antares, and it was located within Fasak. It made it easy for him to associate this information with the people of Fasak claiming to be descendants of giants, how the god of combat was a giant, and other information. Seeing that there was no connection to the kings of angels, Audrey switched to guiding Snowman's dream into presenting what was most important and influential to him. The majestic cathedral they were standing in began to shake as changes silently happened. In just a few seconds, the cathedral's scale shrank. Outside was a square that had been renovated. Snowman knelt in front of the cross and divine statue, his body bathed in pure sunlight. A blurry figure in simple priest robes appeared beside him, speaking with a loud and solemn tone. "Are you willing to choose the path of an ascetic, to give up love, to distance yourself from indulgence, to not wield power, to train your mind, and to temper your mind, allowing you to approach our Lord by entering heaven one step at a time?" Snowman devotedly kissed the ground and said, "I'm willing to choose the path of the ascetic. I'll give up love, distance myself from indulgence, not wield power, train my mind, and to serve the Lord. It will be so forever and ever from this day forth. It will be so forever and ever from this day forth." The more Snowman spoke, the more resolute he became. In the end, he solemnly repeated his promise. This is the one thing that left the deepest impression on him and has resulted in the deepest effects on him. Audrey turned her head and said to the world and the star. Thinking back on Snowman's past performance and recalling how he never gave up on his beliefs, nor stopped his ascetic training despite being stuck in the book world, Klein nodded gently and sighed. He is a true ascetic. Audrey retracted her gaze, and after guiding Snowman to present something that was more important to him, she returned to the world and the star and said in a gentle voice, "There shouldn't be much left." Klein glanced at Snowman and said, "Let's go to the next spot." Inside a house in Pesot City, Mobit, with his brownish-yellow hair, dark brown eyes, high-nosed bridge, and thin lips, was wearing slightly furry pajamas. He laid on a bed that was half high and half low, as he stared at the ceiling, muttering to himself, "Winter year is much colder than usual. It's starting to snow. Although it's almost noon, Don't want to get up at all. Ziadas, why does an elf like you insist on sleeping in? You even pressed your hands and feet on me. I really miss being single. I could roll around freely in bed. Every comer will be mine. Unlike now, sigh. On the bed, Elven songster Ziadas leaned her body sideways while sleeping comfortably. Not only did she occupy nearly half of the bed, but she also left a large amount of space on her side as her body clung close to Mobit. She left one arm and leg on him, squeezing Mobit to a corner of the bed, almost to the point of falling off. After pulling up the blanket that was pinned down, Mobit sighed and closed his eyes, preparing to sleep again. Then, he really fell asleep. In his dream, he sat at the bar counter, alternating between sipping hard liquor and gulping down beers. He didn't return home as he claimed he would wait for Ziadas to come begging him to return. Is this the aristocrat from the fourth epoch? At the entrance of the tavern, Leonard glanced at Klein. Klein gave a clear answer. That's right. Mr. Starr's tone and actions suggest that he's more nervous than before. He seems to care a lot about this aristocrat from the fourth epoch. According to the information given by Mr. World, a certain person that Mr. Starr knows might have seen the second blasphemy slate, and that's an extremely ancient divine artifact. Although I can eliminate the possibility of seeing it in the fifth epoch, powerhouses of the fourth epoch are more likely to have a chance of coming into contact with such matters. So, this aristocrat from the fourth epoch is related to the person Mr. Starr knows? Audrey grasped certain matters through fine observation and interpretation. With this as a premise, she quickly came to a conclusion. Mr. Starr would step forward and suggest that he would guide the dream. As expected, the fourth epoch revered asymmetrical beauty, but such attire really made me uncomfortable. Leonard teased before looking at Miss Justice and the world Klein Moretti. Let me do it this time. Read the next chapter on our VIPnovel.com. All right. Audrey replied with a brisk tone and smile. This was a development that Klein was happy to see. He naturally wouldn't stop it. That wouldn't be an issue. Leonard then tugged at his collar and walked to the bar counter in a few steps. He sat beside Mobit and ordered a local Sanjian beer. He gulped and suddenly said, "You look like a member of the Zoroast family. Everyone here knows that." "No, not just humans." Mobit took a sip of his alcohol and continued looking forward. Leonard smiled and shook his head. "Let me introduce myself. I'm a student of Palaz Zoroast." He planned to use this identity to pull strings and reduce any sense of reluctance Mobit would have, making it easier for him to continue guiding him. Indeed, the person Mr. Starr knows is also a fourth epoch aristocrat, a member of the Zoroast family. I wonder what level that person is. So Mr. Starr is secretly a student of a certain important figure. No, he said that without complete confidence. A self-assumed student? Audrey validated her guess as her smile became more obvious. After hearing Leonard's self-introduction, Mobit finally turned his head and sized him up. He scoffed and said, "Student? More like the target of parasitizing, right?" Leonard's expression froze. Target of parasitizing. Although Audrey was mentally prepared, she couldn't help but twitch her eyebrows. As for Klein, he had a hard time holding back his laughter. Of course, he didn't believe that there was anything wrong with Leonard's identity as a student of Palaz Zoroast. If it were him, he would have said the same thing. It just wasn't right to directly mention that he was a parasite's victim, right? And being friends appeared too distant, a disadvantage for any subsequent attempts to learn more. The problem this time was that nobody expected Mobit to guess the truth. After laughing twice, Mobit looked at Leonard's slightly stiff face and said, "You aren't a member of our Zoroast family, so how can you become old man's student? You can only be a target of parasitizing." Having said that, he slowed down and said, "Don't worry. Old man isn't too bad. He wouldn't really take over your body. After the parasitizing is done, he will at most take away a few years of your life. You're still young anyway, so raising your sequence would make up for it." Haha. Actually, most Beyonders can't live till the end of their natural lifespan. Why must he take a few years of my life? Leonard subconsciously asked. Mobit raised his glass and gulped down a mouthful. He replied in a daze, "Since you've already been parasitized, something must be stolen, right?" Leonard snapped out of his daze and asked in surprise, "You also call him old man?" "Of course, we all call him old man." Haha. He doesn't seem to object to it. Mobit suddenly sighed. "He is my great-grandfather, and I haven't seen him for 1,000 years. No, 2,000 years. So the reason why old man tolerates me calling him old man is because it can remind him of the beautiful past. I wonder if his direct descendants are still alive." Leonard suddenly felt wistful. As for Justice Audrey, while she was finding the words "something must be stolen" funny, she was surprised at the word he. This represented that old man, Mr. Palaz Zoroast, was an angel. Indeed, Audrey had expected this. At this moment, Mobit sharply noticed a keyword and asked, "Also? Why did you say also? Do you also call him old man?" Leonard nodded seriously. Mobit was instantly puzzled as he sized up Leonard again. "Don't tell me you have the bloodline of the Zoroast family?" "I don't know. Leonard answered honestly. Mobit shook his head. No, it doesn't look like that's the case. It might be that old man suffered a terrible blow and has changed to a certain degree. That I know. Leonard pondered and said. He was nearly killed by blasphemer Amon. He hasn't recovered yet. Grozel's travels was currently above the gray fog. It didn't matter which deity's true name was mentioned in it, since it wouldn't be sensed. Therefore, Klein, Leonard, and Audrey were free to talk about Amon and Adam. The powerful and terrifying ancestor of the Amon family. Mobit's voice unconsciously lowered. Leonard finally gained the initiative and asked, the aristocrats of the Solomon Empire are all very cold and evil. Why isn't the Zoroast family like that? Chapter 1065, Cosmos Wanderer. Chapter 1065 Cosmos Wanderer. Mobit glanced at Leonard and said in puzzlement, they aren't that cold and evil. He raised his glass and took a gulp. Don't you know that the higher the sequence, the greater the inclination is towards being cold and crazy? Which major aristocratic family in the Solomon Empire doesn't have an angel? That's why they're definitely different from normal people. As for the degree of coldness and evilness, it has to do with the choice of their anchor and the traits of their beyonder pathway. I don't know what my great-grandfather's situation is. I only know that he's very kind and amiable, and the way he speaks and acts is rather casual. In addition, the rules set by His Majesty have a key point: is harmony. If all the aristocratic families have the same style, he definitely wouldn't be satisfied. The first reason given was something I expected, but the second reason is a little unexpected, but it's quite funny. Was the Black Emperor of the Solomon Empire trying to get himself diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder? Disharmony is actually a requirement. Without wearing too thick a mask, the corners of Klein's lips curled up slightly. At this moment, Audrey turned her head to look at him and asked the same question that she had as Mr. Star, Anchor? All of them knew that the aesthetic taste of the fourth epoch was disharmony and asymmetry and had considered it common sense, so they didn't think too deeply about why there was such an aesthetic style. To the deities, believers in faith are an anchor, Klein simply explained. So that's the case. Mr. Fool also said that it's to stabilize one's condition. Audrey felt her sights broaden, allowing her to consider the relationship between the deities and believers. At the same time, she thought in puzzlement. In the early stages of Mr. Fool's reawakening, he shouldn't have many believers. Back then, what was his anchor? Leonard listened attentively as he couldn't help his expression from turning solemn. It was as though he had suddenly thought of many things. He quickly focused his attention on Mobit. After some deliberation, he said, what kind of an angel is Pallas Zoroast? What kind of habits does he have? Leonard is still very cautious. He still hasn't fully believed that the grandpa in his body is Pallas Zoroast. Yes, we can't rule out the possibility that the real Pallas has fallen, and that the one still alive is an imposter. To an angel of the marauder pathway, such an action is rather normal. And to his secret existence, replacing a particular identity is equivalent to possessing that identity, so he wouldn't deliberately expose the truth. On more important matters that he's interested in, and those that involve his safety, Leonard is more reliable than I expected. If not for that, he wouldn't have realized that I was still alive back then. As for other matters, he's just too half-hearted. He's too used to using his past experience. It's not that he isn't intelligent, but rather that he can't be bothered to use it. Klein couldn't help but sigh. Mobit was taken aback for 2 seconds before he drank a mouthful of hard liquor and said, old man appears to be an ordinary elder at home. He's a bit naggy and likes to throw blows at his descendants, and enjoys life. If one didn't know it ahead of time, no one would have guessed that he is a Sequence 1 angel. His aesthetic style is different from His Majesty. He is absorbed over categories and emphasizes cleanliness and tidiness. When facing enemies, he is good at trickery and often likes to finish off his enemies by making them break down. This is quite similar to how old man has acted to date. Leonard nodded and asked, do you have his portrait? How could I be carrying a portrait with me? It's not like I'm looking for anyone. Mobit shook his head in amusement. At this point, Leonard suddenly pointed to the side. Isn't that it? Mobit turned his head in confusion and doubt, only to discover that an oil painting had appeared in his right hand at some point in time. As he picked up the oil painting, the content on it gradually became clearer, revealing an old man with dark brown eyes. The man's hair was already completely white. It wasn't very sparse, and it was neatly combed to the back of his head. His forehead, the corners of his eyes, and the corners of his mouth didn't seem to have any wrinkles, not appearing too old. It was obvious that he looked quite good when he was young. He looked quite similar to Mobit, but he exuded a rather solemn air. I really can't tell that this is a Sequence 1 angel. Is this also because he didn't reveal his mythical creature form? Audrey tiptoed and looked at the oil painting. After Leonard memorized the contents of the portrait, he mentioned a few relevant questions related to the Zoroast family and received a satisfactory answer. The only exception was the name of the potion names of Sequence 3 to 0. Mobit wasn't too sure either. All he knew was that Sequence 1 was apparently Worm of Time. After ending this topic, Leonard asked about the Solomon Empire. In your era, what major aristocratic families are there in the empire? There weren't many families with dukes. Mobit put down his cup and spread out his palm. Our Zoroast family, the Abraham family, the Zeratul family. In addition, although the Medici family and Lord Ouroboros didn't have any aristocratic titles, their standing wasn't worse than the major aristocratic families. Every time he spoke, he would curl his finger, finally curling them into a fist. Then, he smiled and said, at that time, although Tudor and the Trunsoist were the most loyal angels under His Majesty, they were still ranked beneath us. They were on par with Augustus and Castilla. The history of the Augustus family can actually be traced to the era of the Solomon Empire. While Audrey was surprised, she became even more focused on listening. Leonard thought and continued asking, in that era, what was the situation in the northern continent? All living creatures submitted to His Majesty. Even deities acknowledged His Majesty's rule in order to fight against opposing factions. Mobit chuckled. They all have countries that belong to them in poorer places. In short, Evernight, god of combat, and death were at odds. The three deities of storm, blazing sun, and wisdom had a great conflict with each other. Earth's attitude was vague and unclear, but she was more inclined towards the god of combat. This made them unable to cooperate in a stable fashion, thus being unable to form an alliance to fight His Majesty and the true Creator. At this point, Mobit sighed and said, and precisely for the sake of balance, His Majesty didn't attack the southern continent and allowed death to unite the plains and the ancient forest to build the Balam Empire. No, ultimately, the six deities came to an agreement. Hence, the Black Emperor perished, establishing the Tudor Trunsoist United Empire. Leonard recalled Palaz Zoros's mention of this particular phase of history and, for a baffling reason, felt how history was filled with vicissitudes. At that moment, Mobit turned his head and looked at him. Do you have cigarettes? These little devils that came out from the true Creator's believers aren't bad at all. Leonard immediately controlled the dream and conjured a cigarette before handing it over. Is this an improved version? Mobit stretched out his right hand and snaked out a ball of fire from the kitchen behind the bar. He lit the cigarette and took a deep breath. Seeing smoke coming out of his nostrils, Leonard asked curiously, the true Creator's believers like to smoke? That's right. Even Lord Medici would occasionally smoke a few sticks, although it's just a habit for him. Mobit answered without hiding anything. Leonard nodded and asked, which deity do you believe in? Of course, it's His Majesty. All the aristocrats in the empire believe in His Majesty. Other than Lords Medici and Ouroboros. They believe in the true Creator. Also, Duke Bethel Abraham might just be faking it. According to what I know, he only believes in himself, Mobit quipped. Bethel Abraham. A thought came to Klein. He was about to signal Leonard to ask further when he heard the poet ask, is Duke Bethel Abraham very powerful? Clearly, the completely different behavior compared to the other aristocratic families in the empire made this ancestor of the Abraham family stand out. Very powerful. Even Lord Medici and Ouroboros are afraid of him, Mobit said as he puffed out smoke rings. In the Warring Era, he was publicly acknowledged as one of the angels most likely to become a deity. Warring Era? Leonard asked curiously. Mobit looked at the slowly burning cigarette in his hand and said, this isn't thrilling enough. Heh. The Warring Era refers to the time after the Cataclysm ended to the point when the empire was established. It lasted about 112 years. Our Zoroast family's first angel perished in the Warring Era. Thankfully, we were helped by His Majesty before he became a god. Thus, we didn't lose the Beyonder characteristic. Who did it? Leonard immediately asked. Mobit shook his head. I'm not Sequence 4 yet, so there are many things I'm not qualified to know. Let's talk about Duke Bethel Abraham. I actually don't really know much about him, but I was very interested in their family and the Beyonder pathway they control. It's said that the apprentice can wander the cosmos once they reach Sequence 2. There are also rumors that it's at Sequence 3. Cosmos. Klein's pupils dilated slightly as he became more focused. At this moment, Mobit continued. They left behind lots of information regarding the cosmos, recording many interesting things. Unfortunately, I never managed to borrow them. However, I heard of the 3 laws that they concluded for wandering the cosmos. First, don't respond to any calls. Second, don't be reckless and approach unknown creatures or buildings. Third, endure loneliness. It sounds like the cosmos is vast and dangerous. I wonder if the current Abraham family still has the travel notes related to the cosmos. I'll get Miss Magician to ask in the future. When Klein's gaze swept over, it happened to cross with Miss Justice's gaze that was directed at him. They immediately realized that the other party had also thought of Miss Magician. Leonard did the same. He nodded slightly and asked about other matters. During this process, the dream changed with Mobit's memories. Following that, they saw the appearances of Medici, Ouroboros, and other high-level figures. Of course, as Mobit had few interactions with the Black Emperor and Bethel Abraham and didn't dare to look at them head-on, his impression of them was a blur. Towards the end, Audrey grabbed both Klein's and Leonard's arms and jumped into Ciadas's dream. This elven songster was standing in the garden, holding her stomach and frowning at Mobit. "Can you steal the fetus in my stomach and stuff it into your body?" "It can be done, but even if it's stuffed into my body, I won't be able to give birth to him," Mobit replied fearfully. Ciadas thought seriously and said, "Then steal the corresponding organs that are needed? If it's just the simple act of theft, then it might still succeed. But for what follows after, I'll be at my wit's end." "This is beyond my capabilities," Mobit said nervously. The conversation between the human and elf left the trio dumbfounded. After a few seconds, Audrey suggested, "Why don't I do it this time?" Chapter 1066, Familiar Name. Upon hearing Miss Justice's suggestion, Klein thought for a moment and said, "Guide the dream towards matters encompassing the second epic's history, the Queen of Calamity Kohinum, elf habits, and the most ancient language of the elves, as well as the legendary Western continent." "All right." Audrey's eyes moved slightly, revealing a thoughtful expression as she digested the information that Mr. World had said. Then, she walked to the elven songster's side. Under her guidance, Mobit's figure in the garden rapidly blurred as he vanished from Ciadas's dream. The ripples in Audrey's green eyes stirred once again as her lips quivered, as though she was reciting something. The entire dream world began to shake as the garden was like a reflection of a lake that was smashed into pieces by an invisible stone that flew over from nowhere. These fragments quickly gathered, but the scene that was restored was no longer a garden, but that of a palace made of coral. Every detail in the palace was abnormally gorgeous. The entire structure was tall and majestic, but due to the layers of blue seawater, the sky couldn't be seen, making it appear dark and gloomy. Inside it, coral pillars propped up an exaggerated dome, and the walls and the top of it were filled with terrifying murals of the storm. Above the murals and corals, silver bolts of lightning followed a certain trajectory, as if they were alive. Finally, they converged at the 9 steps that were inlaid with pearls, diamonds, emerald, and turquoise. Ciadas was standing there, with many elves standing opposite her. On the 9 steps, there were 2 huge chairs that seemed to be formed purely of lightning. One of them occupied the center, just like the ruler of this palace. One of them was on its left, appearing less eye-catching. Sitting on the throne in the middle was a man wearing a simple loose robe. His ears were pointed, and his facial features were rather soft, and his hair thick. His hair was a mix of black and blue colors. Not only did his facial features look outstanding on their own, they combined together to form an even more handsome face. However, he directly gave one a tyrannous impression, as though he wouldn't say a word before picking up the electric spear leaning on his armrest, and then throwing it. Sitting beside him was a beautiful woman with raven-black hair. Her hair was tied up into a high bun, her ears slightly pointed, and her facial features delicate. She had dark brown eyes that were as deep as the ocean, and in her hands, she was playing with a complicated golden wine cup. Without needing Ciadas's introduction, Klein and company could easily determine that this couple was the elf king, the ancient god, Saniathrim, and the elf queen, Queen of Calamity, Kohinum. That traitor, Ormer. Suddenly, a voice resembling loud thunder boomed, causing the entire palace to shake violently. It made Ciadas and the other attendants lower their heads in fear. This roar came from the ancient god. Ormer, isn't that the name of the giant king? I've recently been drinking red wine named after him. I have to say that its quality is indeed higher than anything else. It's just a little expensive. As Klein listened, he had a random thought. He remembered that Little Sun had once said that giant King Ormer, elf King Saniathrim, and sanguine ancestor Lilith, the 3 humanoid ancient gods, were allies. They fought against the opposing camp formed by Dragon of Imagination, Anquelt, Phoenix ancestor, Gregrace, and the mutant king, Kvaster. As for the devil monarch, Farbody, and the annihilation demonic wolf, Phlegria, they were independent beings who wanted to subvert all order and corrupt all living beings. So, the alliance of 3 humanoid ancient gods eventually collapsed? Klein reined in his thoughts and waited for the subsequent changes in the dream. Due to Derek's existence, Audrey wasn't unfamiliar with the history of the second epoch. Without any hesitation, she directly made Ciadas's dream continue its development. Despite the terrifying roar, Queen of Calamity Kohinum wasn't affected at all. With a cold expression, she calmly said, "Wasn't this already long confirmed? His reputation is exactly the opposite of his physical build." At that moment, the ancient god, Saniathrim, had already been enveloped by bolts of lightning. He said in a thunderous voice, "I thought that, after centuries, he would understand the global situation even more. I've overestimated his intelligence. If he didn't sell out Lilith back then, how could she have perished? The sanguine ancestor Lilith perished so early? Klein's eyelids twitched as he quickly focused his attention. After the Elf King finished roaring, Queen of Calamity Kohinum maintained her previous posture and said, "That's not a bad thing. At the very least, Kvaster and Flegria were dragged to the grave together with Lilith. All the deities no longer trust each other. Even if we don't form an alliance, we can rule the ocean, lakes, and rivers." Upon hearing these words, spectator Audrey couldn't help but feel alarmed. She had no choice but to use placate on herself. It means that the sanguine ancestor Lilith, mutant King Kvaster, and the annihilation demonic wolf Flegria perished in a battle between ancient gods. So the betrayal of giant King Ormur and the other ancient gods had nothing to do with the ancient sun god? This is why Lilith didn't fully die and is still able to occasionally deliver divine revelations? And because of this, the Antigonus Mother of the Sky and Hornacis mountain range managed to survive to the fourth epoch. Klein increasingly believed that the history recorded in the City of Silver had many fabrications or vague records. Thankfully, he hadn't completely digested the Bizarro sorcerer potion and didn't need to consider advancing to Scholar of Yore. Otherwise, the history he used might not be real. In ancient times, the sanguine ancestor Lilith and mutant King Kvaster perished due to the other. The sanguine has recently been working with the mutants' temperance faction. Time sure is a great magician. Haha. If the Moon Emlyn were to know of this, I wonder what kind of expression he would have. The star Leonard sighed as he thought. As their thoughts raced, the ancient god, Sanaithrim, scoffed and said, "Recently, Ormur wanted to work with some secret sects that have sprouted from the humans to deal with us. Apparently, this matter is led by Harvest and Dawn. I'm even thinking of working with Anquelt to destroy the giants and the giant king's court. Unfortunately, every time I see that dragon, I have the urge to string it up on a grill. It's a type of attraction that's simply irresistible." Just as he said that, the ancient god suddenly vanished. The entire palace shook violently, causing a rift to appear. All of this had yet to subside when a bolt of lightning flashed. Sanaithrim returned to the massive throne, holding a spear made of pure lightning. "You went to the giant king's court?" Kohinum asked. "I taught Ormur a lesson," Sanaithrim answered without hiding anything. Ciadas and the other elven attendants lowered their heads even further. They faintly saw slippery tentacles that were thicker than their bodies flipping about on the ground, flashing with silver bolts of lightning. Then, they shut their eyes. The dream changed as Ciadas recalled her interaction with other elves. With their conversations and interactions, Klein, Leonard, and Audrey learned that Ciadas lived in a relatively peaceful time period in the Second Epoch. The giants, elves, dragons, devils, and phoenixes coexisted, splitting up their rule over the northern and southern continent, as well as the five seas. Vampires, demonic wolves, trance, sea monsters, mutants, and humans were vassals of the different factions, occupying the lower middle classes. This doesn't resemble the history recorded by the church. Even the legends in the City of Silver aren't like this. Leonard sighed when he heard that. Old man probably doesn't know this much. That isn't necessarily true. Klein shook his head indiscernibly. Many existences in the Second Epoch have survived to the Fourth Epoch, or even to this very moment. For example, the Wisdom Angel. Leonard asked with a guess. Perhaps. Klein didn't give an affirmative answer as he said with a smile. "When you were talking to Mobit, I thought you would make Miss Justice stand further away." Leonard immediately shot a glance at him and yawned. "You mentioned before that there's an existence behind me that might have been seen the second blasphemy slate. Then, when I was conversing with Mobit Zoroast, wouldn't she be able to make the connection from me getting her to stand further away? Besides, you also mentioned that back when dealing with all of Amon's avatars in Backlund, part of the cleanup operation involved Miss Justice. To a Sequence 5 spectator, what she knows is sufficient. Once she understands the Zoroast family's matters, the truth is practically in front of her eyes. In that case, why waste time trying to avoid her? It's too troublesome. I might as well get Mr. Fool to be a witness, as everyone vows not to divulge each other's secrets." Klein nodded slightly and said, "If you were to get Miss Justice to stand further away, it wouldn't be easy for you to bring up the matter of making a vow to keep things a secret." At this moment, Ciadas continued. "After the death of the sanguine ancestor, the annihilation demonic wolf, and the mutant king, some of their subsidiary gods were killed, while others surrendered to other ancient gods. There were a few who vanished as they hid in the shadows." Having transformed herself into an elf, Audrey immediately asked, "Who surrendered to who? Who died?" Ciadas recalled and said, "I've never even seen it before. The sanguine's goddess of life and the mutant king's god of war were killed. No one even remembers their names. The annihilation demonic wolf's god of the dead, Salinger, came under the phoenix ancestor. The sanguine's goddess of beauty, Aurnia, came under us. the mutant king's god of spiritual creatures, Tolsna, and annihilation demonic wolf's goddess of misfortune, Ammonizes, vanished, Salinger. Aurnia. These two names made Klein's forehead twitch. He instinctively used his clown powers to maintain his facial expression. Aurnia was the Blood Moon Queen, the wife of the fourth Epic's emperor, the empress of the Trunsoist Empire. As for Salinger, he was the founder of the Balam Empire, the emperor of the underworld Death. Chapter 1067, the Elven version of history. This, the second epic's subsidiary gods truly, are hidden powers. There was Dragon of Wisdom, Haraburgenan, there's God of the Dead, Salinger. They were all powerful figures that even reached the throne of Sequence Zero. Of course, I can't be sure about the Dragon of Wisdom. It's just quite possible. Yes, and there's the God of Dawn, Badheil, and the Goddess of Harvest, Omabella. I can't rule out the possibility that they have lived quite well all the way to the fifth epic. I wonder if the god of spiritual creatures Tolsna and the goddess of misfortune Ammonizes managed to evade the authority retrieval operation by the City of Silver Creator at the end of the second epic. If they managed to escape that fate, what roles did they play in the third and fourth epic? After a moment of shock, Klein began thinking poignantly. Thinking back to the betrayal of the kings of angels in the third epic, he couldn't help but lampoon. You have to be careful of fire, theft, and subsidiary gods. At that moment, Audrey, who didn't know much about the subsidiary gods' true names or authorities, didn't show any perturbations in her emotions. She acted as different female elves in Ciadas's memories, and she constantly talked to her about her experiences and things she knew about the second epic. According to Ciadas, in the history of the elves, there was no concept of the first epic or second epic. In the beginning years that were unknown to her, it was chaotic, dark, and crazy, and it didn't leave behind any texts. After the supernatural races obtained a certain level of intelligence and had their own languages, creatures finally had some knowledge of history. In that era, ancient gods appeared one after another. The sky, the land, the sea, and the underground world slowly changed from disorderliness to orderliness. However, other than the tyrannical and crazy ancient gods, no one knew how many years this stage lasted. She just knew that, very, very long ago, it was referred to by the major supernatural races as the Sprouting Era. After this Sprouting Era was the early Era of Fire, in which the 8 ancient gods fought against each other in different camps. This was also a long time before Ciadas's birth, so she could only understand this from the Elven historical records that it was a time when quasi-humans fought non-humans, resisting the corruption and intrusion from the devils and demonic wolves. Amongst them, the humanoids were the giants, elves, sanguine, as well as their slaves. The early Era of Fire lasted different periods of time according to the different records. However, a common point was that it lasted less than 1,000 years, as the essence of the ancient gods was madness, tyranny, cruel, and cold. They were often driven by their instinct. After the sanguine ancestor Lilith, mutant King Kvaster, and annihilation demonic wolf Flegria perished during the betrayal, the E3 RLY Elm of Fire ended, and the war broke out. The world was damaged, and it DDVT stopped for centuries. Due to the fact that the giants and dragons were relatively strong in this period of time, they were known as the Dual Era. By the time the 5 races formed a new balance of powers, the northern continent, the southern continent, the east continent, and the 5 seas had recovered some level of peace. This was when Ciadas was born and had grown up in until she entered Grozel's travels. In the history that she described, there were 2 important points. First of all, it proved the existence of the east continent, a place where the giant king's court was. Second, after this Sprouting Era, the supernatural races had their own kind of civilization. They weren't completely irrational as their descendants believed them to be. Of course, the inclination towards tyranny, cruelty, coldness, and slaughtering still existed, as though they were all in a half-state of losing control. It was only after the Dual Era that the new generation of elves and giants gained some level of rationality. They had feelings just like Ciadas and Grozel. The East Continent seems to be the forsaken land of the gods. It was abandoned during the Cataclysm. Similar thoughts surfaced in Klein's, Leonard's, and Audrey's minds. They were very interested in this, but it was a pity that Ciadas had always lived in the Elf King's court. Their occasional forays outside were limited to parades at sea. She had never been to the East Continent, and she lacked the required knowledge. Under Audrey's influence, Ciadas's dream began to show the traditions and language of the elves. According to the legends that the queen's attendant had heard of, Elvish was created by the king in the Sprouting Era. Every word was produced with the birth of a first-generation elf. The number of Elvish words meant the number of first-generation elves. However, the traditions of the elves weren't too unified. They relied heavily on their surroundings. The elves in the forests and the sea were undoubtedly different in all kinds of customs. What they shared in common was that they believed in the king, who was an ancient god, and his queen. They liked to make food with the blood of their prey. Many of them had culinary methods such as roasting. Even sea elves often came up to the reefs for a bonfire party. They were close to nature and were good at using all kinds of spices. They idolized the strong, and they were proud of being quick to act before thinking. With myths and reality mixed together, it's hard to tell what's real and what's fake. Their traditions have destroyed my previous theories. Klein listened with a stoic expression as he quickly analyzed every word Ciadas said. After figuring out the relevant matters, Audrey circled around the keyword of the West Continent and made Ciadas's dream change. It reflected some of her subconscious memories. The Coral Palace appeared before Klein and company again. Ciadas followed behind Queen of Calamity Kohinum and walked through a crystal window. She glanced at the queen's exquisite and complicated dress, and she stole a glance at the deity who controlled calamities. She asked curiously, "Your Highness, are you looking west?" To the elves, as long as they didn't feel the pressure of violence, they would ask questions on the spot. "Why do you think so?" Kohinum didn't turn back as she asked with an indifferent expression. "I just learned of a legend that our elves originated from the Western Continent," Ciadas replied. "Your Highness, does the Western Continent really exist? Is that really where the first-generation elves were born?" Kohinum's lips curled slightly as she said with a slightly ethereal voice, "The Western Continent may exist, but it may not exist either. Every race needs to give themselves an illustrious origin, a home for the mind." "Ciadas, where is your home to you?" "My home." Ciadas repeated the question as she replied blankly. "It's where His Majesty and your Highness are. It's this palace that can lead to the forest where my parents live." As she said this, Ciadas's emotions gradually turned heavy, lost, and melancholic. It was obvious that she was influenced by her subconscious's corresponding memories. She had entered Grozel's travels and had been away from home for 2,000 to 3,000 years. Therefore, to elves like you, the Western Continent doesn't exist, but to some elves, it definitely exists. Queen of Calamity Kohinum calmly gave her final answer. Ciadas didn't ask further, because she suddenly remembered that the queen wasn't a first-generation elf. Such a response made Klein increasingly confused and puzzled. Thankfully, from the second epoch to the fifth epoch, the Western Continent had zero presence, so it didn't have any important secrets related to him. He was just trying to find out more about it, and hadn't held out much hope. After ending the guiding of Ciadas's subconscious, and since it was almost noon, without any other nearby dreams that they could leap into, Audrey left with Klein and Leonard, and they appeared in Mobit and Ciadas's bedroom. Looking at the fourth epic Viscount whose body had been tightly bound by the elf, Audrey's expression suddenly turned gentle as she said with a laugh, "They seem to be doing pretty well." No. It's terrifying to have such a violent, direct, and imaginative wife who dares to take action. Only a person like Mobit would like and enjoy being with her." Leonard, who didn't have a poet's talent but had the liberal inclinations of a poet, shook his head as he kept his hands in his pockets. At this point, he muttered in thought, "On the contrary, it's true that an experienced thief needs a woman like Ciadas to rein him in. I wonder what kind of members of the opposite sex old man's other family members like. Sigh, they don't need our envy or objections. This is how they live together." Emperor Roselle once wrote a poem, saying, "For my love I'll sacrifice my life." As Klein listened to their discussion, he opened his mouth and closed it again. He didn't tell them that Ciadas and Mobit had actually died. It was only when they died that they truly felt their love for one another. The ones living in the book were just copies created by the book world. After leaving the couple's house, the trio headed to Grozel's blacksmith shop. Along the way, when they went past a street, Klein saw Frunzier, who was known as a philosopher, and Audrey recognized him to be Loanese a glance. "Is that the soldier from 100 years ago?" Audrey slowed down her pace and asked. Klein recalled Frunzier's longing for his hometown, and the ashes he had placed in Backlund's cemetery. He fell silent for 2 seconds before nodding gently. "Yes. Mr. World is feeling a little emotional. He's like a calm river on the surface, with a lot of undercurrents and eddies underneath." Audrey nodded indiscernibly and asked, "Can we enter his dream? I want to get the judge and disciplinary paladin's potion formula." "No problem," Klein replied as he glanced at Leonard. Leonard continued having his hands in his pockets, but his eyes instantly darkened. Sitting on the bench, Frunzier fell asleep. Right on the heels of that, 3 people appeared in his dream. This was a bustling city with buildings made from wood. The pedestrians who came and went were mostly Loanese. The black-haired, blue-eyed Frunzier stood outside a house as he looked in without daring to approach. Only when a woman wearing an old long dress came out from inside did he excitedly go forward and attempt to hug her. His hug went through the woman without them making contact at all. Frunzier stood rooted to the ground as he blankly shouted, "Mother!" Audrey, who wanted to guide the dream, quietly watched this scene. Then, she looked around and discovered the iconic clock. Backlund, Audrey pursed her lips and turned her head. She looked at Klein and asked, "Can't they leave the book world? It's been too long. If they leave, they will grow old, die, or even be reduced to dust." Klein's voice was like a serene river. "I delivered one of Frunzier's items to Backlund." This. As a spectator, Audrey acutely sensed the cruel reality behind those words. She couldn't help but raise her head and look out of the dream, looking at the location where Mobit and Ciadas were. Leonard wanted to ask what it was, but after looking around, he maintained his silence. Following that, Audrey seriously guided his dream. Outside of obtaining 2 potion formulas, she made Frunzier return home and live happily with his parents, brothers, and sisters. It was a beautiful dream. After leaving Frunzier, Klein, Leonard, and Audrey quickly saw Grozel's home. This was the last stop of their exploration. After obtaining information from Grozel's subconscious, they would enter the book world's sea of collective subconscious and seek out the secrets that might exist in this. Book 1, adapted from a Hungarian poet, Sandor Pedophile's Liberty and Love. Chapter 1068, Illogical Details. Which one is Grozel? In the dream, Leonard looked ahead blankly. There was a huge bonfire there, and there were more than 10 grayish-blue-skinned, single-eyed giants who looked no different from each other. To be honest, I wouldn't be able to recognize him without the ability of a faceless. To me, without their age, hairstyle, height, scars, clothes, and maturity, giants all looked the same. Klein mumbled inwardly as he looked calmly at Miss Justice, as though saying that it shouldn't stump a spectator. Audrey raised her hand and pointed at a giant who was gulping down alcohol. From time to time, he would shout twice to express his approval. "That's Grozel." It looks like, in the traditions of the giants, clapping isn't a sign of affirmation and praise. Instead, it's a roar. The louder the roar, the higher the level of praise. Miss Justice is acting like a folk scholar now. Thankfully, he's only shouting and not singing. If not, the noise would be worse. It's obvious that the giants here aren't adept at modulating their voices. That roar from before didn't have any rhythm to it. Klein nodded and said to Audrey, "Begin guiding him then." As Audrey went forward as Leonard stepped back, he raised his right hand and stroked his chin. "Tell me, in the second epoch, which supernatural race widely possessed the beyonder characteristics of the Evernight pathway? Isn't it the demonic wolves?" Klein glanced at Leonard, wondering if the poet had contracted the traditional disease of the Nighthawks having a bad memory. "I know." Leonard maintained his original posture as he said with a strange expression, "Then how do they act as a midnight poet? Or should I say that the potion's name back then was called Midnight Roar? There wasn't a potion name in the beginning." Klein's thoughts were accidentally led astray by Leonard. The scene of such fellows crouching on the ground and howling at the moon surfaced in his mind. He couldn't help but mutter, "This might be more suitable for you. There's no need to write poems, making it very easy." The corners of Leonard's mouth twitched as he said, "There are different types of poets. I'm a singing type." As the two idly chatted, Audrey's guidance attempt gradually pushed through. Grozel's dream began showing the waning forest, barren tunnel, the corner of the giant king's court, Dawn Town, and the nation of gold. Grozel wasn't a subordinate of the deities like the giant king, and he was only able to occasionally see these high-level existences while on duty at the waning forest or in particular spots of the giant king's court and passageway. Furthermore, he didn't dare look at them head-on, receiving them while genuflecting and having his head bowed. Therefore, he wasn't able to present the images of giant King Ormer, giant Queen Omabella, and the eldest son of the giant king, god of dawn, Badhile. They only appeared as portraits. Similarly, Grozel knew very few secrets. His grasp of history and the situation in the world was completely incomparable to Elven songster Ciadas. However, an interesting point was that in the giant king's court and the giants, the traitor was synonymous with Seniathrim. They claimed that his abandoning of the alliance had resulted in the sanguine ancestor Lilith's death. Klein strongly suspected that, because of his bad temper, Seniathrim was obviously not good at such things. The Queen of Calamity seems capable, but the problem is what she plots is extremely hard to hide from her spouse, a true ancient god, Seniathrim. In contrast, giant King Ormer being the traitor makes more sense. Klein did a rough analysis as Audrey changed the direction of guidance in an attempt to let Grozel present anything he had seen or heard beyond the giant king's court. It was a pity that, shortly after the giant left the king's court and passed through Dawn Town before arriving in the Nation of Gold, he obtained the book and entered it. He didn't know much about the styles and appearances of people from different regions. Currently, the most valuable piece of information is how to avoid the front entrance after entering the giant king's court from Afternoon Town. It's through the waning forest and the barren tunnel. Audrey ended the guidance and walked back to Klein's and Leonard's side. "This is very useful for Little Sun and company's subsequent explorations." "Yes, we can tell him at the next gathering." Klein nodded. Just as he was about to suggest that they enter the book world's sea of collective subconscious through Grozel's dream, Audrey suddenly looked back and said in thought, "There's one detail that's illogical." Which detail? Leonard seriously recalled what he had seen and heard, but he didn't find anything suspicious. Justice Audrey glanced at the world and said, "In the matter regarding how giant King Ormer's father and mother are buried in the waning forest, the rule that only the ancient god can enter is illogical." Klein didn't notice that there was something wrong with that detail, but after Miss Justice mentioned it, he immediately had some ideas. He deliberated and said, "The father and mother of the giant king are equivalent to the ancestors of the giants. Normally speaking, they should be consecrated by the entire race. That's right. Regardless of the race, they'll have some level of worship towards their ancestor. The giants are no exception. From Grozel's dream, the keepers often make sacrifices to the ancestors outside the waning forest." Audrey nodded in agreement. If there aren't any other factors of influence, the giant king should occasionally organize things and make it a point to honor their ancestors instead of making it a rule that only he can enter. Perhaps the waning forest contains immense danger. Aren't the oldest giants crazy, violent, and irrational? After their death, their corpses have corrupted the environment and affected the entire forest. It's not something that can't be understood. Leonard gave his opinion. Audrey and Klein shook their heads at the same time, denying the statement. If it's only danger or corruption, giant Queen Omabella and the god of Dawn Badhile can clearly withstand that. With the help of the giant king, there are almost no problems. Yet, they are also forbidden from entering the waning forest, even with the ancient god by their side. Klein simply explained his thoughts and guesses. Perhaps what's buried inside isn't giant King Ormer's parents. There might be some other secret. That's more likely the case. Audrey nodded seriously. She wore a silver mask, and her green eyes darted around slightly, faintly revealing a hint of curiosity. If that's the case, what would a secret that can't be known to his wife, child, subsidiary gods, or fellow members of the same race be? That's quite interesting. Leonard smiled as he allowed his thoughts to wander. After another round of discussion, the three of them made use of the time to enter the giant king's court through the barren tunnel and enter the place that was frozen amidst the sunset. According to Klein's experience, this was actually the path to the borders of Grozel's dream. This time, there was no need for him to activate creeping hunger and use the strength of a zombie to open the heavy door to the giant guard's quarters. Audrey directly influenced the dream and made the door flutter open like a piece of paper. Due to the unshadowed crucifix, Klein was unable to wear the human-skinned glove. Outside the door was a hazy world. There was no longer the scene of the giant king's court ahead of them, but a cliff. After a brief exchange of the various situations that could occur in the sea of collective subconscious, Audrey made a staircase appear on the edge of the cliff. The staircase spun around, sinking deep into the dark, hazy, silent, and bottomless mind world. The three of them didn't delay as they stepped onto the staircase and walked down. In this lonely environment that could drive one crazy, Audrey used placate a few times every time they traveled a certain distance. This wasn't only to placate Klein, Leonard, and herself, but it was also to placate the grayish-white Cliff Grozel's subconscious. It was to prevent him from causing a stir that would contaminate their astral projection and body of heart and mind. The countless rotting giant palms that Klein encountered the last time didn't appear. Even the most unbearable feelings of loneliness, silence, and being infinite didn't feel that terrifying thanks to being able to speak to each other. This is the mind world. The domain of consciousness is indeed different from the others. Leonard looked around as though he wanted to use a few poems to express his feelings, but he eventually chose to give up. If it were any other mission elsewhere, Klein might have asked his dear poet to remain quiet. But here, he felt that it was good for him to say anything. Audrey didn't reject the exchange as she said seriously, "That's the essence of the environment that we can sense. The cliffs, precipices, and the hazy world are a reflection of our subconscious. If it were another race, it might not be like that. I now find psychology rather interesting," Leonard said with interest after hearing that. Klein glanced at him and resisted the urge to say that, with his personality and habits, he really wasn't suited to the spectator pathway. In this exchange, the three of them lost track of time until they finally stepped onto the solid but hazy ground. Looking upwards, they could see the undulating shadows. They overlapped and formed an illusory sea. Klein, Leonard, and Audrey were about to walk forward when a water spout suddenly surged over. A rather blurry figure stood up from within. It was a grayish-blue giant that was 6 to 7 meters tall. His chest was covered with dragon scales, and there were all sorts of indescribable patterns, symbols, and labels that went beyond what one would consider a normal language. His single vertical eye was filled with blood vessels as it emitted a violent aura that couldn't be concealed. It had obvious hints of destruction in it as it gnawed on a bloody human leg. This was a demigod-level giant. He was a projection left in the sea of collective subconscious. Perhaps it was an actual encounter with a human or some other race's ancestor. Or perhaps it was something Grozel and the other giants had heard about. The moment he appeared, the madness spread towards Klein and company like a plague that could infect them. This was a world that directly came into contact with one's mind and consciousness. Chapter 1069. Under the Sea. The leg-gnawing giant, whose vertical eye was filled with blood-red threads, wasn't actually real. He was, in essence, a strong emotion produced by a particular living creature. The emotions that originated from having a deep impression had entered the subconscious. It spread from one's island of consciousness to the surrounding illusory sea, before slowly settling and forming a mark. It wasn't possible for all of its emotions and consciousness to ultimately settle down as the foundation. Most of them would be washed away with time by the seawater. Only extremely intense and repeated experiences would remain. And once it formed a mark, it would be a drop of water in the sea of collective subconscious, which would then affect living creatures of the same species in its surroundings. It would be a shared, ancient memory carved into one's pulse. Therefore, not only was the phantom image of the giant blurry, but it also had many mistakes caused by the subjective aspects of the mind. Normally, it wouldn't result in Leonard and Audrey being unable to look straight at it, confusing their spirituality and breaking down their minds. However, the madness that came with it, an extreme sense of horror that stemmed from an unknown person, seemed also real. It could contaminate every living creature's body of heart and mind, astral projection, and even soul body. This was the essence of the danger in the sea of collective subconscious. It didn't stem from the strength, level, and status itself, but from the emotions and feelings that were generated and imprinted there. Of course, if one were to encounter a mark left behind by a high-level creature or deity, they could directly see some type or multiple types of mythical creature forms. However, the result was definitely nothing rosy. One would either have a mental breakdown or go crazy. Otherwise, they would be completely contaminated by the deity or high-level creature's emotions and feelings. Their outcome would ultimately be completely unpredictable. All in all, in this sea of collective subconscious, the style of combat was different from the outside world. Sometimes, the more anxious one was at trying to destroy the illusory figure, the more likely one would be contaminated by their stirring emotions. It was precisely because of this that when Klein saw the 7-8-meter-tall, grayish-blue giant rush over, he immediately took the initiative to control his emotions. Then, he used illusion creation. The target of illusion creation was Leonard and Audrey. In the eyes of these two Sequence 5 Beyonders, those 2-3 tall giants no longer had the madness and violence that left one trembling from one's heart. Everything seemed normal and ordinary. Therefore, before those extreme feelings could truly contaminate them, Leonard and Audrey remained very calm, without showing any emotional fluctuations. Then, with one hand in his pocket, Leonard reached out with his right hand and slightly opened his mouth. Having become a spirit warlock, he originally wanted to use the first spirit, a terror banshee, that he sealed in his tooth with the help of the archbishop. It was a powerful spirit world creature with a beautiful face and rotting body. It had a pair of huge eagle wings and was good at draining the consciousness of others, injecting feelings of terror in them. However, he quickly remembered that not only was he in an astral projection form, but he had also been cleansed by the gray fog. How could there be other spirits still on him? He had no choice but to use a soul assurer's powers, turning his green eyes deep and quiet. The giant shadow instantly slowed down as if it was soothed. At this moment, Audrey calmly spread her arms wide and used placate. An invisible wind blew past, and the giant figure seemed to pause as it instantly weakened the contamination around it. During this process, Klein took out the bronze cross that had many sharp spikes. As he opened the bottle containing his blood, he poured a few drops onto it and solemnly said, "Light." Brilliant, pure, and flawless light burst out, and amidst Klein's fluttering black trench coat, the giant phantom was drowned by the light. The grayish-blue giant melted away almost immediately. One of the main powers of the unshadowed crucifix was to cleanse and purify lingering spiritual imprints. This was the reason why Klein brought this sealed artifact along. And when he used the cross from the ancient sun god, Klein dispelled the illusion, allowing the star Leonard and Justice Audrey to see the true appearance of the giant to enrich their experiences in such matters. Although it didn't even take a second before the giant phantom was drowned by the endless light, Audrey and Leonard still felt dizzy. An irresistible sense of fear surged from deep within their hearts, and they almost broke down. This state didn't last too long, as Audrey instinctively used placate to calm her emotions before treating Mr. Star and Mr. World's psychological problems one by one. How scary! Is this a giant at the demigod level? When the light dissipated, Audrey looked around and sighed. In that instant, She had a deeper understanding of the sentence. Do not look directly at God. Even at the saint level, the remnant impression a demigod leaves behind in a memory can't be seen directly, let alone a real deity. Leonard was also experienced. He laughed self-deprecatingly and said, Sequence 4 is indeed a qualitative change in life's natural order. However, that wasn't very scary. It wasn't as intense as when I was facing a pregnant woman. Is the essence of a poet to boast? At that time, you could still control yourself, but you were almost on the verge of breaking down just now. However, if Megos gave birth to that child, we would probably lose control and turn into monsters just by looking at her. As Klein lampooned Leonard, it stirred up some memories as he sighed poignantly. Was that pregnant lady a demigod? Audrey asked curiously. No, Leonard shook his head. But she was pregnant with an evil god's spawn. Is that so? Audrey didn't ask further. She knew very well that the adventure and exploration hadn't ended, and that wasting time wasn't an option. She then looked at Gehrman Sparrow, who was wearing a black trench coat and holding a bronze cross and small metal bottle, and said with a smile, Thank you for affecting our senses. Where should we go next? As an experienced spectator, it wasn't difficult to determine the fact that she had received Mr. World's help from making a comparison. Klein controlled himself from subconsciously furrowing his brows, and he looked around. Doesn't this sea of collective subconscious have a core region to it? No, Audrey shook her head seriously. Wherever there are living beings, there's a sea of subconscious. There's no such thing as someone who's more important and lofty. This illusory sea won't really stir, and the situations within the different areas will depend on their actual surroundings. We call it a precipitating effect. To put it simply, the sea of collective subconscious of Lone will be quite different from Intis, because it precipitates the strong emotions and feelings of generations of Loanese. In contrast, this will also affect the citizens of both countries, making them have different qualities and personalities to a certain extent. After explaining this a little, Audrey concluded, If that's the case, how can there be a general consensus of a core within the sea of collective subconscious? Klein nodded and asked thoughtfully, In other words, you can't give any effective suggestions on where to go? Mr. World is so direct. If it were another lady or gentleman with a more fragile heart, they would definitely be embarrassed and feel hurt. As the thought flashed through her mind, Audrey saw the World's pair of deep, brown eyes which were nearly black in color. They were in no way crazy or cold. Instead, they were calm and tranquil. Audrey instantly came to a realization. She realized that Mr. World was doing such things on purpose so that she could experience the various problems within the details of a joint operation, allowing her to gain more experience. Yes. She nodded frankly, not feeling embarrassed at all. Klein secretly nodded and looked at the star Leonard. Don't look at me. My expertise isn't in this strange sea of collective subconscious. Leonard immediately waved his hands. Compared to Miss Justice, having participated in countless operations, he knew that he shouldn't force it when he shouldn't. Then follow me. Klein looked away and moved the unshadowed crucifix which had turned bronze again to the hand holding the metal bottle, and he took out a gold coin. Ding! As the gold coin tumbled, he grabbed it without looking at the results. He looked in a direction and widened his stride. This is a divination technique. Audrey was enlightened. She looked at the World's serious and calm side profile, black trench coat, silk top hat, and bronze cross. For some reason, she felt like the other party was a preacher. Leonard suddenly recalled something from the past. It was the first case he had worked with Klein to find a kidnapped child. At that time, it was also a way for Klein to lead the way through divination. He had been beside him the entire time. Compared to his awkwardness before, it seems as if he had entered the mysterious world for more than 10 years now. Sigh, it's only been over a year. Leonard placed his hands in his pockets as he followed closely behind Klein. Audrey glanced at him and felt the change in his mood. Mr. Star and Mr. World not only know each other in real life, but they were probably rather close friends. Yes, they have at least met frequently in the past 1 to 2 years. As she made the judgment, she didn't slow down her steps. Combining what she had learned, she observed the surroundings and identified which spots might hide maelstrom and dangerous creatures. With her help, Klein's lead went very smoothly. It was nothing like how they had directly encountered a mark like the giant phantom. Occasionally, they would walk straight and turn at other times. After some time, the area before the trio suddenly opened up. In front of them was a huge crater in the deep sea. In the middle of the pit was an island-sized city. The foundation of the city was grayish-white in color, and on it were several 100-meter-tall magnificent stone columns. They either stood there on their own, or they held up majestic ancient palaces together. They were bizarre and magnificent, unlike something built by ordinary creatures. Although Audrey didn't know the city, an idea instantly appeared in her mind. City of Miracles, Liveseed. Chapter 1070, Maybe It's Real. Liveseed was a floating city that the dragon of imagination Anquelt imagined out of thin air. No matter what, It was a miracle, a divine miracle. It was even more magnificent than the giant king's court, more rugged and unique. Every stone pillar was nearly 100 meters tall, like a throne for the dragon to rest on. It was a city that left a deep, unforgettable impression just from hearing about it. Therefore, although Audrey had never actually seen the City of Miracles, she instantly made connections from witnessing the scene. Of course, one of the main reasons for knowing that was because she knew that Grozel's travels came from the dragon of imagination, Anquelt. As for Klein, as he had once divined the origins of Grozel's travels and had seen the real City of Miracles, the floating city, and now, he was sure that the island-sized city in the middle of the deep-sea crater was identical to Liveseed. All it lacked were the dragons that flew in every direction. Is this real, or is it a clone? Or is it a gathering of some special creature's subconscious in the book world? Klein was slightly surprised as he quickly analyzed the situation. According to his divination results and the contents of the dream from giant guardian Grozel and Elven songster Ciadas, he was certain that, when Grozel's travels was created, the City of Miracles Liveseed still existed. When it reached the giant king's court, the City of Miracles Liveseed still existed. When Grozel began his adventure, and when Ciadas was sucked into the book world, Liveseed still existed. If the City of Miracles Liveseed were to vanish, the various supernatural races wouldn't have any reaction. In other words, these facts were undeniable proof that the city in the middle of the deep-sea crater was unlikely to be Liveseed. But very quickly, Klein remembered something. That was the answer that Rhodes had once given him. Certain that it first appeared among the dragons, after the disappearance of the City of Miracles, Liveseed. This is interesting. What did the magic mirror rely on to confirm that Grozel's travels was the first to appear and to believe that it was after the disappearance of the City of Miracles Liveseed? It wasn't even able to see matters related to Zeradol, so how could it pry into the origins of an ancient god's possession? I originally used this conclusion to infer and consider things, but this point was completely overturned by my divination. I never expected. Klein observed the tall stone columns and magnificent city as many thoughts ran through his mind. Suddenly, he grasped onto an idea. The last owner of Grozel's travel was Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina, a member of the Church of Knowledge. They believe in the god of knowledge and wisdom. The god of knowledge and wisdom can almost be confirmed to be one of the kings of angels who served the ancient sun god, the angel of wisdom. And from the Church's history and the history of the Third Epoch, it's reasonable to suspect that the angel of wisdom is most likely the dragon of wisdom, Heraburgen. This was the dragon of imagination Anquelt's subsidiary god, a high-level member of the dragons. The appearance of Grozel's travels after the disappearance of the City of Miracles was thanks to the god of knowledge and wisdom passing it around through a certain method, which had convinced the magic mirror. If he really is a dragon of wisdom, it means that he was directly involved, and his level was already very high back then. His understanding of this matter definitely trumps the Grozel and Ciadas. But how do I explain the scene I divined above the gray fog? Just recalling it now makes my head ache. What I saw was definitely the ancient god, dragon of imagination, himself. Klein cheered up when he managed to string up all these matters together, but he also fell into a state of puzzlement. He tossed the gold coin continuously and quickly came up with some theories. Since the City of Miracles, Liveseed, was imagined, couldn't it just be imagined again after it disappeared? The original Liveseed was stuffed into the book by the Dragon King Anquelt. Then, the one that subsequently existed was one he imagined again? This could fool all the dragons, but not the one that was known for being intelligent? If this were true, then there were actually two instances of the City of Miracles, Liveseed. The one here is the oldest one. But here comes the question. Why didn't the Dragon of Wisdom enter the book himself one? Even if he wasn't a spectator, with his title of being omniscient and omnipotent, he should have enough powers to perform a deeper exploration. He has actually been here a long time ago, but didn't alert any living beings in the book. Also, because of certain motives, he left this City of Miracles here. As thoughts surfaced in Klein's mind, the star Leonard, who had both hands in his pockets, looked at him and then at Miss Justice, who had also been looking down in silence for a long time. He took the initiative to speak and break the silence. This city is grand and magnificent. It clearly doesn't belong to humans or humanoid creatures, but there's no need to stare at it for so long. You're not an architect after all. Klein gathered his thoughts and glanced at Leonard. This might very well be Dragon of Imagination Anquelt's City of Miracles, Liveseed. In a sense, it's the divine kingdom of an ancient god. Of course, if there was really another Liveseed, the nature of the divine kingdom here didn't hold much importance. Divine kingdom. Leonard's pupils dilated as he repeated the keyword. Audrey regained her senses and whispered, "Is it really Liveseed?" "It's only possible." Klein had already calmed down and replied simply, "It's not floating in the air like the legends, but has sunk into the bottom of the sea of collective subconscious. so it's hard to tell if it's real or fake. At this moment, Leonard finally managed to control himself. He looked at the magnificent city in the deep-sea crater again and smiled self-deprecatingly. I didn't expect the day when I'll come to the divine kingdom of an ancient god. Frankly, if Miss Justice wasn't here, he wouldn't have been able to help but marvel at how rich Klein's life was. Ever since he reunited with his former teammate, not only did he meet the two sons of God, kings of angels, he had also entered the mysterious book world and found a city suspected to be a divine kingdom. This was many times more interesting than what he had experienced in the past year. The level of such matters was many times higher. Of course, it was a lot more dangerous. Having said that, he looked up at the floating seawater phantoms and asked thoughtfully, "How do you know if the sea of collective subconscious is real or if it's imagined?" This was a continuation of the problem of determining Liveseed's authenticity. Audrey thought for a while and said with uncertainty, "There's no way to tell the difference. Or rather, the sea of collective subconscious here is also real. In essence, collective subconscious is the accumulation and settling of strong emotions and feelings. Although the people in this world may be imaginary, their experiences, feelings, joy, anger, sadness, pain, and happiness, they all truly happened before." As she spoke, Audrey stopped as she vaguely realized something, but she was unable to say it out loud. At this moment, Klein suddenly said, "The objects that he can imagine will be conjured. The kingdom he dreams of will surely descend upon the physical world." As his voice echoed, Klein put away the gold coin in his hand and jumped into the deep-sea crater, his black trench coat flaring up as a result. The future that he declares will definitely be carried out, becoming reality. As his figure glided down, the following words came out. Audrey's green eyes were dazed, at first before they lit up. Then, she jumped towards the city of miracles. "Aren't you going to divine the level of danger? This might be the divine kingdom of an ancient god." Leonard looked at the two of them in surprise and blurted out. In the education he received, this wasn't in line with the standard operating procedures. "When did you get the wrong impression that I didn't divine it? You just didn't notice my tiny actions. I just put away the gold coin. Also, I didn't get any warnings from my intuition for danger. Furthermore, if my theory is right, then the dragon of wisdom Haraburgen should have entered this place before. If there's any form of danger that W had, it would have long been finished off by him. If Miss Justice wasn't here, I'd really wish to berate you." As Klein silently lampooned, he adjusted his direction and speed, passing through a few thick stone columns that stood nearly 100 meters tall. He descended one level after another before stepping onto the grayish-white ground. He was in a spirit-body state now and could fly if he wanted to. About 2 to 3 seconds later, the silver-masked Justice Audrey landed beside him. Audrey looked up, and after reeling from a few seconds of shock due to the grandeur of the stone columns and palace, she said, "Looking from the inside and looking from a distance feels completely different. Perhaps this is how a rat truly feels in Backland." As she spoke, Leonard also glided over and looked sideways at Klein. It wasn't that he didn't believe in Klein, nor was he unaware of how cautious he was. He just needed to clarify such matters in a joint operation, because there was the possibility of teammates being unknowingly corrupted, turning reckless. This was a conclusion the Nighthawks gleaned from their experience of repeated sacrifices. "Currently, the indications don't point to much danger," Klein said truthfully. Leonard no longer looked around and said, "The City of Miracles is really big. I mean that, for such a big city, even if we can fly, we won't be able to completely explore it without spending a few days here. Or perhaps, do you have a destination in mind?" The second half of his sentence was said while looking at Klein. Klein nodded and pointed to a huge palace that was more than 200 meters tall. "There, if I remember correctly, that is the Dragon of Imagination Anquelt's residence." This was what he saw in the dream divination. Seeing that Klein already had a plan, as if he had received Mr. Fool's guidance, Leonard felt relieved. He looked at the grayish-white foundation on his feet and said, "Is this a divine kingdom? I don't feel anything." At this moment, Audrey, who was observing the surroundings carefully, said with uncertainty, "All the abnormalities here seem to be gathering towards that palace." She was referring to the place that Klein had pointed out to be the ancient god's residence. Chapter 1071, Hall of Truth. In front of the grayish-white grand palace that was more than 200 meters tall, there were a few thick stone columns that were slightly shorter than it was, as though they were a squadron of soldiers standing at attention there. Klein could imagine that, when the City of Miracles, Liveseed, was still floating in midair, these stone columns would definitely have powerful dragons crouching on them. These were the servants of the ancient god. He then looked up at the open door and said to Leonard and Audrey, "Stay close to me. Once an accident happens, I'll immediately take you out of the book world and return directly above the gray fog." This was the main reason why Klein dared to explore the area. "Okay, Audrey and Leonard didn't try putting on a brave front as they walked to Klein's side and walked alongside him. Relying on their spirit body's flight ability, the trio passed the stairs and entered the palace through the exaggerated and magnificent door. The first thing they saw was a wide space that was enough for multiple dragons to roll around freely, as well as an ancient stone pillars that seemed to prop up the sky. On the two sides of the hall, there were colorful and beautiful murals. They kept extending forward and intertwining themselves with a huge pillar that was multiple arm spans wide. The giant pillar was in the deepest recesses of the hall right ahead of them. Without relying on anything else, just the pillar alone was enough to make people feel a strong sense of fear and make them experience the vicissitudes of time. It was like a fossilized deity. Almost instantly, a grayish-white figure appeared on the pillar. The figure was covered in scales, and every scale resembled a sturdy stone slab. Just the faint outline of the figure made it seem epic. Dragon of imagination, Anquelt. Just as this thought flashed through Klein's mind, he heard an oddly familiar voice echoing in the spacious hall. Dragon of imagination, Anquelt. As Klein looked around in astonishment, he heard Leonard sigh emotionally. The deep air listened round him as he rode, and all the low wind hardly breathed for fear. This fellow still has the mood to recite poetry. I wonder whose poem he's reciting. Klein turned to look at Leonard. Then, he heard an echo. This fellow still has the mood to recite poetry. I wonder whose poem he's reciting. At this moment, Leonard's expression was one of shock. He shut his mouth tightly and shook his head in denial. But the next second, a voice sounded beside him. I didn't recite anything. What's going on? Strange. At the same moment Klein had this thought, he realized that the strangely familiar voice belonged to him. As it echoed again, repeating the thoughts that flashed through Klein's mind. Then, Audrey's gentle and mumbling voice sounded. This hall is able to let our thoughts present themselves in our surroundings, and is even able to conjure them? When I saw that huge pillar just now, I was imagining what the dragon of imagination Anquelt looked like. It was based on the blueprint of the mind dragon I saw before. Why is whatever I'm saying? No. Indeed, the hall articulates it, so that's the case. Luckily, I didn't think of anything strange just now. Yes, reign in my thoughts, reign in my thoughts. Klein began to use cogitation to focus his mind and not let his imagination run wild. At the same time, the corresponding words echoed around him almost in sync. Reign in my thoughts, reign in my thoughts. So that's what Mr. World's inner world is like. He's like a child who just started school, constantly emphasizing matters that he needs to take attention of. Also, the image for his cogitation is actually layers of spherical lights. It's so beautiful. No, I'm not thinking of this. I'm not describing you like this. Mr. World, I understand. Serious thoughts kept appearing as she finally couldn't help but curl her lips. As for Leonard, the voices around him were already echoing with ha ha ha. These two fellows. No, why am I using fellow? Be polite, be more polite. As Klein listened to his thoughts, he sighed helplessly. This place is very suitable for playing truth or dare. Perhaps it should be called the Hall of Truth. What game is that? Audrey didn't need to open her mouth to express her doubts. It was probably invented by Emperor Roselle. I have to be careful not to think about things I shouldn't think about. Seriously, it's too difficult to reign in random thoughts without the use of cogitation, as Klein replied. He habitually warned himself, only to have the hall ruthlessly betray him again. This time, Audrey laughed and said, haha, Mr. World actually has such a side to him. I actually failed to read it in the past. Ha ha ha. To think you're experiencing such a day, Klein. No, what did I say? Leonard suddenly raised his right hand and covered his mouth. Unsurprisingly, he heard Miss Justice's question, Klein, and a certain someone's complaint. Perhaps only turning them into marionettes can stop these fellows from having wild thoughts. Wait, what was I thinking? Phew, calm down, calm down. Klein took a deep breath and began to focus his attention on the matter itself. Let's take a look at what the murals describe. In ancient times, murals were very important methods for recording memories. They often contained plenty of information. At the same time he made the suggestion, he heard Audrey's inner thoughts laugh and think. Klein, is this Mr. World's real name? No, don't think too much about it. Mr. World will be angry. No, I think it's more likely for him to feel embarrassed. No, this is all I's fault. Mr. World, please believe me. Phew, calm down. Calm down. Focus. Using the spectator pathway's ability to control her emotions and thoughts, Audrey gradually reined in her thoughts and cast her gaze on the mural on the right. Compared to them, Leonard's ability to control his mind was slightly weaker. There were still plenty of random thoughts resounding around him, turning into marionettes. Is this fellow that dangerous now? TSK, so this is what's truly on your mind. Haha, Miss Justice's reaction is very interesting. I haven't seen that fellow in such an embarrassing situation in a long time. When Klein and Audrey began seriously looking at the murals and were exchanging their thoughts through the stirrings in their hearts. Only then did Leonard gradually calm his thoughts and focus his attention. The mural on the right depicted historic developments. There was a scene of human construction, scenes of snow, covered plains, war and migration, various nations and cities, as well as towers and fruits that represented zero communication barriers. It was obvious that these murals started from the entrance and ended at the Dragon of Imagination's throne. Towards the end, Klein suddenly noticed a familiar figure. It was a gigantic dragon with bluish-blue eyes and ice crystal scales. It was the King of the North. You listen. The book world's development is based on these murals. As Klein's thoughts were exposed, he quickly looked back and found many blurry-faced adventurers hunting the frost dragon before opening a door to leave. The snow and ice melted before flourishing cities like Pesot appeared. They then discovered the weather turning cold, implying an end in which a new story was about to unfold. The contents of the murals will become reality in this book world. Audrey couldn't help but have such a thought. This mural looks very ordinary. It's not even as good as the works of street artists. As expected of the Dragon of Imagination's residents. Is this the power and authority of an ancient god? Leonard similarly had poignant thoughts. It's possible. Before Klein could give a more tactful reply, he heard his own voice. Let's look at the murals on the other side before putting everything together for analysis. Leonard and Audrey didn't object and followed him to the other side. During this process, they realized that even their spirit bodies couldn't fly in the palace. As the murals were huge, it didn't take much walking before the three of them could see the corresponding content. The first mural near the entrance made Klein's pupils suddenly dilate. In the mural, a giant with blurry looks, grayish-blue skin, and a single vertical was holding a hard-covered book in his hand. Klein heard his own shocked and hesitant voice. In the subsequent murals, the common highlight was the goatskin binding. There was a dark brown-covered book. It was obtained by the elves. The words on its surface changed. It was being put into a collection. It was obtained by different people, and it kept exchanging hands until it flew above the clouds and came to the cosmos, where it landed on a gigantic claw. In the next mural, the book seemed to have nothing to do with the scenes in front. It suddenly appeared over the surface of the sea and stayed inside a blurry ship. In the penultimate mural, it was taken away by a man wearing a top hat before he left that ship. The next mural was located behind the gigantic pillar suspected to be Dragon of Imagination Anqualt's throne. It depicted that the book from before met a classic quill. At this point, all the murals came to an end. 0-08. Leonard's shocked voice echoed in the hall. The Dragon of Imagination wants to create a set with the book and quill? What will happen? When dealing with Insangwell, this scene almost appeared. But ultimately, it didn't happen because the book landed in my hands before I sacrificed it to Mr. Fool. Otherwise, Adam was already prepared against it and deliberately provided some help. Oh right, previously while inside Grozel's travels, the moment the ascetic mentioned the Angel of Imagination Adam, the Frost Dragon attacked the camp. It was because the book itself didn't allow him to finish his sentence, or had Adam heard his thoughts, which became a connection for him to see and cast his gaze over, stirring up a certain reaction. Klein's thoughts wandered before sounding it out loud. During this process, he could only control himself to treat the fool as another existence. At the same time as he spoke, Audrey's thoughts appeared. The contents on this mural will become reality in the physical world. One adapted from Tennyson's Godiva. Chapter 1072, The Call from Behind the Door. The contents on this mural will become reality in the physical world. Be it Klein or Leonard, they couldn't help but repeat Miss Justice's words in their hearts. If the murals on the other side determine the history of the book world, then it was only considered rather amazing. However, the discovery on this side would be enough to shake everyone's hearts and bring about a huge upheaval throughout their bodies. The pictures you depicted would definitely show up on stage in the real world, not in an illusory world. This was the performance of a deity. It's not that exaggerated, right? After Leonard repeated the statement, he whispered in a low voice, finding it hard to accept. Klein, on the other hand, started his analysis out of habit. Even if 0-08 can only affect a big city, making it difficult for it to exceed this range, a sequence one author of the spectator pathway should be similar. And the visionary's uniqueness has been confirmed to be in Adam's hands. Then what does this city of miracles rely on to guarantee that the contents on this mural will become a reality? The divine power of the Dragon of Imagination from back then? When this book was formed, the contents of the murals had already been branded into the sea of collective subconscious, sinking right inside, and spreading its infection in every direction, so as to drive generation after generation to accomplish this without realizing it. If this is true, then the possibility of making another mural become a reality would definitely be nil. as the dragon of imagination has already perished, and there's no way to provide any more divine power. But we can give it a try? If the contents of the new mural really happens in the physical world, it means that this city of miracles really is live seed, and it contains a huge secret. It also implies that matters regarding the spectator pathway goes deeper than what I had imagined. Author, there's a potion name like that. Hearing Klein's thoughts, Leonard couldn't help but mutter. Compared to how the name, Dragon of Imagination, could be stretched to make an inference to the name, Visionary, the potion name of Author was more eye-catching. It made one's imagination run wild. It felt more like walking from reality and into the realm of fantasy. Audrey, who had long known the name of the high-sequence potions of the spectator pathway, suddenly had another thought. Uniqueness. Mr. World actually managed to link up and analyze so many things in an instant. Impressive. Did I praise him too directly? Mr. World has heard it all. This hall is really hard to adapt to. No, Mr. World, I really am praising you. I really mean it. Audrey felt a little ashamed at first, but then she quickly adjusted her state of mind, trying her best to keep calm. As expected of a psychiatrist, she adjusted herself really quickly. A thought came to Klein's mind. As expected, Mr. World isn't as cold as he looks. He's the type of person who will inwardly mutter to himself, I didn't say anything. Just as Audrey instinctively thought of something, she immediately denied it. The same voice echoed around Leonard. Klein's Gehrman Sparrow disguise isn't bad. Almost everyone who knows him believes that he's cold and crazy. Who would have thought? Just as Leonard's thoughts were about to wander, a voice interrupted him. Shut up. Looking at the way Gehrman Sparrow was dressed, he spread out his hands and held back his laughter as he said, Look, that isn't cold enough, right? Cold. Then I'll directly press the unshadowed crucifix against your head. If you don't want your Beyonder characteristic, donate it to the people who need it. Without being able to use cogitation to control his thoughts, Klein instinctively retorted. Audrey looked at Mr. World and then at Mr. Star, and her heart skipped a beat. So they have so much drama in their hearts. I could only tell that was the case. For Mr. Star, but I failed to read what's under the world's poker face. Giant, boss, mini. At crucial moments like this, the experienced Audrey forcibly manipulated her thoughts to begin reciting names so as to stop her thoughts from wandering off. Who are they? Leonard's attention was diverted. They're the hounds and horses my family rears, Audrey replied politely. A hound costs £450. Klein suddenly recalled Butler Walter's suggestion of buying a batch of hunting dogs when he purchased Mager Manor. Why is the first thing on Mr. World's mind the price? This question floated into Audrey's mind. Leonard pursed his lips. Even though he didn't say a word, he answered, Isn't this normal? This fellow has always been a little picky about this. I remember. Before he could finish, Klein coughed lightly and said, We'll continue exploring the other areas, and when we have time, we'll perform experiments on the murals. Sigh. This hall really complicates matters very easily. The main point is that everyone's privacy is brought to the forefront if we aren't focused. Upon hearing the last sentence of his complaint, Audrey and Leonard couldn't help but laugh out loud, but not by their own will. Seeing that Mr. World clearly didn't want the situation to develop into chaos again, Audrey raised her head, looked up at the ceiling, and focused her attention and got down to business. The mural on the right side controls the book world, and the left seems to affect reality. What if you draw the mural on the ceiling? What would happen? Klein immediately made a connection. The Dragon of Imagination's authority contains at least 3 aspects. An envisioned kingdom will descend upon the physical world, a declared future that will happen in the real world, and imagined objects that will be conjured. The first point corresponds to the right mural, and the second point corresponds to our guesses on the left mural. Then, could the blank spot on the palace's ceiling be related to the third authority? As long as you draw an object you imagined onto the ceiling, it will be conjured and be usable. Audrey easily understood what the world meant. Then what if I were to draw a dragon of imagination? Leonard suggested. Klein glanced at him again. First of all, you would have had to have seen the dragon of imagination without completely breaking down and losing control. Secondly, you need to restore the main details of his body. Finally, you have to know how to draw. I might not know how to now, but it doesn't mean that I can't in the future. I can hire a home tutor to teach me, Leonard grumbled in reply. And what does the main details refer to? His body structure, or the symbols and labels depicted from godhood? At this moment, Audrey pursed her lips and said, with a brisk tone, controlling herself so as to not burst out laughing, I can draw. This was the basic skill for a noble lady, and Audrey was quite talented in this aspect. Yeah, we can try it in the future when there's time. Klein nodded and walked towards the giant pillar right in front of the main hall. His plan for this expedition was to first gain a complete understanding of the situation before considering how to venture deeper. At the same time, he thought of something else because of Leonard's question, the symbols and labels from godhood. These contain plenty of mixed knowledge. It can even let people learn the corresponding potion formulas and beyond their powers after surviving the impact from witnessing it directly. Then, before the first blasphemy slate appeared, what would one obtain if they survived directly looking at a demigod or even an ancient god? There were no such things as potion formulas back then. Is it only through using a magic potion to advance one's mythical creature form step by step that the godhead aspect is able to contain this portion of knowledge? Or perhaps, after the potion formula appears, mythical creatures who used any method of advancement had the corresponding knowledge forged within them? If it's because of the two reasons I came up with, it means that the knowledge of godhood can change, and it can increase. Do angels of the Marauder pathway have the ability to alter such knowledge, or even delete them directly? Mr. World's considerations are so deep and profound. They involve very high levels. Audrey couldn't help but sigh. Leonard couldn't control the voice in his heart either. There's such a thing? I should ask old man when I return. This fellow sure knows a lot. It's not entirely a pretense when he's acting as Gehrman Sparrow. At least this sense of profoundness seems to belong to him. Thank you for your praise. Stop. With a small blood bottle in one hand and the unshadowed crucifix in the other, Klein forced himself to rein in his thoughts and cast his gaze at the ancient god's throne. They were in their spirit body forms now. Although they were unable to fly due to the restrictions from the main hall, their top speed was still much faster than their human form. It was only then that Klein realized that, behind the pillar that looked like the dragon of imagination's throne, there was a dark tunnel. I can't see anything. If only there was light. A thought subconsciously flashed through Audrey's mind. Then, in that tunnel, a pure and soft light shone out, illuminating the inside of the tunnel completely. Without needing to enter, Klein, Leonard, and Audrey saw a pair of double bronze doors at the deepest end of the tunnel. There were countless indescribable symbols covering the door, like countless chains that extended behind them, as if they were sealing something. It gave off a heavy and mysterious feeling. In the city of miracles of the dragons, in the residence of an ancient god, there was apparently a sealed door behind his throne. Almost at the same time, the three of them seemed to look through the bronze door and into the darkness inside. Following that, they heard the loud thumping of hearts. It was from their own heartbeats. Yet, they were in their spirit body states now, so there was no such thing as a heart. After that, the bronze-green color on the surface of the unshadowed crucifix slowly peeled off, revealing a corporeal body formed from pure light that emitted a sun-like glow. As for Klein, Audrey, and Leonard, they felt a baffling sense of coldness. It was as if every cell had their own sentience and wanted to form another self. In their illusory vision, in the darkness behind the bronze door, an eye opened. Its pupil was dark, filled with ghostly blue cracks. One after another, similar-looking eyes opened too. They were densely packed together and wore a cold gaze that stared intently at them. At this moment, Klein and the others seemed to hear a silent calling. It was an extremely attractive shout. Without any hesitation, Klein's spirit body burgeoned and enveloped Leonard and Audrey. He ended the summoning and returned above the gray fog. Chapter 1073, 3 Possibilities. As he returned to the world above the gray fog, Klein felt the coldness in his body rapidly dissipate. There were no more worms of spirit trying to give birth to new consciousnesses. A moment later, the mottled long bronze table appeared in front of him. He saw that Miss Justice and Leonard's spirit bodies were gradually becoming clearer amidst the thin gray fog, although they still maintained a certain blurriness to them. After the gray fog swirled around them and sank into the ground, Klein asked, "How are you feeling now?" He used Gehrman Sparrow's usual tone, but he immediately recalled how his inner grumblings, inner thoughts, habitual analysis, and him dissing Leonard had been exposed. He was no longer able to maintain his image in front of Miss Justice. It's all Leonard's fault. Sigh. As per the doctor's advice, not only did I not wear a thick mask this time, but I even removed the thin kind. This thought flashed in his mind unconsciously as he cut off his thoughts and warily glanced around. He still hadn't gotten rid of the fear of having his thoughts spoken out loud. Luckily, this was no longer the place that he had named the Hall of Truth. There were no more magical powers that he couldn't defend again via normal means. It was obvious that Audrey and Leonard also had a similar trauma due to their post-traumatic stress. One of them suddenly pursed her lips, while the other sat up straight, as though they had instinctively thought of something. After a few seconds of silence, they then remembered that the world had asked about their situation, so they quickly turned their attention back on the right track. I feel like something was being purified. I had the illusion that I would dissociate into a second personality. No, it wasn't a second personality. It seemed like a consciousness that didn't belong to me was awakening inside my body. Yes, it's now gone. Praise be to Mr. Fool. Audrey rather professionally did a psychoanalysis on herself before sincerely expressing her gratitude. I can openly accept such gratitude. That was a dangerous thought. Thankfully, Miss Justice's and Leonard's thoughts didn't steer towards the fool while inside the Hall of Truth. Otherwise, I'd definitely not be able to resist the urge to reply. That'd spell the end of me. My sense of shame will cause me to lose control on the spot, breaking down into a clump of worms of spirit. Klein's thought flashed as he seriously replied, "Praise be to Mr. Fool. Praise be to Mr. Fool." As a believer of the Evernight goddess, Leonard hesitantly echoed and quickly changed the topic. "There's nothing wrong with me too. Just now, I felt something calling me from behind the bronze door. What about you?" Seeing that Leonard had confirmed his condition, Klein placed the unshadowed crucifix and the metal bottle containing his blood onto the long, modeled table in front of him. "I felt the same way too," he answered with certainty. "Me too. It wasn't an illusion. I did an analysis on my own mind," Audrey said in a very clear and certain tone. Leonard held his chin and said, "What could that be?" It actually needed an ancient god to seal it behind his throne. After what had happened before, he felt that he no longer had much of an image in front of Miss Justice, so his posture became more casual. "We can try analyzing this." Audrey carefully glanced at the world. She had a deep impression of this gentleman's ability to gather information, make connections, complete an analysis, and infer the information in a short period of time. Klein thought for a moment and said without any inclinations, "There are only 3 possibilities. 1. It's a powerful creature from the second epoch of the real world. It's at least close to sequence 0, and the dragon of imagination Anquelt had sealed it behind his throne and beneath the City of Miracles live seat. However, I don't think that's very likely. This is because that ancient god definitely had his asterisk reasons for creating this book and stuffing live seed into it while affecting the book world and the real world. It's unlikely he would place an unpredictable element in here for prolonged periods of time. Yeah, we all know that we have to eliminate possible accidents. What's more, an ancient god." Audrey nodded slightly and began to discuss seriously with the world Gehrman. At this moment, Leonard chuckled and said, "Perhaps an ancient god like the Dragon of Imagination had seen certain scenes of the distant future and believes that the sealed item will help him achieve his goals? That's why I said that it's not impossible, but it's highly improbable," Klein replied calmly. "The second possibility is that the sealed item is key to the Dragon of Imagination Anquelt's ploy. Once this book and 0-08 meet, the seal will be released, and that object will return to the real world and bring about certain changes. I believe that this theory has the highest possibility. Amongst them, perhaps it also involves the Dragon of Wisdom's true attitude or intent. Then what could it be? Mr. Fool once said that, after Adam obtained 0-08, he is even closer to being divine. The times have changed as a result. Does this mean that Adam has gathered all the ingredients for visionary and is just short of the ritual? Is there anything wrong with my understanding?" Audrey shared her point of view. "I'm not sure either. I'll pray to Mr. Fool and see if I can get a clearer revelation." Klein didn't want to give a firm answer. Unfortunately, Old Man is an angel from the 4th epoch and doesn't know much about the 2nd epoch, but he isn't unfamiliar with Adam. The star Leonard thoughtfully said, "I'll try." He wanted to say that he would try investigating, but upon recalling that the two knew his secret, he gave up such thoughts and directly said, "Try asking Old Man. Sorry to trouble you." Audrey sincerely thanked him. From her point of view, this was a matter regarding the spectator pathway. The person most concerned about this was undoubtedly herself, while others were merely providing help. Then she said, "The third possibility is that there is some sort of object or monster sealed inside the book world? Yes, it might be closely related to the book world, and destroying it might cause the book world to collapse. Therefore, all Anquelt did was seal it." Klein shared his theory. Audrey thought for a while before saying, "I have an idea regarding this possibility." Seeing Mr. World and Mr. Star cast their gazes over, awaiting an answer, she slowed down her pace and said, "I'm considering it from a psychological perspective. Since that book world was created by Anquelt's envisioning it, the sea of collective subconscious there would definitely be formed as a result of him. It would have his psyche, emotions, and feelings branded into it. Perhaps the City of Miracles, live seed, seals the most extreme parts of these things. They're the trauma or fears of the Dragon of Imagination. Some terrifying matters from his one consciousness might be projected onto this brand. As long as he cannot defeat them, and if it hasn't been dealt with in the real world, the book world's sea of collective subconscious cannot be destroyed and can only be sealed. If it's ignored, they will slowly contaminate the sea of collective subconscious and make the development of history deviate from its intended path." Leonard was more focused than when he attended Red Glove's meetings. He couldn't help but mention when he had heard that, as an ancient god that ruled the sky and the mind, what could have left an irremovable trauma and create such an intense sense of fear? "I don't know." Audrey shook her head frankly. "If it's just a psychological analysis, since it's sealed under the throne and at the bottom of the City of Miracles, and is reached by a tunnel. It means that the source of the trauma and fear comes from underground. Therefore, the dragon of imagination sealed it. No, he isolated the mental projection coming from underground. Otherwise, why wouldn't it be beside the throne, in the depths of the hall, in a specially created jail, or somewhere else? Upon hearing Miss Justice's words, Klein instantly thought of what had happened to Miss Magician and Miss Judgment. According to the information provided by the Sanguine, they found an ancient castle of unknown age. At the bottom of the castle was a bronze door that seemed to seal something terrifying that came from underground. Once they approached the door or stayed in its vicinity for too long, they would be corrupted, dying a tragic death. It was an ancient castle that was built to defend against something unknown. It was originally guarded by humans from an unknown era. After the Sanguine discovered it, no one dared to enter. Back then, I thought that it might be related to devils, and that one needed to be a demigod in order to explore it. Could this be related to the seal and life seed? Klein's thoughts wandered as he quickly found the relevant information from his memories. On the way to the ruins of the Battle of the Gods on Catlia's future, he met a so-called deep-sea well. At that time, the future sailor, Nina, had dived to the bottom of the sea and did a series of investigations. She said that it wasn't a giant well. It was deep and dark, impossible for a human child to enter. The bottom couldn't be seen, and there were strange honeycombed signs of corrosion along the inner walls. Surrounding it were collapsed iron buildings. In a sense, this is also a tunnel that goes deep underground. Klein looked around and deliberated before saying, "Do you remember the matter Miss Magician mentioned? Under an abandoned castle in Delaire Forest, there is a pair of doors that seals a powerful corruptive force." All right, Audrey instantly recalled the past. Could it be that in the early days of the Second Epoch, in that ancient era, supernatural beings had some common, terrifying enemy that came from underground? Perhaps. Klein couldn't give an affirmative answer, so he took the opportunity to say, it might also be like the many predictions of the apocalypse which state that the danger comes from the cosmos. Yeah, Audrey and Leonard didn't know much about such matters, so they couldn't discuss this matter too deeply. Let's end it here for today. After we have a preliminary understanding of the situation, we will try to experiment on the murals. Also, remember to keep this a secret. Klein shot a look at Leonard and said, "Oh, after you return, pray to Mr. Fool and request that he be the witness to our vows to not divulge each other's secrets." Audrey didn't object and added, "I'll use hypnosis here to forget certain matters here to prevent myself from remembering it when I return." Chapter 1074, The Answer to Questions. After Audrey and Leonard left the gray fog, Klein didn't immediately return to the real world. He was still sitting on the high-back chair that belonged to the world, silent for more than 10 seconds. Then, he beckoned for an item. It was a heart that was the size of a child's fist, one that full of grayish-white wrinkles, a manipulator's Beyonder characteristic. Holding the Beyonder characteristic, Klein stood up and walked out of the majestic palace. He entered the depths of the mysterious space above the gray fog and arrived at the staircase of light that seemed to lead to a divine kingdom. Walking along the stairs, he walked up to the floating grayish-white clouds and stood in front of the strange door of light and the hanging transparent cocoons. Klein raised his right hand, lifting the brain-like, heart-like manipulator Beyonder characteristic to his chest and extended his spirituality, hoping to use it. He wanted to see if there were still any subconscious thoughts in the people inside the cocoons. He wanted to see if they had put together a miniature sea of collective subconscious. If that happened, he planned to use Vin Rambise's manipulator Beyonder characteristic to enter the consciousness and check on the psyche branding to figure out what the people who had been hanging above the door of light had experienced before their transmigration. He wanted to know if they sensed anything during that long slumber. This was the inspiration that the expedition today gave him. Of course, the Beyonder characteristic left behind by Vin Rambis might not be able to help Klein do what he wanted. It was because it hadn't been made into a mystical item, and it was very difficult to use effectively. In an instant, the grayish-white and wrinkled heart in Klein's hand started to beat slowly as it emitted thumping sounds. Klein then heard the synchronized heartbeats among the transparent cocoons. Thump, thump. This meant that the people inside were still alive, only in a certain state of slumber. In Klein's vision, their figures gradually evolved into several blurry islands beneath them. This represented their consciousness. However, these spiritual islands were also trapped within transparent cocoons, separating them from the prying eyes of the outside world. Similarly, they were unable to integrate and create a sea of collective subconscious. Unless the cocoon is destroyed, there's no way to bypass them and enter the corresponding mind world. Klein muttered to himself and lowered the hand holding the manipulator Beyonder characteristic. After a few seconds, he sighed deeply and turned around to leave. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall, with the silk blanket over her, Audrey, who was sleeping soundly with her eyes closed, suddenly opened her eyes. She then sat up, moved to the side of the bed, and prayed sincerely to Mr. Fool, asking him to witness her vow to secrecy. After she was done with this matter, she pulled a pillow over and placed it behind her waist, reminiscing over the experiences that she had yet to forget during the exploration. The history of ancient times is really interesting and terrifying. Mr. Starr's performance is similar to my usual observations of him. He's more carefree and casual, and his thoughts easily wander in an uncontrollable manner. Yet, there are matters where he shows his experience and acuity. He's rather reliable. This isn't a contradiction, as many people have such mixed layers to themselves. Mr. World is indeed a gentle person. He doesn't seem to wear much of an expression on his face, but he's secretly inwardly muttering something to himself all the time. His mental conversations with Mr. Starr can practically be adapted into a play. People call him a crazy adventurer who doesn't care about his surroundings, one that directly draws his gun to shoot when he sees a target. Well, at the last moment, I thought he would attempt to approach the bronze door, but in the end, he fled. No, he broke away so decisively. Audrey's lips slowly curled up when she thought of this. Then, she made a conclusion. The facts have proven that, in the mysterious world, unless one has completely lost all sense of rationality or has given up on thinking, there will not be any beyonders who will really do crazy things. One has to be careful and cautious, not seeing things that shouldn't be seen, and not hear things that shouldn't be heard. Audrey, you must remember this. 7 Pinsta Street. Leonard returned to his body. He quickly thought of how he should talk to Pallas Zoroast before pretending like nothing had happened and saying in a deep voice, "Old man, I have something to ask you." In his mind, Pallas' slightly aged voice immediately laughed. "You have to remember this. The more you ask, the more I can guess what you did tonight. It's not like there's anything that needs to be kept a secret," Leonard replied habitually before getting down to the main issue. "Old man, what do you know about the Amon's brother?" "That depends on what you want to know." Pallas Zoroast tossed the question back at Leonard. Leonard thought for a moment and said, "After Amon's brother obtained 0-08, is he only short of the ritual to become a god?" "Probably." Pallas didn't give an affirmative answer. Leonard wasn't too satisfied with this answer. Instead, he said, "I remember you mentioning it once. In the early stages of the Solomon Empire, the 2 kings of angels, Medici and Ouroboros, were quite scared of Amon and his brother. This means that they were already very close to being divine." This was something that Pallas had occasionally mentioned during their previous exchanges. This time, Leonard had confirmed it from some of Mobit's answers. I've only said the first half of the sentence. I didn't tell you that Amon and Adam are very close to being divine." Pallas rejected Leonard's claim. There are too many possibilities as to why Medici and Ouroboros are afraid. It's not just because he is close to being divine. It's not enough to make such a conclusion based on that. The sequence one angel cleared his throat and continued, "Them being close to being divine is one of the possibilities. Adam and Amon wield unique authorities, and them being hard to deal with is another possibility. For instance, you will always have no idea that Adam is sitting beside you. You have no idea if what you're doing was arranged by him, nor do you know that you're walking into his trap by your own volition." I'm referring to you, not me. Of course, I also have to be aware of such matters. Letting my guard down might result in terrible consequences for me too. As for Amon, he has many different ideas and has a do-it spirit, making it hard for people to guess his motives and be on guard against him. Besides, he is very good at deceit. There's always some conspiracy behind him. In that era, apart from the true deities, there was no one who wasn't afraid of him. Even true deities had to be wary of him. Otherwise, they might have certain authorities stolen by him at some point in time. Leonard nodded indecently and diverted the topic. "Old man, do you think the spectator pathway is hiding any secrets?" "I don't think there are any secrets below the level of angel. I'm not sure of anything above it," Pallas said after pondering for a few seconds. Without waiting for Leonard to respond, he hesitantly added, "I heard from Medici that high-level beyonders of the spectator pathway are the hardest to lose control or go crazy. But it's also the easiest to lose control and go crazy." "Why?" Leonard asked in surprise. Pallas Zoroast scoffed and said, "I have some guesses, but I lack the necessary evidence and logic behind them. I don't want to tell you for the time being. You actually don't have any ideas or theories, right?" Leonard habitually grumbled. "Don't try your little tricks in front of me." The slightly aged voice wasn't affected at all. Leonard didn't dare to ask further as he deliberated for a moment before saying, "Old man, I went to a real dream this time. There were quite a lot of psyche remnants of people from ancient times in it. Do you know a viscount named Mobit Zoroast?" "Mobit?" Pallas' voice suddenly aged significantly before returning to normal. "He's a direct descendant of my bloodline. He vanished after a large-scale war, and I thought that he had been killed by Amon or Jacob in passing. causing me to fail to divine the murderer. From the looks of it, things weren't that simple. Indeed. Leonard gave an affirmative answer. Then, he briefly provided the gist of things. He's been dead for some time, leaving some of his psyche behind. In that real dream, he married a songster from the elves. After listening quietly, Pallas said after a while, "That's good, too." Leonard had originally wanted to mention that Mobit also addressed Pallas as old man, but he suddenly couldn't bring himself to. He had no choice but to end the conversation there. After witnessing Leonard's and Audrey's vow, Klein returned to the real world. He tidied up the altar in the room, took out a pen and paper, and drew a complicated symbol that was a mixture of concealment and mystery prying. He wanted to summon a Rhodes to ask how it had confirmed that Grozel's travels had appeared after the disappearance of the City of Miracles, live seed. After waiting for more than 10 seconds, the full-body mirror in the room lit up with a faint aqueous light. Silver words appeared one after another in the dim light. Exalted, benevolent, great master, your puny, loyal, and humble servant, a Rhodes, is here to answer your summoning. Do you have any orders for me? Some questions. After giving his answer, Klein was in no hurry to ask about the matter regarding Grozel's travels, intending to start with something that wasn't very sensitive first. He thought and said, "A Rhodes, there's an abandoned castle in Delaire Forest. In the depths of it is a pair of bronze doors. It seems to be sealing some power coming from underground. Do you know what it is?" The moment he finished speaking, the light on the full-body mirror's surface suddenly dimmed and turned pitch black. In the pitch blackness, white, liquefied words appeared one after another. "I came from underground." Chapter 1075, no response. I came from underground. Looking at the ghastly white words that appeared on the full-body mirror, a chill suddenly ran down Klein's back. His pupils dilated as he instinctively wanted to switch places with his marionette next door. In the room where the valet was, Inuni, who was lying quietly, had opened his eyes. His stomach began to expand and contract as though he had a second heart, one that beat extremely slowly. At the same time, the scene of the magic mirror, a Rhodes, answering where it came from flashed through Klein's mind. Large amounts of black sticky liquid spewed out from an underground hole, writhing and expanding. An uneven number of hands and legs that turned into numerous monsters grew out. During this process, a speck of light was shot out along with the black liquid before landing on a rock, to which it rapidly fused together, turning into a mirror with ancient patterns and black gems adorning its two sides, a Rhodes's main form. It really came from underground. And this underground is the same as the underground area sealed by the bronze door inside the ancient abandoned castle. I didn't make the connection before. It's not like I could help it. There are just too many things that involve things from underground. Most of them have little special meaning, just like coal. A few days ago, I didn't think that there was anything overly special with the underground. Klein controlled the urge within him and ignored the shock from Rhodes's answer. And he said with an unperturbed expression, "What's the exact situation?" The ghastly pale words changed and gave off a baffling feeling, as though it was almost crying. "Great master, I'm not exactly sure what happened. I only came to the surface and became a mirror before I gained true sentience. I don't remember anything from before. Oh yeah, there's something that might be related. Do you want to hear it? Speak." Seeing that Rhodes's attitude was still all right, Klein heaved a sigh of relief. The color of the words on the full-body mirror's surface had slightly recovered, and it became somewhat pure white. "Didn't I say it before? I see support and dominance from you. And other than that special calling, I have similar feelings towards the underground. It makes me feel warm and makes me want to return to submit myself. This might be why I became your servant." "What? The things from underground give people the same feeling as the gray fog? They all involve support and dominance." Upon seeing Rhodes's answer, Klein jumped in fright once again. If not for his clown's ability, he would have lost his composure. At that moment, he suddenly recalled a Chinese joke he had seen in his previous life and substituted himself into it. "What? The things that the ancient gods fear come from underground? What? Rhodes also comes from underground? What? I also come from underground. This is really funny and scary. No, this might not be a joke. The original owner of the mysterious space above the gray fog, the creator of that strange door of light, the existence that pulled all the transmigrators over, might be related to the underground, or he has all kinds of connections with it." Klein's thoughts wandered as he instantly thought of many matters. As an indescribable shadow loomed over him, he smiled and mocked himself. No matter what, there are new clues and directions for the investigation into the gray fog and transmigration. Klein composed himself and asked in deliberation, "What do the churches and secret organizations know about the underground objects that require sealing?" On the full-length mirror, the white words returned to its silver color. "It's almost unheard of. It seems to be concealed by some sort of power. Isn't that concealment?" Klein frowned slightly and didn't say a word. The silver words on the mirror continued to appear. However, there are some legends that exist within a group of secret organizations. According to the legends, the underground is described as the lair of devils and evil spirits, the source of humanity's decadence, the primordial sins, and evil. The first one is wrong. The underground object that needs to be sealed has a high chance of having nothing to do with devils or evil spirits. Legends are actually similar to the mysterious symbols. Don't look at what is said, but peel off its outer skin and figure out what it symbolizes. This symbolizes the fear of the underground, from the body to the spirit, from one's consciousness to one's feelings. Klein's thoughts raced as he said with a nod, "It's your turn to ask a question. Great Master, your loyal servant, Rhodes, has a small suggestion. Do you want to hear it?" Silver words appeared on the full-body mirror one after another. "Speak." Klein could vaguely guess what Rhodes was suggesting. "Before you return to being divine, try not to investigate anything related to being sealed underground." The silver words quickly squirmed, reforming into a new sentence. As expected, Klein sighed and calmly said, "Next question. How did you confirm that Grozel's travels appeared after the disappearance of the City of Miracles, Liveseed?" The words on the surface of the mirror quickly distorted, merging into a clump, and then quickly dispersing. "It's a revelation and information obtained from the spirit world, since it originated from the dragon's subsidiary god, the Dragon of Wisdom. Your loyal servant believes that it can be confirmed." "Great Master, is there a problem with that?" "How direct?" After sighing, Klein instantly thought of how the Dragon of Wisdom, Heraburgen, should have entered the book world before and approached the bronze door behind the ancient god's throne, likely having some knowledge of what was sealed underground due to his omniscience. Furthermore, Klein believed that the ancient dragon had hidden a deeper layer of secrets in Grozel's travels. He could vaguely grasp it, but he couldn't tell what it was and grasp at it. "No," Klein answered Rhodes's question. Then, he probed, "Why didn't you mention the Dragon of Wisdom's true name?" "It's because I don't dare to directly give the name of a god." Rhodes gave a confirmed answer in a tacit manner. Klein nodded and didn't ask further. "It's your turn. Great Master, do you have any more questions?" The silver word rapidly reorganized itself on the slightly dark mirror. "No, that's all for today." Klein shook his head. With that said, he remembered what had happened the previous time and added, "I'll summon you again when there are new questions." The full-body mirror immediately brightened, and the silver words sparkled. "Yes, Master. Your loyal and strong servant, Rhodes, is waiting for you to call again." This time, it wasn't a simple drawing but a white cat's paw with a red center. "There's always something new." The corner of Klein's mouth twitched slightly as he watched the full-body mirror the bedroom return to normal. He stood in the darkness, bathed in the crimson moonlight shining through the curtains. After standing quietly for a while, he returned to his bed and quickly fell asleep with the help of cogitation. The next morning, on Monday morning, Klein woke up 15 minutes earlier than usual. He led his valet, Nuni, down to the first floor and said to butler Walter, "I had a nightmare last night. I want to visit the cathedral before breakfast." Although butler Walter was surprised by this, it wasn't too strange. After all, as long as the cathedral's doors were open, people could enter at any time. He quickly arranged for a carriage and sent Dwayne Dantes all the way to the door. When Klein arrived at St. Samuel Cathedral, the door wasn't opened yet. He waited until 8 before entering the main hall with the first batch of believers. He found a seat in the first few pews and sat down facing the dark sacred emblem. Closing his eyes in the tranquil environment, he focused on chanting the goddess's honorific name in ancient Hermes, the Evemite goddess who stands higher than the cosmos and more eternal than eternity. "You are also the Lady of Crimson, the Mother of Concealment, the Empress of Misfortune and Horror, Mistress of Repose and Silence." After he finished reciting the honorific name, he changed to his normal lone language and said almost soundlessly, "There's an ancient castle in the middle of Delaire Forest. There's an ancient bronze door deep within it. It's sealing a powerful corruptive force. How should I eliminate this latent problem there?" This wasn't a test of a deity, but an open report. As for what reaction the church would have after that, and what they would see through their operations, was a whole other matter. After repeating it 7 times, he began to pray seriously. Time passed. In the quiet and peaceful church, Klein stood up and walked out of St. Samuel Cathedral with his valet, Nuni. During this process, he didn't receive any revelations, nor did he see the matron of the Evernight cloister, Ariana. The feedback itself meant something. That was he wasn't qualified to know about the underground seal. East Borough, in a 2-bedroom apartment. Furs pulled up the blanket and covered her head. She abhorred the curtains here because they were too thin and translucent and couldn't block out the morning sun. That seriously affected her quality of sleep. "I have to change it. No, we might have to move again soon." Just as Furz's thoughts wandered about, she heard the sound of the bedroom door opening and Zio's familiar gate. In a flash, her blanket disappeared and a letter landed on her. Your letter, from Pritz Harbor, Zio informed her. Teacher's reply. Fur sat up suddenly, opened the letter, and quickly read it. After a moment of silence, she said, I have to go out for a while. My teacher has already reached Backlund. This letter should have arrived 2 days ago. The letter had a date and address. The postman over here isn't that responsible. Zio glanced at her friend and said, Will you be late? Fortunately, teacher said that he would wait 3 days for me. Furs hurriedly got off the bed and started changing her clothes. She had a feeling that she would be able to understand the Abraham family more deeply this time, and also receive the potion formula of Traveler and some Beyonder ingredients.